Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Ichigo got married with Ravel and Akeno? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the KurosakiLucifer for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. Let's start this video. Lucifer felt the life drain out of him as he lay down on the ground bleeding to death. But that wasn't all, he could also feel his soul being absorbed into the ground below him. He knew what was happening, he was about to become a scared gear, well, a part of his soul that is. But as the demon looked to the sky, watching as his devils clashed with the angels and fallen angels, none knew about him bleeding out below them. Only one thing was on his mind, a dream he had recently. One is a human teenage boy with orange hair and tremendous power. He watched as this mortal stood and fought enemies greater than himself. However, what held the devil's attention was the part of the dream where the teen had hell itself accept him and gave the mortal power that rivaled him, the first demon. Something inside of him told Lucifer this orange-haired mortal will obtain powers none other could obtain. He then remembered a woman he fell in love with long ago when he went to visit the human world. A beauty that had auburn hair and blue eyes. It was centuries ago since he last saw her, and the reason why she caught his attention was because of her interesting power. The devil smiled a small smile from the memory, he then closed his eyes, feeling the rest of his soul being absorbed into the ground. As he felt him fade, Lucifer, the first demon, remembered the girl's family name. Kurosaki. He said to himself, and at that moment the demons fighting over him felt their great Mau's death. However, little did Lucifer know was that a certain orange-haired teen was watching his own life go by. From his life as an angel to his great fall, and finally to this very moment. What is this and why am I seeing this? The orange-haired teen said to himself as he watched the silver-haired man fall. But before he could watch anymore, he felt himself being pulled out, and as a familiar voice spoke, bringing him back to reality. Karakura town. Ichigo's eyes flew open when he felt himself return to his body after being pulled out of the dream. The former Shinigami quickly took in his surroundings. The Shoten. He said to himself, recognizing the table his head was laying on and the colored walls. However, he was quickly taken from his looking by the voice speaking again, and he quickly felt a hand making its way to his head. Yo Dumbus, it's time to wake up. Without thinking, Ichigo stopped the hand by grabbing the owner's wrist. Slowly he looked to the owner of the voice and hand to find Tatsuki standing there with a worried and annoyed look. He would never really tell her this, but the orange-haired teen owed a lot to his black-haired friend. Ever since he lost his powers and woke up in his room, his former comrades and friends all but abandoned him. He would later find out the reason why by Kisuke, Yuruchi, and Tatsuki. From what the trio told him, everyone was ordered by the Central 46 to leave him alone and allow him to recover. At first, Ichigo refused to believe it, saying that Uruchad and Orihime wouldn't do that. Saying that they have broken countless orders. But as time went on, Ichigo realized that they were being honest. None of them would interact with him. Whenever he went to join them during their school breaks, they would claim that they had things to do and leave, or more commonly they would just remain in utter silence. And as the days turned into weeks, as weeks turned into months, and as months turned into a year, Ichigo almost found it impossible to hide his anger and disappointment at them. However, the only people that refused to follow the old man's orders were Kisuke Urahara, Yuruchi Shihoin, his sisters, and the girl he was currently looking at. And if he was to be honest, the orange-haired teen wouldn't know what to do if they also abandoned him. Unknowingly to the former Shinigami, he allowed his mask, a mask he had since the first month of his friends abandoning him, to break. Allowing his anger and sadness to flow out of him. Making the worry look on Tatsuki's face grow. Ichigo. The named teen looked up to her. Are you okay? You have been spacing out a lot recently and your mask is down. Ichigo allowed a small smile to adorn his face, and he slowly released his hold on his only friend's wrist. I'm fine, Tatsuki, just remembering sour memories and recent dreams I've been having. He answered honestly. The dark-haired girl nodded slowly, understanding what he meant. Ichigo then looked at the work he was working on before he had the dream. Releasing a sigh, he grabbed his pencil and went back to working on the homework he was given, also noticing his best friend doing the same. However, before he could even start, Ichigo felt a pair of arms wrap around him as hands covered his eyes and a familiar sensation on the back of his head. Without even looking, the teen knew who it was. Welcome back, Yuruchi. He said with a small smile. Even though he couldn't see her, Ichigo could imagine the pout on his second teacher's face. How did you know it was me? The flash goddess asked out loud, even though she already knew the answer. Ichigo went to respond as his vision came back as Yuruchi moved her hands but kept her arms around him. But before he could speak, Tatsuki spoke up. Probably because you do it all the time and because you practically always have to shove your to his head. The raven-haired teen pretty much screamed as she crossed her arms under her bosom and puffed out her chest. The former Shinigami smiled and blocked out the sounds of the other members in the room, already knowing where this was going. This wasn't the first time this happened and nor would it be the last. Ichigo then looked back to his homework. Normally he would have fought Yuruchi to let go of him, however, he has gotten used to her doing it, he barely even bothered anymore. It was until 5 minutes the two stopped their bickering and took notice of the smiling orange-haired teen, who was finishing up his homework. Both females both smiled at the sight, knowing that a smile from the male was rare. Yuruchi then laid her chin down on her prized student's head and relaxed, and for Tatsuki, she looked back to her homework, but as she did, the raven black-haired teen kept a smile on her face, happy to see her best friend smiling. The three then remained quiet as the two teens finished their homework, and as they were doing that the goddess of Flash was relaxing. However, what they didn't notice was the sound of the store's bell going off, signaling that people had entered hoping to buy things. But unluckily for them, the people that entered were three very familiar faces. The three then lost their focus as the room's sliding door opened. All three looked to see who it was, and immediately the two females in the room glared at the unwanted guests, and as Ichigo brought back his cold mask. The unwanted guests were Ryuchat and Orihime. All wearing their uniforms, and their eyes were everywhere but on the orange-haired teen. Tatsuki then noticed movement from her best friend and watched as he started packing his things. The black-haired female went to speak but was interrupted by said teen. "Don't bother. I already finished everything," Ichigo said, standing up and grabbing his school bag as he moved to the exit. Only looking back to look at the two people in the room. "I'll see you tomorrow, Tatsuki, and you, Yuruchi." Tatsuki nodded and watched as the former Shinigami walked past the three guests. However, before he could leave, the boxer noticed something Ichigo forgot. Grabbing it, she called out to him, making him stop. "You almost forgot this." She tossed the item to him. The orange-haired teen caught it without a problem, and he immediately knew what it was. Looking down, he saw the wooden badge he was given by the 13th Division captain, and the already big scowl grew. "I thought I threw you away." He snarled at himself, looking at the skull on the wooden badge. Ichigo looked up and passed his former friends. "Thanks," he said to his only real friend, who nodded. Without even looking at the three he once called friends, he exited the candy shop. Yuruchi watched as her prized student exited the candy shop, leaving her and Tatsuki with the traitors. She knew what Ichigo was thinking when her newest student tossed him the badge. The goddess of Flash has watched him multiple times throw it away since she and Kisuke sat him down and told him what the purpose of the badge was. But every time he did, it always ended up back in his possession. She already knew it was because of the SRDI having put a keto on it that made the damn thing repair in the boy's hands. Yuruchi snarled, thinking that even with all his powers gone, those scumbags were still trying to keep an eye on her student. The purple-haired Shinigami was taken from her thoughts by the voice of one of the three guests. The voice belonged to the sole Quincy of the group. "You should leave," however, before he could continue, a louder and pissed voice spoke out. "Shut the up, Ishida," Tatsuki shouted out, glaring at the bespectacled boy. The black-haired teen then got to her feet and went to stand in front of the Quincy. "You have no say on what I should or shouldn't do." This time the female boxer watched as her former best friend flinched and took a step away. But Tatsuki wasn't done with Uryu yet. "Even though you might be being with powers, I could still kick your ass." 4 eyes. The room was filled with silence as the two stared each other down. Everyone in the room knew that what Tatsuki said was true. She's probably the strongest normal girl in all of Japan. Yuruchi watched all of this without feeling anything. "It's about time they get what they deserve," she said to herself and watched as her newest student continued. However, as she watched Tatsuki and Uryu having a glaring contest, she noticed the unnoticed guest who was listening in. "When did you get there, Kisuke?" The silence was broken by the sweet voice of Orihime. "But he's being honest, Tatsuki." The girl stopped, already feeling the glare coming from her friend, and taking a deep breath she went to speak again. "We were ordered to la." She was interrupted by the powerless girl. "Orders. Orders." Tatsuki looked at the burnt orange-haired girl and started laughing, but that laughter stopped within seconds, and the room was once more filled with shouting from the boxer. "Don't spout bullshit on orders. When it came to Ichigo, nothing stopped him from saving you. Not even orders stopped him." Tatsuki then went to stand in front of Orihime and poked her in the chest. "If it wasn't for Ichigo, you would have been used and maybe killed if that Aizen guy got his way. But you didn't, and that is because of Ichigo, who went to save you even though he was ordered not to intervene or do anything, but that didn't stop him from risking his life to save you." Orihime stood there shocked at what the person in front of her said. But as she absorbed every word Tatsuki said, guilt and sadness filled her. However, her friend wasn't done yet as the black-haired girl then moved on to the bespectacled boy. "And you, Ishida. You wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for Ichigo. Also, you said you don't trust Shinigami, but you are listening to their damn orders. Wow, such a Quincy thing for you are." Her voice filled with sarcasm. Tatsuki watched as Uryu stared at her and she noticed a twitch of his eyebrow at her words. But like with Orihime, she wasn't done and looked to the gentle giant. For this, she went right up to him and poked at him. "And you? He was your best friend, he stood up for you and you fought hippies together, and when he needed you most, you upped and abandoned him." The female boxer saw the Mexican's brown eyes falter, even though they hid under his curly brown bangs. "And you wouldn't even have powers if it wasn't for him." Backing away, Tatsuki watched as all three of them looked to the ground. She didn't regret anything, it was about time they realized they ate up, and if she was to be honest, it was already too late for them to make it up with Ichigo. Turning around, the black-haired teen grabbed her things and started packing to leave. Once Tatsuki had everything ready, she went to leave the candy shop. However, she had one last thing to say before she leaves. So as she opened the sliding door and took a step outside, she spoke her farewell. "If I were you, don't try to apologize. You are late by 2 years practically, the only thing you might get from Ichigo is a cold shoulder." With that, the boxer closed the door and went to find her best friend. "How the hell does this thing keep coming back to me?" Ichigo snarled out as he looked down at the useless piece of wood. Well, useless to him that is, but not for those on the other side of the badge. Currently, the orange-haired teen was making his way home, however, he decided to make a small stop. That being the riverbank, the same one where his mother died. Ichigo knew what the badge was made for, how it was made to control him, and had ears on him 24/7. And if he was being honest, he would even say they were still listening. When Kisuke and Yoruichi first told him about it, he wished it wasn't true, he denied it, saying that they wouldn't do that. However, that left when they started pointing out things, like how his spiritual pressure was somehow always being controlled, and how whenever he was in a bit of trouble, Shinigami were on their way to help him. But in the end, he still denied it, saying that Rukia, his best friend and comrade, wouldn't do that. But as days turned to weeks and onward, with no sign of his Shinigami friends coming to Karakura town, he asked Yoruichi if they had any guests, and she always responded with a shake of her head and a sad look on her face. Ichigo's hope died out, and he came to the same conclusion as his human friends, they abandoned him when he needed them most. Ichigo stopped, feeling his anger going out of control, and looked to the running water. He looked back to the badge in his hands and felt frustration grow inside of him. Taking the badge in both of his hands and allowing his anger to take control, he clutched the badge, adding more and more pressure to the useless thing. "Why can't you just leave me alone?" he said to himself, and within a blink, the badge snapped in half. After noticing what happened, Ichigo tossed them into the running river. "Stay the hell away from me." Takamagahara. In the heavens of the Shinto, the goddess of the sun lay in her bed, disappointed and frustrated at her former army and how they treated her son. After everything her boy did for them, they never repaid him, and when he lost his powers, they up and abandoned him, leaving him with that pathetic badge, and doing so too only to monitor him. Amaterasu was so enraged that if it wasn't for her brothers, she would have stormed the Soul Society and set everything aflame, and just stood by and watched as they burned for what they did to her son. But thankfully Susanoo and Tsukiyomi were able to talk her out of it. For even if she wanted to burn them, the Shinigamis of Soul Society was a powerful army, and one they would need until they were able to find another. However, that didn't mean they didn't want the same. All the gods and goddesses of the Shinto were fond of the hybrid named Kurosaki Ichigo. He was everything Amaterasu planned him to be. As the goddess laid down, she felt a straight tear fall from her eye. Amaterasu knew there wouldn't be a sun in the sky of her home, there hasn't been one for 17 months, and as long as the Shinigamis were watching her son with that badge, the sun will not touch the skies of Takamagahara. But that all ended when she felt it, and even though it was minor, Amaterasu will always remember her son's power. Sitting up straight, the goddess of the sun formed a bright orange ball in her hands, and without much thought she tossed it into the air, thinking of the only person on her mind. "I'll be seeing you soon, my son." She finished with a smile, and all over Takamagahara, the residents celebrated with the sun once more. Sarate Captain's Assembly Hall. Captain Kuratsuchi. The booming voice of one Jinrikisai Shijikuni Yamamoto sounded around the room, making all the captains stand to attention. "Why is it that you have called this emergency meeting?" Everyone in the room looked to the captain of the 12th Division, and immediately they took notice of the annoyed and pissed look on the normally stoic captain. And when the man spoke, it was dripping in disappointment and anger. During the time of 1742, Japanese time zone, in Karakura town, Kurosaki Ichigo has gone rogue and has broken the substitute Shinigami tracking and monitoring badge. Any contact made with the Shinigami stationed in the town has come back negative. Mayuri finished with a snarl, something common when he is talking about a former captain and when it comes to his experiments being disturbed. The room was quiet as everyone absorbed the information the sadistic and mad captain said. Everyone has a different reaction to their fellow captains. The only captains that showed no real difference to the news were Captains Kichiki, Soifrong, Muguruma, and the captain commander himself. The war criminal was pissed that the brat destroyed the badge. He has finally discovered who and what the brat was, and the only thing he needed to confirm his suspicions was one more day of the badge being in the former Shinigamis position. Why is that of any importance, Captain Kuratsuchi? The newly reinstated captain of the 5th Division spoke up. If I'm to be correct, both Kisuke and Yoruichi told Ichigo about the true purpose of the useless thing. Shinji then crossed his arms. Also, I don't blame him. He was lied to, and after everything he did for you all, you gave him nothing but ordered his only visible and invisible friends to abandon him. The visored finished snarling the whole time. Shinji didn't agree with the plan of abandoning Ichigo, nor did Rose. However, when only 3 or 4 captains are going the rest, the odds were that the lesser were going to lose no matter what. The visored has also thought of leaving for a bit to see the orange-haired teen. However, he couldn't, for even if they tried he could always sense an Onmitsukan following him. So his plans for seeing Ichigo Kurosaki went out the window. Shinji was then taken from his thoughts from crackling laughter coming from the 12th Division captain. He also noticed everyone was looking towards the scientist. You want to know why it is important, Captain Hirako? The madman stopped and looked at the blonde-haired visored. I believe you know that the brat is abnormally powerful. But have you ever questioned why that is? No one answered the captain's question, however that didn't stop him from speaking, and this time he had a bigger grin on his face, completely different from what he was a few minutes ago. It's because of his parents. With that, everyone's attention was on the Pharaoh's winged captain. No one, minus Lieutenant Kichiki Rukia, ever saw the boy's older relatives. The only thing they knew was that his mother died when he was 9 and that his father was a clinic doctor. What are you getting at, Captain Kuratsuchi? The older white-haired captain asked for everyone in the room. Bayuri then finally stepped forward. I'm saying that the former substitute Shinigami Kurosaki Ichigo was never a normal human to begin with, and that the power Kichiki Rukia gave him was only the awakening and the beginning of what he might be able to accomplish. He finished with a grin and continued. Kurosaki Ichigo is a being that defies all logic in this world. He is a human that has all the powers in him. His father, a Shinigami captain, and his mother were Quincy, who had hollow powers. Kurosaki Ichigo was what Sasuke Aizen wanted to be. A true transcendent being. Karakura town. Ichigo watched as the water rippled from the 2 pieces of wood, and at the same time the orange-haired teen took deep breaths to calm himself. Then he was hit with throbbing pain. One that didn't come from pain but sadness. After everything he did for them, saving their asses and risking his life for them, the only thing they did to repay him was nothing. Ichigo closed his eyes, wanting his frustration to leave him. After a few minutes, the former Shinigami opened his eyes, feeling that he finally had control over his emotions. But once he opened them, he took a step back in surprise at what was in front of him. There in front of him was a bright orange ball floating at eye level. What the hell? He asked himself as he stood there looking at it. Ichigo was then overwhelmed with a feeling he hasn't felt for years. Mom? He said out loud as he reached out to it. But then he felt it. The orange-haired teen stopped as images of black-haired beauty with mismatched orange and red eyes and wearing a bright orange, red and white kimono flashed before his eyes. He then watched as memories he never remembered making flashed before his eyes. In all of them, the black-haired beauty was the most frequent, but there were many others. Most common being a man with black hair with smoke-gray eyes, wearing blue and gray samurai armor without a helmet. And the other was another man, but with long white hair being held back in a traditional Japanese man bun and wearing a white and gray kimono. Ichigo took a step back as dozens of images continued flooding his mind and as memories that he doesn't remember making flashed before his eyes. But in an instant, it all stopped and the orange-haired teen was looking at the orange orb. Placing a hand onto his head, Ichigo asked himself. Wow, what was that just now? What does this mean? Who were those people? Those were the questions that flooded his mind. Looking at the glowing orb, still asking himself those questions. Something told him he knew those people, but he has no memory of seeing them. Wanting to know who and what they were, Ichigo finally reached out and took the orb into his hand. Instantaneously a bright light surrounded the surrounding area. Not that far away, the Kurosaki twins were walking back home from school. Both girls were in their thoughts, and both were thinking about the same person. Their brother, the brother that protected them from when they were in danger or from perverts and scumbags when they tried to take a peek at them. The brother took care of them when their father was away or down in the weather. But recently Ichigo wasn't the same. Ever since the Shinigamis and his friends abandoned him, their older brother was never the same. And both sisters hated the Shinigamis for what they did. Without a thought, they abandoned the person that saved their world, and all they do is act like he never did any of that. Even Kuseki Rukia abandoned Ichigo, the person they liked and thought highly of, and what does she do? She does the same thing they all did. Throw Ichigo away like it was nothing. And don't get them started with Chad, Uryu, and Orihim. They all left their brother to the vultures. Yuzu and Karen will never forgive them for what they did. Never. However, thankfully a light came out of the darkness by Tatsuki and Urahara's ragtag gang of Shinigami. They didn't abandon Ichigo. Now and then the sisters would be surprised to see Ichigo inviting Tatsuki over for dinner or homework. And even more often the Shinigamis, in Gig Ace obviously, Urahara Kisuke and Shihin Yuruchi, would come by to cheer up the orange-haired teen. However, over the course of those days, the twins have finally acknowledged that whenever Yuruchi did her little pranks on their brother, the two girls were always filled with jealousy, and that after everything Ichigo did for them, the two have grown a crush over their older brother. The two were taken from their thoughts when a bright light made them close their eyes and look for the source of the light. That was when they saw the familiar orange hair of their older brother. Ichinai. The two said as the light faded, and once they looked back to where they saw their brother, Yuzu and Karen found the older sibling gone. The two then looked around to see where the orange-haired teen could have gone, but found nothing. Together the siblings went towards where their older brother stood. They reached the riverbank, they found nothing. That was until the older twin felt it, the residue of a familiar spiritual pressure. Instantaneously the black-haired girl went to take a better look around at her surroundings, and that was when she noticed the two pieces of wood floating by the bank. Karen? The younger twin asked with concern as she watched the older bend over to grab the two pieces of wood. Once Yuzu saw the two halves she placed a hand over her mouth. That is Ichinai's. Why is it here? Karen looked back at her twin and responded. I don't know why, but this must not be good. Turning around completely she dropped the broken badge and placed her free hands onto Yuzu's shoulders. Yuzu, I want you to go home and call the wizards. They are still Ichigo's friends and they are willing to help. The reason they have not been in contact with Ichinai is not because of the old man's orders, but because they wanted to get back in hiding. You can trust them. Their number should be in the notebook beside the phone. She said determined and watched as the younger of the two nodded, holding her hands to her chest. What about you? What will you do, Karen? Yuzu asked, worried for her brother's safety. The black-haired and more tomboyish twin dropped her hands and answered. I will go and inform Kisuke and Yuruchi. Out of everyone here that I know, they are the two that Karen would drop everything to help find Ichinai. She took her twin into a warm embrace and said to her, for Ichinai. Yuzu nodded and returned the hug, repeating. For Ichinai. The two then broke the hug, and after one final nod, the two ran in the opposite direction of each other. However, before they could go anywhere, two silhouettes over them, and in a flash, they vanish, and they both found themselves with a hand over their mouth. Unknowingly to the twins, just when they vanished, one large Zenkamen appeared where they once stood and exited the gate. 4 captains and 4 lieutenants stepped out of it. The named Shinigamis were Captain Soifun, Byakuya Kichiki, Toshiro Hitsugaya, Shinji Hirako, and for the lieutenants, there were Renji Abarai, Renjiku Matsumoto, Rukia Kichiki, and Momo Hinamori. All the Shinigamis looked around, noticing the residue of their target. The 2nd Division captain then spoke in an orderly voice. Split up and do not return until we have Kurosaki in our custody. The queen of the Shinto smiled brightly as she played with her son's sun-colored hair. It's been so long since she saw him in front of her. The last time was when he was still but a soul, a bright transparent soul that held so much hope and power. Amaterasu took a lock of her son's orange hair and took a better look at him. The only other times she saw him were from the videos or pictures she was giving. But with him in front of her, she was finally able to take in all of his features without a problem. Kurosaki Ichigo was extremely handsome, and that was all Amaterasu could say. A chiseled and refined face that held no fat of any sort, and slit and straight eyes that were currently closed, hiding 2 beautiful chocolate brown eyes, and to top it off was his abnormal orange hair, a trait she gave him when she was making his magnificent soul. His body was also well made, and through the year or so of him losing powers, he kept up with his exercises and training, for all that was under his uniform shirt was muscle. The goddess was taking form for her looking when she heard and felt movement and looked to her son's face, finding the chocolate brown she always wanted to see in person. Ichigo groaned as he opened his eyes to bright light. Where the hell am I? He asked himself, bringing a hand up to rub his eyes, and while doing it, he remembered what happened and how a bright light absorbed everything around him. Opening his eyes, he looked to find a beautiful smile and bright red and orange eyes looking at him. The owner of said smile and eyes had long black hair with a silver tiara that had a sun in the center. She was also wearing a crimson-red kimono that had an orange obi, a ruby-red abajam, and a sun-shaped abadome, and to top it all off was a scarlet-red hinari. Ichigo also noticed she had an ample bosom, which he could honestly say is a DT cup. But that the orange-haired teen closed his eyes and looked away, trying to hide the blush that was currently growing. Damn that feline shifter and gymnastic. He said to himself and asked with a stutter. Where am I? The woman didn't lose her smile and only laughed at his embarrassment. It's okay, my beloved son. She said, combing his hair. You are currently in Takamagahara, the home of your soul. She said, and Ichigo almost thought he saw the sky grow brighter as she smiled. Taking his attention away from the sky, Ichigo finally absorbed what she said. Takamagahara? He asked himself, and within a second he shot up from the comfortable pillow his head was laying on. Looking around with wide eyes, Ichigo found himself looking at a scene that almost matched the description he read about the place. Over a dozen floating islands, 17 all different in sizes and making the one he was currently on 18, a bright sky and an equally bright sun, and all of them were designed differently, but something they all had in common was the red Taurus and the sigil they had on them, and naming a few were a spear and pagoda. And to top it all off was a moon and star that was currently at the same height with the island he was on. He also bet that below them was a beautiful land full of snow-capped mountains, waterfalls, lakes, and little towns. It's beautiful, isn't it? The voice of the woman Nokami said. Looking towards her, Ichigo found her in the same position she was when he sat up. As he looked, the orange-haired teen realized where his head was, and a small blush appeared. Ever since I came from Izanagi, I always wished I was there when this place was made. Nodding slowly, he looked at the island he was currently on, and it was the greatest of them all. Whereas all the others had buildings that fit their purpose and duties, this island had a massive traditional Japanese mansion with white walls, red roofs, brown sliding doors, and a massive forest. Ichigo looked up to the torii and found sun on it. Yes, it is. He finally said as he snapped back to reality and looked towards the black-haired Kami. As the orange-haired teen looked, he couldn't help but think she was unequivocally beautiful. However, her eyes, the mixture of orange and red, made her so much more. Then it hit him, who it was in front of him and the person whose lap he thought was a pillow, and for the first time in his life, he realized how Eddie was. Shooting to his feet, he bowed a full 90 degrees bow. Please forgive me. I didn't know it was you. He shouted out, worried that he royally ate up. The response that he was giving wasn't what he expected, for instead of all the things he expected, Ichigo wasn't expecting laughter. My son, you need not apologize or worry. He watched as she stood up. I quite enjoyed it. Her smile grew once more and dusted herself off of non-existent dirt. Well, as you might have figured out, my name is Amaterasu, the goddess of the sun, queen of Takamagahara and the ruler of the Shinto religion. The goddess then looked into his eyes. And to you, my most beloved son. I am your mother. Amaterasu watched as her son blinked a few times, with a blush growing on his already red face. She knew it was from the thoughts he had of her, and the Ravenet didn't mind them, she actually wanted him to think those things. Yes, she made his soul to have the feeling of having a son, but she also made it so that when he came of age, she could be freed from these chains. What do you mean by that? The voice of the teen spoke, drawing her attention back to the present and away from the future. What did you mean I am your mother? My mother is Kurosaki Misaki. He said, his hand shaking lightly, but even though he tried to fight it, he could help the feeling of knowing what she said was true. The goddess placed a hand onto his cheek, smile still bright, and eyes shining. I will explain everything, my beloved. Removed the hand from his cheek. However, they want to see you, and they can sometimes be extremely impatient at times. With that, she placed two of her fingers onto his forehead and closed her eyes. The bright light then engulfed the two, and when Amaterasu opened her eyes, the goddess found her son looking at her with wide eyes that quickly rolled back, and within seconds he was falling towards her. Without a problem, she caught her slowly losing conscious son, his head landing on her as going back to kneeling and readjusting the unconscious orange-haired mortal, she placed his head back onto her lap. My son. You need not worry about a thing, for they have been waiting to meet you at last, and the other two just wished to see you once more. Amaterasu said, whispering to herself, once again playing with his orange hair. Karakura town. Both twins looked up to the people that we were placing a hand over their mouth, and once they saw them, both girls relaxed at seeing who it was. Standing over the older twin was Kisukirahara, who wasn't looking like his normal self, all carefree and lazy. Karen could see the seriousness in him as he looked in the direction of the riverbank and how his focus was on something else. And covering Yuzu's mouth was the beautiful flash goddess, whose eyes were currently looking down at her. Iruchi smiled down at Ichigo's youngest sister, and lifting a finger to her, she watched as the blonde nodded. Feeling satisfied, the Shinigami removed the hand over the girl's mouth. Immediately Yuzu spoke, but in a whisper. What's happening? Where is Ichinai? Did something bad happen? Why are you here? Iruchi was bombarded with questions, and every single one she answered, and at the end, the youngest Kurosaki was looking at her with wide and scared eyes. The former captain wouldn't blame her if the young teen started yelling. It was an honest reaction to such answers. Your brother is being hunted down by the Shinigamis. We are here to get you to safety and away from here. Etc. However, the 13-year-old didn't do such a thing. She only looked at her with wide eyes that quickly shrunk and nodded to her. Iruchi then decided to look towards her best friend and found him deep in thought. Thankfully he had released Karen and said the girl was currently looking around as if trying to find those that were looking for her older brother. The beauty was taken from her looking by movement from the scientist. "We need to get moving," he said, picking up the black-haired teen, who seemed to be fine with it. "They are on their way here and it seems they have found my shop missing." Isuke watched as the purple-haired woman nodded and picked the younger twin up and together they shunpooted away, leaving no traces of them being there. "Where are you Kurosaki Ichigo and Captain Shiba?" he said to himself as he made his way towards the riverbank to where Captain Soifrong and the other captains were. The young captain couldn't get his mind off what was revealed today during the captain's meeting. The being of all three races, everyone thought such a thing was impossible, but to believe there was one in front of us all along, he said to himself, trying to understand how such a thing was possible, and to top it all off, the man he looked up to was still alive and was the father of said being. Captain Hitsugaya. The voice of the captain leading this expectation in manhunt took the young captain from his inner thoughts. "What did you find?" she asked with an annoyed look. Remembering his mission, he told Captain Soifrong what he knew, even if it was something he knew she wouldn't like. "Urahara Shoten is gone," he said, getting everyone nearby attention. "Building, basement and all. It was as if it never existed," he finished. The area around them remained quiet as they took in the information, and everyone could see that the captain of the 2nd Division was about to blow a fuse at the news. However, before she could order or say anything, the sound of 3 uninvited guests appeared. "Perfect," the captain leading this manhunt said, crossing her arms. "Do any of you know where Kurosaki is?" she asked the group. Ashiro watched as the group of friends looked at each other. "No." The sound of the annoyed Quincy spoke up. "We have been doing as your head captain ordered us." The bespectacled teen walked up until he was looking down at the female captain. "We have been avoiding Kurosaki for the last 18 months. The captain of the 10th Division could feel the tension between the two and stepped forward. To make things short, the 4 humans looked at him, all knowing that what he said they could trust. "Captain Kuritsuchi has been monitoring Kurosaki for the last 18 months behind our backs, and only a few minutes ago that signal disappeared." Pointing to everyone here, he continued. "We are here to find him. I know that seeing 4 captains and lieutenants is confusing and such. But we also learned of something and we need to take him back to the Soul Society. Now if you can answer Captain Soifrong's question, that would make things easier for us." They all looked at him expecting an explanation, but it never came. Inoue was the one to speak for them all. Like Ishida-kun said, "We have been avoiding him since the captain commander ordered it from us." Toshiro nodded in thanks, however, she wasn't finished and spoke. "But Tatsuki might know." A sad look took over as she looked to the ground. "Ever since then they have grown close, and she would be the one who would know where he is." Nodding again, he went to ask where he could find Tatsuki. But it seems the Quincy of the 4 had other plans in mind. "What do you mean you learned something about Kurosaki?" he asked with suspicion in his eyes, which was understandable. "That is none of your business, Quincy." The captain of the 2nd Division spoke up, glaring at the bespectacled teen. "Now you can all leave. We don't need kids interrupting our business." All of them glared at the short woman but nodded, not wanting to get in a conflict with the woman. However, Toshiro knew they weren't done, and it was proven when he saw them making their way to Lieutenant Kichiki, who hasn't been acting normal since she was given news of Kurosaki's situation. However, he needed to focus on finding this Tatsuki and hopefully learn where the orange-haired war hero was. So turning around, he followed Soifrong, hoping that his friend was safe. Hakamagahara. "So what is going to happen to him?" Amaterasu heard Tsukiyomi ask. However, she wasn't paying attention to her brothers. What had her attention for the last few hours was the unconscious boy laying on the bed she was currently kneeling on and offering her lap to. It's been 2.5 hours since her son fell unconscious and into the lands of his Mindscape. Since then he hasn't made a move, minus the rise and falling of his chest. And to be honest, the sight made the goddess feel pain. "My beloved son," she said to herself, well, moving a lock of his hair away from his closed eyes. "Defenseless. Weak. Vulnerable." Amaterasu then reached over and placed a hand over his heart, feeling the normal and rhythmic beating of his heart. Something he should never be. "Sister," Susanoo said with frustration in his voice, and thankful to the 2 brothers, the goddess of the sun finally looked to them. "What are we going to do? The SS will be looking for him, and sooner or later Kisukirahara will be at our doorsteps asking questions." Amaterasu nodded, knowing that it was time to get to business, so without much thinking she slowly got up, placing the orange-haired teen's head onto his pillow, gently, not wanting to disturb him. In a flash, her current wear was gone, and now she was wearing a more regal dress, one that was fitting her position and power. "Nothing will happen to Ichigo Kurosaki until he wakes up," she said, making her way out of the room followed by her siblings. "For anyone that comes for him, send them away, everyone but Kisukirahara. If he shows up, let him in." The two nodded and left their separate ways, leaving the leader of their faith to head towards her throne room, where she had two handmaidens waiting for her and news of the orange-haired teen. As she got closer to the grand room, the doors slid open at her presence, showing the bright room and the throne at the very back of it that represents her standing in this world. One of the strongest beings of this world and one who is about to break the peace the Shinto has held for centuries. Standing at the side of the throne were two handmaidens, both wearing normal Miko outfits, but they stood out because of the weapons they held at their waist. Senna. Nozomi. She called out their names walking up the steps of the throne, and once she was at the top, she did a 180 and sat down onto the seat of her power. Both handmaidens turned to her waiting for her orders. Go and spread the words that the Shinto are now open to alliances and deals. She ordered, and both Shinigamis nodded and vanished with a shinpud. Mindscape hours ago. Ichigo opened his eyes to find himself staring at a bright sky that had both the sun and moon shining down onto him. Sitting up, Ichigo found himself surrounded by a thick forest made up of multiple kinds of trees. However, what caught his attention were the hundreds of skyscrapers in the distance, and seeing them, Ichigo's eyes flew open. It can't be, he said to himself, getting to his feet. Doing so reminded the orange-haired war hero of what just happened and those orange-red eyes. Placing a hand onto his head from the throbbing pain, Ichigo hissed as memories just like those from earlier made their way to the very front of his brain, but what he didn't notice was the power growing around him. In an instant, the throbbing pain was gone, and the only thing left were memories, something he plans on remembering to go through later. Opening his eyes, Ichigo looked at his surroundings, taking in everything around him, and at the sight of movement, he got into a judo position that his best friend forced him to remember. However, as he watched who came out of the shadows of the trees, he dropped the stance and gawked at the sight of those that came out. "The old man," he said, taking a step back. "Z Zangetsu." Ichigo looked between the two spirits, not believing the sight before his eyes. How? Oh. Look at that old man. He finally realized who his true Zanpakuto spirit was. The sadistic version of the orange-haired teen said with a grin. However, that instantly vanished and a more serious look came upon the albino spirit. "King. I know you have a lot of questions, and we will answer them all when we get the chance." Ichigo's attention was taken from his Shinigami hollow spirit as more movement came from the forest behind the two spirits. As the newcomer revealed himself and stepped into the opening, Ichigo took the moment to take in his appearance. The first one was a silver-haired man whose hair went down to his chin and had blood-red eyes that screamed power. The spirit was wearing torn at the knees black jeans, a black leather jacket that had an old English L on the back, and tan steel-toed boots. However, what stood out were the black angelic wings on his back that were currently folded. But who held Ichigo's attention the most was the first man. "It's him. The man from my dreams," he said to himself. "I know you recognize me, Ichigo Kurosaki. But right now you have more important things to worry about." The silver-haired man said as a broadsword, one made purely of golden and crimson flames, appeared in hand. The war hero then watched as the man's wings opened. Instantaneously the newcomer disappeared, and not a second later Ichigo felt himself being sent flying from a fist to his face, which was followed by a kick to the solar plexus. After crashing into over a dozen trees, the former Shinigami came to a sudden stop as his back collided with a skyscraper, making him fall to his hands and knees, all the while he spat out blood and stomach acid onto the ground. Ichigo looked towards the direction he came from, already feeling the blood flowing down his neck and the major concussion that was growing, and found the man from his dreams standing there. Getting to his feet slowly, Ichigo tried his best to steady his legs and got into the best fighting stance he could, but the orange-haired teen knew that without his powers, the orange-haired teen could do nothing to the spirits, so when the sword came down on him, he did his best to dodge the attacks, and doing so he protected most and all of his vitals. Only getting cuts and gashes formed the sword and its owner. Mindscape current time. Ichigo breathed heavily as blood flowed from the dozens of wounds he had. Some of them were deep, well, most were shallow. However, the most severe was the one he had on his shoulder, which was caused by the inflamed sword of the silver-haired man, which pierced right through his axillary artery. Already his whole right arm was covered in his blood, and Ichigo has lost feelings to the arm. What also soured his mood was that his clothes were practically destroyed, leaving him with barely anything to cover himself with. Looking up, he found the man standing there, wings still extended, and said stranger, was without a wound, and the only sign that he was able to place a hit was the little bit of dirt on his clothes. Ichigo looked around and only found destruction, trees on their side, uprooted, and holes in the ground where he was either collided with or was thrown into. However, what caught his attention were his spirits who were standing there watching as he got his ass handed to him. Why aren't they doing anything? He asked himself as he looked at the old man who was standing there with his eyes hidden behind his shades. What are they waiting for? Ichigo then looked at his white lookalike, and when his eyes connected with his sinister ones, it finally hit at what he should be doing. Looking back at his opponents, he got to his feet and imagined he was holding his giant butcher knife of a sword in his hands. Ichigo spread out his legs and placed a hand onto his wrist, wincing at the pain that shot through his whole arm. He then watched as ripples appeared in front of him and as a small crater appeared at his feet. Ichigo then felt it and watched as an orange glow started flickering off his body, and within seconds waves of his returned powers flowed off him, sending things flying away. Smiling, the orange-haired teen looked back to his opponents and shouted something he only dreamed of since his powers were lost. Zangetsu. Ichigo then watched as his wounds healed and as a shikishima covered him, however, it was also joined by the weight of shoulder pads and an X-shaped crossing over his chest. Ichigo dropped his arms as he looked at the two men in front of him and saw them grinning. "Good," the newcomer said with a smile. "Now that you have awakened your powers, I can put my all into it," he said, and without a second to breathe the man disappeared. But this time Ichigo saw the attack coming and wanting to block the attack, he went to bring his Zanpakuto to reflect them, but his muscles stopped him. When the attack did connect, it wasn't followed by pain of the inflamed weapon, but the attack bouncing off his skin as if he was made of steel. Looking down to where the sword hit him, Ichigo found nothing there. Not a cut or blemish or wrinkle of his Shinigami uniform. Remembering something from a past fight, Ichigo knew what happened and what caused it. But as he looked, his eyes caught the sight of Zangetsu, his trusted Zanpakuto. However, it didn't look anything like the trusty butcher knife he remembered. "King," the hollow spirit said, making the orange-haired Shinigami look at him. "That is your true Zanpakuto. The true Zangetsu, the one you were supposed to have," the albino said, grinning. "The previous one was a fake the old man made to replace me." Ichigo nodded, understanding what his spirit meant. But something felt off. It felt like the Zanpakuto was missing something that his previous one had while this one didn't. Looking back at the Zanpakuto, he took in its appearance. The blade was a pure black broadsword with a white cloth wrapped around the handle, and the pommel extended a few inches with an opening in the center. Ichigo was taken from his looking by his instincts telling him to block the unknown attack, but he decided to do something else. So sending some of his power into the blade in his hand, he watched as black and red Riatsu engulfed the blade, and looking towards the incoming enemy, he slashed the sword in his direction, shouting, "Jutsuga Tensho." The orange-haired Shinigami then watched as a massive wave of his condensed Riatsu left his sword, and within seconds the attack enveloped the new spirit, but the attack didn't stop there. For the condensed Riatsu continued to expand, not stopping at any of the skyscrapers or mountains. When the move did stop, Ichigo, the old man, and Zangetsu had to look away, as when the attack exploded a giant white light came from its direction, and within seconds shockwaves of the explosion. As the light died out, the three instantly made their way to dimming light. Once they got there, Ichigo's eyes widened at the catastrophe it caused. For once, where there were mountains and land, there was now one massive gaping hole, which Ichigo honestly thought was over 100 meters long, and at the very bottom of it was the spirit he was fighting. In a second, Ichigo was gone from where he once stood, for now, he was standing over the burned, battered and practically naked man who was grinning. Ichigo followed him as he slowly went to his feet, but he never brought his Zanpakuto up. When the man came to a stop, the wounds his attack caused vanished, and he was wearing something completely different than earlier. The silver-haired man was now wearing golden armor that looked like skulls and bones, and armor Ichigo himself remembers wearing. Bringing up his blade, the orange-haired war hero waited for his opponent to make the move first, and well, he did. Ichigo did his best to remember something he thought was similar to this situation in front of him. But the stranger didn't give him much time to think, for in a blink of an eye the spirit vanished, and the substitute Shinigami found himself being bombarded with attacks. "Damn it. Why can't I remember it?" he said to himself while hissing in pain as most of the man's attacks connected with him, making whatever happened earlier look like a miracle. Using a shunpo to get away, Ichigo decided he needed to buy himself some time. So thinking up a plan, Ichigo kept getting further away from his opponent, knowing that he would follow him and eventually find him. But having a plan is better than having nothing. Hell. Surzich raised a brow at the duo standing in front of him, with the unconscious bodies of his guards around them, and not further away was his wife, who was holding her hand over a wound on her shoulder. "So what can I do for you two?" he asked the two guests. Surzich leaned onto his desk while arching his hands together in front of his face. "And to let you know I haven't been having a good day, and with you harming my beloved wife." The man's eyes then glowed crimson. "I don't have a lot of patience right now, and I'd rather see you two dead. You must forgive us, Lord KurosakiLucifer, for the only reason why we attacked was that they attacked first," the Maiko on the right said, sheathing her sword. This Maiko had dark green hair and purplish red eyes that shone through the eye holes of her kitsune mask. "But you need not worry. We didn't come to cause a war. We are here to give you the news that the Shinto religion has broken their silence and is open for alliances and deals," the Maiko with amber hair and bright orange eyes finished. Surzich's eyes widened at the news he was just given. Why would they break their silence out of the blue? What caused this? He said to himself while thinking up ways as to why they have reawakened. Thank you for bringing this to me. He said looking up to the two Maiko. I'm guessing I wasn't your first nor will I be the last. The one on the right nodded, answering his question. Is it the same place as usual? Yes. The same, Maiko said, while her friend just stood there looking around as she rocked on her feet. Lady Amaterasu also gave me a message for you specifically, Lord Surzich. Nodding, the named man grabbed a pen and wrote down the shrine he will need to visit to get a deal with the high goddess Wincing of the Sun. When he had it down he looked back to the two guests and only found the one he was talking to. The other was standing over his wife with a hand outstretched towards the queen, and coming off of the hand was a green glow. Lady Amaterasu wants you to know that once her son is back, she will be sending him to Kuoh Academy. The dark-haired Maiko said, and Surzich could have sworn he heard hope in the girl's voice. It is not out of war or hate. But because he wants her son away from those that would use him like he was before. Nodding slowly he understood the reasoning. Am I able to get a name so that I could give the demons who live in the city a heads up? He asked while watching the Amber Maiko move from one guard to the other, healing them all, and to his relief, his wife was already beside him healed. Nozomi shook her head and spoke in her monotonous voice. No. My lady wants her son to have as much of a normal life as he could in Cow Town. She answered, receiving a nod of understanding. She also told me that if you ever harm him, she would personally feed hell to the eternal flames. The Shinigami then watched as the man nodded once more. I understand. Well, let Amaterasu know that her son is welcome to Cow Town and the academy. Nozomi gave a slight tilt of her head and found her partner standing beside her once again. Bowing, the two Maikos then vanished, leaving the two demons to themselves and to think about what they said. When the two came to a stop they were standing in a storm on a floating island high above the sky, and miles ahead of them was another floating island, but that island had golden homes and castles all over it. Letting out a deep breath, the former mod soul removed her mask and leaned a wall not so far away. She looked to the sky and found it filled with millions of stars. I know you want to see him, Nozomi, and so do I. But right now we need to do this for Lady Amaterasu. The voice of the jovial and joyful Shinigami she was partnered with. Nozomi then found Senna standing beside her grinning. Hey, maybe when we get back we could go cuddle with our strawberry. I know you have been dreaming about that, Nozomi. The normally stoic person found herself blushing at the images that came to her mind. Nozomi wouldn't deny that was something she wanted. So looking at her partner, the green-haired girl placed her mask back on and spoke. Let's just get back to business. We don't have that many more to go, and as you said, as soon as we can get this done the sooner we will be able to see Ichigo. She said looking away as Senna started laughing. Once the orange-eyed beauty got control of her laughter, she also placed her kitsune mask back on. With the two back in uniform, they made their way to the home of the All-Father Aden to deliver news of their lady's infractions awakening. She's gone. Lieutenant Matsumoto said, informing the captains and lieutenants around her, all of them but the captain of the 5th Division, who has been gone for the whole time they were here. The normally joyful lieutenant then brought her hands up, revealing that she was carrying a gym bag, a book bag, and a smartphone. These were all that remained where she once was. Captain Soifin wasn't happy in the slightest at the news she was given and the events of today. Kurosaki and his deserter of a father were gone, and what made it worse was that her mistress and that man were gone once more. Then we need to return to the Serite and inform the captain commander that we failed the task we were given. The youngest captain said with his arms crossed in front of him. Toshiro looked to his lieutenant and gave a short nod. Thank you, Lieutenant Matsumoto. You can return those items to where you found them. With a short nod from the blonde, she was gone. Allowing everyone who was there to have their thoughts. Toshiro then looked to those surrounding him. If Urahara and Yuruchi don't want to be found, then we don't have a chance in hell to find him. The other captains nodded, all but Soifin, who was seething at her failed mission. Do we have any good news at least? She said, clenching her teeth and bringing her eyes up to the group. When no one responded, the short captain turned around, cursed and kicked the first thing that was there, which happened to be a male Shinigami that was in the wrong place at the wrong time, for he was quickly sent to the ground holding his jewels, which were non-existent now. Lieutenant Momo was quickly there to help the poor soul, and once both were gone, everyone agreed on returning to the SS, leaving the 5th Division in charge of the mission. However, unknown to them was that the captain of the 5th Division already escaped his followers and was now getting bitch-slapped by one Hiyori Surigaki with her sandal. To believe you have the balls to come back here. Not so far away from where the rest of the Vizards, Kisuke's group, the Kurosaki twins, Tatsuki, and in the corner further away was Riken. And thankfully the former captain of the 12th Division broke the two up by saying, "Why are you here, Shinji?" Everyone then looked to the newly instated captain, who was laying on the floor looking to the ceiling, as if he wasn't in a whole lot of pain. Sitting up, Shinji spoke. I'm here because I'm worried about Ichigo, and the only people I know where he might be are you two. He said, pointing at Kisuke and Yuruchi, who were currently in her cat form and being pet by Yuzu. Ichigo is one of us. He might not be an official member of the Vizards, but he is still family, and that is all that matters. Finding honesty in his voice, Kisuke nodded and leaned the wall behind him. Good. The scientist then looked to the captain. I'm guessing that Kensei and Rose believe the same. A hurt and distraught look came upon the blonde-haired man. Kensei has always been someone who cares about his squad, and with what we discovered about Ichigo, Kensei sees him as a threat to his squad. He explained. However, Rose is in the same boat with me and two others. Kisuke nodded while he crossed his arms. What do you know about Ichigo, and what have you discovered about him? He asked, already knowing what the answer would be. Shinji looked at the twins, who were now focusing solely on the cat in the younger twin's lap. I don't know much, but from what Mayuri says is that Ichigo should have never existed, and he is a true transcendent being. He explained, now on his feet. Then you don't know everything about him. The masculine voice of the transformed Yuruchi said while purring as she was being petted. Feeling the eyes on her, she explained. Ichigo Kurosaki as a whole is a gift to us and the world. If you want more, just ask Kisuke. I'm enjoying the attention. When one of the Vizards went to ask, they were interrupted by the only human in the room. Can I ask something? Tatsuki asked, and when she received a nod from Hat and Clogs, she continued. Why am I here? And why aren't we looking for Ichigo? He's out there all alone, Kami knows where, and all we are doing is sitting here on our asses doing nothing. The room was filled with silence, and it was broken by the scientist of the group. I know where Ichigo is, but he is in a place where none of you can get him. He is out of bounds for all of us and the Soul Society. He explained, and everyone looked at him with annoyed looks. But Hat and Clogs wasn't finished and got off of the wall. However, I believe I can get myself and you, Miss Urasawa, to go see Ichigo. All eyes then landed on the teen, with said girl looking at the former captain with a surprised and confused look. Why me? I don't have any powers and I have nothing to do with that world of yours. She asked, and deep inside a pang of hurt struck her heart. She had no power, she would never be able to fight beside her best friend's side. Tatsuki's mood then dropped. I will never be able to be of any help to Ichigo. Tatsuki heard the sound of clogs making their way over to her, and when it stopped she felt a hand on her shoulder. Looking up, she found gray eyes looking into her soul. Miss Urasawa. Have you forgotten how Ichigo's powers first awakened? He asked with a small smile, one that gave the Ravenet hope. Opening her mouth to ask how, she found herself being interrupted by the man in front of her. Biori, he said, getting the attention of the short blonde, whose only reply was a grunt. Have you installed the basement yet? Another grunt was the response, but this time it came with a nod. Yuzu watched with a confused look. Not understanding what was going on or what might happen, all she wanted was to see her big brother once more. The blonde twin was taken from her watching when she felt movement on her lap and looked to find Yuruchi moving. Yuruchi? She asked, confused as moments ago the cat wouldn't dare move as Yuzu petted her. The transformed cat jumped off her lap and said. There is no need to worry, my citrus fruit. The cat then looked back, and Yuzu could see the smile on the black feline's face. You will be seeing Ichigo soon enough. But before all that happens, there are some powers we need to awaken, she said, and in a puff, the black slim cat was gone, and now standing in its place was a naked flash goddess, making a few eyes bulge out of their skull, and that wasn't it, for in her hands was a wakizashi that had a dark wooden tsuka, a purple tsuka ito, and a thunderbolt tsuba. And it starts with our dear tomboy. Hearing those words, Tatsuki turned around, and before she could do anything, the Ravenet felt the Zanpakuto pierce her heart, and in seconds the warehouse was filled with a growing spiritual pressure that shocked everyone, including the founder of the SRDI, who was looking at the sight with wide eyes, and as small as this was something he never thought would happen. He originally thought that Tatsuki would be a lieutenant level, but this was a high captain level. Thank the Camus that there is a barrier over this place. If not, we would have been swarmed in seconds. Everyone then watched a bang of smoke to the place of the two females, and as it cleared it revealed a successful transfer, for standing there was Tatsuki Arasawa wearing the uniform of a Shinigami, but what stood out on hers was that her back and eyes were opened, and at her hip was a Zanpakuto that took the form of the common katana. However, her sword had a crimson redwood tsuka. A blood-red tsuka ito, and its tsuba was a hollowed-out diamond. On the floor lay two bodies, the first was the newly made Shinigami's body, and the other was Yuruchi, who was breathing heavily with black bags under her eyes. However, the former captain was smiling, and lifting a hand towards her partner, she gave a thumbs up. I told you it would be awesome. And with that the beauty passed out, and not that much later Tatsuki's body fell back into her actual body, making both pass out. Kisuke then went to explain what the plan would be, and in half an hour, Shinji left to return to his squad and to do his duty, and the Vizards went about their business, ignoring the guests in the warehouse with them. A minute later Tessai, who had moved both unconscious beauties to another room, came back and was holding a pair of tags. "Alright girls," Kisuke said, smiling at the twins gaining their attention. "It's time to awaken your dormant powers." He finished opening a latch on the floor. Looking to the sisters, he saw them looking at him with surprised looks. However, in seconds the siblings looked at each other, and not that much longer they both nodded. Kisuke smiled as he stepped down into the room he will be spending the next few days until their newly made substitute Shinigami woke up. And once Tatsuki Arasawa did, Kisuke and her will be visiting the high goddess of the sun, Amaterasu, the mother of all Japanese people, but most of all the mother of Ichigo's soul. Ichigo's Mindscape. The Shinigami was breathing heavily, but this time around he wasn't beaten, bruised, or bloody. This time he was exhausted, but the look on his face said otherwise, because plastered on Ichigo's face was a rare smile. Ichigo Kurosaki was honestly having fun, the feeling of Ryatsu around him, the feeling of his trusted weapon in hand, even if it was not in the shape he remembered, it was still a part of him, and the ability to float above the skies. However, right now the only thing he was focusing on was the armored man in front of him, who was in the same condition as he was. Exhausted and breathing heavily as the spirit stood in front of him with a proud smile. "I knew you were strong, but to be able to withstand my greatest form," the silver-haired man said with a growing smile. "You are one hell of a being, Ichigo Kurosaki." Ichigo didn't say anything as he listened to the man from his dreams. Not wanting to get distracted, Ichigo went in for another attack, so sending some condensed Ryatsu into Zangetsu, he unleashed an unnamed Jutsuga towards the man. Ichigo wasn't able to watch his attack connect with its target as he was soon under a barrage of slices from said man. "You shouldn't be holding back, Ichigo. You should know this after all the opponents you've fought," he yelled as he threw a kick towards the orange-haired teen's chest. But the attack didn't land, but instead, the kick was caught by the war hero. "I would say the same." Ichigo then head-butted his opponent, which made him stature, and within a second, the silver-haired man was sent flying as Ichigo sent a wave of his Jutsuga at him. "Jutsuga Tenshu." He yelled out as the energy that flew from his Zanpakuto and at his armored opponent. Ichigo watched as his attack continued going until it came to a stop at the base of one of his skyscrapers. "Now stay there," he said to himself as he watched the smoke clear away to show a burned and battered man who was hanging off the side of the skyscraper. Turning his attention in the direction of his two Zanpakuto spirits. "Why have you two been so quiet?" he asked, stabbing his new Zangetsu into the ground. "Zangetsu, you're never this quiet, and you, old man, I understand, but never for this long." He glared at his spirits. "So why are you both being quiet?" However, before he could get an answer from either of them, he felt movement and looked towards the source and found the newcomer making his way to feet after falling out of the hole in the skyscraper. "Damn," he said to himself, grabbing his sword and bringing it in front of him. Why wouldn't he stay down? Ichigo TSK and went to use his signature attack, but this time Ichigo sent more of his Raisu into the attack. "King." He heard his Zanpakuto call out to him. "Stop fighting." The face of his albino self entered his mind. "You need to accept that you can't beat him. You have already used 3/4 of your spiritual pressure in this fight, and he is a spirit, he doesn't need to worry about such things. Accept the spirit like you did when you accepted us for the final Jutsuga." Zangetsu said to him. At that moment, Ichigo remembered the last fight he had with his two spirits. The fight that gave him the power to beat Aizen, but also the fight that gave him the ability to lose his powers. Not that far away from the fight stood two figures, one was the old man, and the other was Zangetsu. Both were watching their human beings sent through skyscrapers as Lucifer started up the fight again, having sent chains of hell towards Ichigo. They both knew what Ichigo had to do, but they promised not to interfere. However, what they didn't promise was to talk to their orange-haired owner. So Zangetsu took advantage of that and spoke to Ichigo through their bond. "What did you tell him?" the old man asked, watching a smile grow on the Zanpakuto spirit's face. Which then watched as the fight stopped, with Ichigo still in the middle of a skyscraper. Both spirits then watched as a light came out of the windows and the hull. The chains then started disappearing, and as the owner of said spear spoke. "It seems you realized what you had to do, Ichigo Kurosaki." Zangetsu and the old man then vanished and reappeared where the fight was happening. They then watched as their human exited the hole with a small smile. "Lucifer Morningstar, is it?" he asked, looking at the slowly disintegrating spirit. The spirit nodded, and the orange-haired teen took it as his moment to continue, as the only thing remaining was his eyes, mouth and ears. "I will see you later then, and when we see each other again I will be looking forward to learning your powers." The disgraced angel nodded, even though his spirit was practically gone. "I look forward to that moment, Ichigo Kurosaki," he said with a smile. "When that happens I will be ready to teach you my powers and the benefits and cons of it." With that, the man was gone, and the three remaining watched all the damage that was caused by there was repaired skyscrapers, landscapes, everything, leaving only a few dozen left. They also watched as a crown appeared where the spirit once stood. Ichigo picked up the crown and immediately felt its power flow into him. It felt like he was being stabbed by hundreds of little pins all at once. His nerves were going haywire, his vision blurry, and when it returned he found himself being able to see things that normal beings couldn't. The orange-haired teen then felt the weight leave his hand, and he watched his chess pieces, all of them being 40 to 50 feet tall, fell from the sky, landing all around his mindscape. He also watched as a bright star, the morning star, glowing in the sky. After some time Ichigo found himself feeling intense pain on his back, making him bend over, and that was when he felt his back being split open. Looking back he found 8 pairs of wings there, all of them looked leathery under the black flames that covered the appendage. Ichigo looked away and with a thought, the wings were gone, and so was the pain. Ichigo then felt the full force of his exhaustion hit him. Falling to his knees and stabbing Zangetsu into the ground under him, hoping it could hold him. The hybrid went to push himself to his feet but was stopped when he heard the familiar voice of the man he thought was his Zanpakuto. His mind was then filled with questions he wanted to be answered. Ichigo. I know you have questions for us, but for now, you need to leave. Iwich said, looking at the teen whose spirit he resided in. Lucifer will take a bit to return, and when he does we will let you know, and when that happens I will personally answer all your questions. The Quincy spirit then watched as Ichigo fell forward and as his body vanished, leaving the two spirits alone looking at the improved mindscape. I call the forest, Zangetsu said, making his way to the place where Ichigo first appeared. When he was about to enter, he stopped and looked at the old man. I hope you know what you are doing, old man, and if I know how you think. The hollow Shinigami spirit looked to the sky. King isn't like that. So don't worry. The albino Ichigo entered the forest leaving the Quincy spirit alone. Iwich looked to his flagpole and said to himself. I hope you are right, Zangetsu. But Ichigo has changed because of the Shinigamis and their manipulation. So he might not be that kind-hearted as he once was. He finished and in a flash, he was gone from where he was standing. Unknown to anyone in the mindscape was that a being of untold strength saw this whole fight in a dream and was making its way to the unconscious teen's body. That being was none other than Great Red, the Apocalypse Dragon, and the DXD. Akamagahara. My lady. Amaterasu looked up from her paperwork to find her two Maikos standing there with their masks off. The mission is finished. All the factions know about the Shinto's awakening. The Maiko with green hair and violet eyes said. Thank you, Nozomi, Senna. The goddess said with a smile. You may leave for your chambers and rest well for I will be needing you both at my side in the next few days. She said and watched as both girls nodded. Looking back at her paperwork, Amaterasu's mind went to the two loyal Maikos. She knew both of them, and the goddess knew their feelings for her son, and she actually pushed them to have feelings for Ichigo. Amaterasu also remembered the day when she brought them back and how they both rushed to leave, wanting to see their Ichigo. However, she had to stop them, telling them that they wouldn't be able to see Ichigo until their powers came back. When she saw their hurt looks, the only thing the goddess of the sun could do was hug them and tell them that in time they would be able to see the person their hearts wanted. Lady Amaterasu, Senna said, drawing the attention of the leader of the Shinto faction away from her paperwork once more. How is Ichi doing? She asked to hope that her orange-haired friend was doing well. She also noticed her fellow Maiko standing up straighter as if she was as well, hoping to hear news of their crush. The goddess smiled with a nod. He should be waking up any day now, Senna, Nozomi. Both girls smiled at the news. I promise that when he wakes, you two, after the other Kamis, will be given the news immediately. Their lady finished. Nodding, Nozomi spoke for both of them. Thank you, my lady. We will be going now. The Shinigami Maiko said as they went to leave, and Amaterasu smiled when she saw Skip and their walk away. However, they were all stopped when they all felt an enormous amount of power enter the Shinto's heaven. Amaterasu flew to her feet and out the door. There were only two beings that could enter her and her people's home without her brother's help, and both were never good news. The goddess felt her Maikos following her, and she knew that they wouldn't be of help if they followed her. But Amaterasu smiled at their devotion to her and her people. I'll reward you both soon. The black-haired beauty said to herself. At that moment the three entered the courtyard, and what they saw just made the goddess worry even more. Flying towards her island was a giant dragon, scales of scarlet red and eyes the color of pure gold. Everyone knew who the dragon was, and they all trembled in fear for the dragon was the strongest being in their universe. In a flash, the clothes the high goddess of the sun were wearing disappeared, and in their place were robes fitting of battle, and in the goddess's hand, a black flamed katana appeared. That wasn't all, for all the kamis of the Shinto appeared at her side, all ready for battle if need be. Sister, Susanoo called out, wielding an Ajinata made of pure water. What's the plan? Even you can't defeat DXD by yourself. He's the strongest being of our universe. And you are 3 behind him. The kami of storm practically yelled, and the goddess could feel the slight fear flowing off of her brother. She didn't blame him for showing fear as they watched the dragon of dreams flying towards them. Wait until he makes a move. That was all Amaterasu said as she clenched her weapon. However, what the Kamises didn't expect was the apocalypse dragon coming to a halt about 100 meters away from the floating islands. What is he doing? The raven-haired goddess asked herself as she watched the dragon flap his wings. But that unspoken question was answered not a second later, with a booming voice sounding around Takamagahara. Amaterasu. I have come to meet your son, Ichigo Kurosaki. For I have had a dream about the boy and he should know about it. The dragon said as the sound of his voice made the Shinto's heaven and every island shake, making everyone stumble and most falling on their asses. At that moment, in a room not too far away, 2 chocolate brown eyes flew open, and as they did, power surged out of the owner's body, making everything around him crack. The walls, bed, dressers, and the floors cracked at the pressure the power was emanating. And just as fast as it appeared, the power vanished, leaving the room in an absolute mess. However, that wasn't the only thing that vanished from the room, for where there was once a body laying on the bed, now there was nothing, and in a second later the bed was sent flying to the wall, where on the impact it exploded into dust and splinters. Where that body appeared was in front of the Kamis, who were looking at the back of their leader's son. Ichigo wasn't wearing his school uniform as he was when he entered this area, but the uniform of his reawakened powers, and in his hand was the blade he knew as the true form of Zangetsu. Amaterasu couldn't help but let out a quiet ep at her son's presence at this moment. She could also feel the power flowing off of him, and if it wasn't for her connection to him, the goddess wouldn't have been able to feel it, for around her, she saw no one reacting to his power. Everyone else was looking at the orange-haired teen with wide shocked eyes, for they never even felt him coming, and nor could any of them sense his power. However, there were 2 who weren't acting like the Kamis, and those 2 were Nozomi and Senna. The 2 Shinigami couldn't help but let tears of joy flow from their eyes at the sight of him. Senna was the one to break the silence by stepping past the Kamis towards the boy who held her heart. Ichigo, she said as she got closer, and she watched as the orange-haired teen looked back to her, and the Shinigami saw the brief shock in his eyes. Senna smiled when she saw that. He remembers me. She screamed to herself. The energetic girl felt the need to pounce at the teen and to crush him in a hug. However, she was stopped when one of his hands appeared to stop her. Questions? He said, looking towards raven-haired beauty. The beauty nodded and he couldn't help but shout out. Why is there a dragon in front of us, and why is it looking at me? He said as he pointed his Zanpakuto towards. What happened next was not what Ichigo was expecting. I came here to speak with you, Ichigo Kurosaki. The booming voice sounded once more, making everyone look towards the strongest being of the universe. Ichigo facepalmed and mumbled. It can talk, of course it can talk. Nothing in my life can be normal. Why can't anything in my life be normal? When he finished, he dropped his hand from his face and looked at the mythical beast. Okay, what is? What did you want to talk to me about, dragon? He said as a statement. Ichigo watched as a crack appeared behind the dragon, a crack twice the size of the dragon. Come find me when you are done here. I would like to talk to you alone and not in the presence of others. The booming voice of the dragon said as he flew into the crack. Until then. Train hard and well, Ichigo Kurosaki. With that, the enormous dragon was gone, and the crack that it left through vanished, leaving only the clear blue skies for all to see. The orange-haired teen turned around, releasing a sigh, which made his Shinigami attire disappear. In its place was the uniform of his high school. He placed his hands into his pocket and slouched forward. Looking toward the group of beings in front of him, he asked. What the hell was that about? He asked, and the only response he got was silence. Getting frustrated, it has been a very weird day for the teen. Ichigo went to ask the question again. But as he was about to ask, he found himself being lifted into the air as a pair of arms embraced him, and the orange-haired teen thought he heard his ribs breaking. Ichigo. The excited purple-haired girl said as she hugged him, swinging him back and forth. I knew you would have recognized me. Senna said with the biggest smile she ever had. Oh, I've missed you. I have so much to tell you. Oh, I can't wait. All the while she said that she was swinging the poor teen back and forth. Senna. The monotone voice of her Miko said, drawing her away and making her stop. I think you need to let Ichigo rest, Nozomi said as she pointed towards the orange-haired teen. The energetic girl looked at the teen and found him with his head rolled back and his eyes rolled back into his sockets. Senna gave a light chuckle and gently placed the unconscious teen onto the ground. Standing back to her feet, she scratched the back of her head. I went too far, didn't I? Everyone nodded with a deadpan look. Sorry, she said with a light chuckle. From now on I'll be taking care of Ichigo, Nozomi said with her monotone voice as she bent down to pick up the orange-haired teen. You have shown that you can't hold back your excitement. She finished as she threw one of Ichigo's arms over her shoulder and picked him up. This made Senna jealous, and she proved it by pouting and stomping her feet. That's not fair. Why do you get to carry Ichi when it should be me? Senna stomped as she followed her fellow Maiko. I was his first date, so that should make me the first to carry to his room. That makes no sense. Was the only response that Nozomi gave as she led the jealous teen towards a room for the unconscious teen. However, as she did so she couldn't help but smile as lightly grabbed the hand of the orange-haired teen. Wake up soon, Ichigo. Was all she said, for in the next second his hand was slapped away. Hey, no holding hands. Senna said, glaring at the green-haired girl. If I can't carry him, then you don't get to hold his hand, she said with her arms crossed. Behind them, the Kamis laughed at the two girls as one fought the other. But when the girls disappeared, one by one every kami left to return to their floating islands. After about a minute and a half, every Shinto god had returned to their home. However, 3 remain, those being the Trinity. All of them were thinking the same thing, and it involved what happened earlier. What do you think the DXD had to do with Ichigo? Susanoo asked, having already sent his armor and weapon away for more formal wear. The storm kami looked to his sister, who was looking at the ground, and he saw her mind trying to work out whatever it was it meant. I do not know. That was all she said, in a voice so not like herself. Shaking her head, she looked up in the direction of her shrine. But whatever it is, it must not be good. Both brothers nodded. What will we do if he returns? Tsukiyomi asked, making the other two look to the moon god. I do not like how he came here without a problem. This is our home, the Shinto faction's home, he said, seething. I will not accept someone, no matter the strength, wealth, or whatever, to enter Takamagahara like they own the place. He yelled out, and both siblings watched as a full moon started to take the place of the sun. He won't, Amaterasu said, trying to calm down her normally calm sibling. Great Red knows that entering the home of the gods' heaven, Takamagahara, Asgard, Mount Olympus, Mount Elbrus, or even the temples of the Egyptians, is an act of war us all. Yes, he might be the strongest being of the universe, but I doubt even he could stop thousands of gods. Seeing sense in his sister's words, the kami of the moon nodded. I trust you, sister. She smiled, but it didn't last long because he wasn't done. But that doesn't mean it could happen again with someone else. Amaterasu released a sigh as she rubbed her eyes. The only other person who can enter our home, minus the other Kamis, is the Ophis, the Ouroboros dragon, and she doesn't have any interest here. All Ophis cares about is getting her home back, she said as she turned around to head to her shrine. Brother, I promise that no one else will enter our home, and if they do, I will personally show why so many want an alliance with me. But that said, the leader of the Shinto faction vanished, and not that long after the two brothers also left to return to their floating island. When the goddess entered her shrine, she opened her senses, checking on all the residents of her home, especially 2 love-struck teens. Thankfully, Amaterasu found them sleeping in their chambers and not in the same bed as her son. And with that thought, the high goddess of the sun vanished from where she was standing, and when she appeared once more, Amaterasu found herself in the room her son was currently residing in. Giving off a small smile, the goddess made her way to join her precious creation in bed. So how are you going to awaken our powers? Karen asked the man wearing a hat and clogs. Are you going to stab us like how Yorichi gave Tatsuki her powers? The older twin asked with a bored and uncaring voice. But on the inside, she was bouncing off walls. She will finally be able to help her older brother and protect him as he has done for her whole life. Karen watched as the man shrugged. Yes and no, he said, confusing the twins with his answer. Opening his fan, Kisuke hid his mouth behind it, with his eyes hiding in the shadows of his bucket hat. Only one of you is capable of wielding the powers of a Shinigami. The other is capable of wielding your mother's power, the power of the Quincy. Both girls' eyes widened at that. Mom was a Quincy? Asked both twins at the same time, and Kisuke nodded. How do you know? Yuzu asked for both twins. That's not my story to tell, Kisuke responded with his fan still hiding the bottom half of his face. It's your father's story to tell her his story, he said as he pointed to Ryukin, who was leaning a rock not far away. But right now we need to awaken your dormant powers. They both wanted answers, but the sisters understood Kisuke's reason for not telling them. So without any arguing, the twins nodded, making the scientist smile behind his fan. Well, let's start with the older twin, he said as he put away his fan and unsheathed Benahim. You, Miss Karen, have the more versatile and aggressive spiritual pressure. So you have more of your father's power. Karen nodded, not noticing the missing Yuzu, who vanished along with the sole Quincy of the room, and watched as he placed his sword or chest. But before he could start, he was stopped by the named girl. Wait. He looked up and saw a confused look on her face. If you are going to do that, won't the same thing happen to you like Yorichi and Kichiki? Outwardly smiling, he dropped his Zanpakuto and explained. Not exactly. You see, it depends on your control over your Ryatsu and the friendship you have with your Zanpakuto, he said and watched as Karen tilted her head. Young Kichiki had decent control over her Riatsu, but her friendship with Shirayuki wasn't. He watched as the black-haired twin nodded slowly. Iruchi is a master at controlling her spiritual pressure, but where she lacked was the relationship with her Zanpakuto. Our feline friend hasn't used or touched her soul cutter for centuries, and that angered the tigress. Kisuke then brought Benahum up. Now yours truly, I have amazing control over my Riatsu, and my relationship with Benahum is completely up to date and we don't have a problem with each other. Had and Clogs then placed the tip of the Zanpakuto back Karen's budding chest. That's why when we are done with this, I will not feel an ounce of tiredness, nor will I need months to refill my reserves. Karen tried her best to understand what the scientist said, and getting the gist of it she nodded. Do you know what people my age would call you because of that hat and Clogs? She watched as he raised a brow. A nerd, she said in a monotone voice, making Kisuke chuckle. Well, get it over with. The sooner I have this power and control over it, the sooner I can help Ichigo. Kisuke smiled at the older twin's determination and shook his head in approval. Of course, Miss Karen. Now, this won't hurt a bit, he said, and thrust his trusty Zanpakuto through the young teen's heart. Just like before, a bright flash filled the area, making the scientist look away, and those close by covered their eyes, not wanting to hurt or damage them. However, that wasn't all, for the massive training area was also filled with a dense spiritual pressure that said all the scientists needed to know. Captain-level spiritual pressure, and a sincere hollow high judge's level almost vasto lord, just like Ichigo's. Kisuke felt his Riatsu being sucked out of him at an exponential rate, making him feel the need to breathe faster. But it all stopped when the light cleared and he looked back to find two bodies, one laying down with eyes closed and breathing lightly. Over the unconscious body was the newly made Shinigami, whose Shihakusho was completely different from the usual Shinigamis. Starting was that the top was a short shirt, exposing her belly, sides, lower backs, and hugging her slowly growing bosom, and her sleeves continued down to the wrist, which was connected to a pair of black fingerless gloves, which had a diamond shape cut out of the top. Hiding the young teen's legs were long baggy pants that went down to her ankles and ended with traditional sandals. Finishing it off was the bizarre form her Zanpakuto took, it being an Adachi, which had a black tsuka, a crimson-red tsuka ito, and its tsuba was the same as her brother's Bankai tsuba, with the only difference being that it had a pointed end and ended on a curve. The seethed sword was being held the older twin's back by a reddish strap. What a strange set of clothes, and that is a strange form for his Zanpakuto, even weirder than Ichigo's base form soul cutter, he said to himself quietly. Kisuke watched as Karen looked around, but after a few seconds, he watched as her eyes rolled back into her skull. Catching her before she could hit the floor, Kisuke gently placed the soul back into its original body. Rest well, young Kurosaki. The road ahead of you will be rough and bumpy. But in the end, it will all work out. The scientist finished as he then picked up the unconscious body and placed her a wall. The young Shinigami was experiencing something else, as her physical body was being moved. When Karen opened her eyes, she found herself standing at the base of a volcano, with a massive blood-red moon above her, and in front of her were two individuals standing in front of her. The first was a woman standing at 5'8", with black hair held back in a ponytail with two bangs at the side of her, and her eyes emerald green. She was wearing a green battle kimono with a samurai pauldron protecting her left shoulder, and at her right hip was a katana. The other terrified the young teen, for even if it was in the shape of a female, Karen felt it was anything but, for where there was supposed to be a face there was a mask. The mask was pure red with the pearly white teeth, and when it breathed all she saw was the void when it opened its mouth. It was hunched over with nothing protecting its chest, minus yellowish cloth wrapped around her chest, hiding her S and revealing red skin, and wearing black shaggy pants that ended off with a pair of sandals. Karen. The female said, taking the girl's attention away from the thing that was an oni to the young girl. My name is. Karen tilted her head with confusion in her eyes, for have heard nothing. You will learn my name in time, young one, just know that I will always be there to help you. But that Karen found herself being thrown out of the area, and before she could black out once more, she saw the unnamed woman speak to the Oni, who nodded, and she watched as the mask vanished to reveal her face. Then darkness surrounded the older twin, giving her much to think about. A distance away from the two Shinigami stood a white-haired man and a blonde-haired girl. The two looked at each other, neither knowing what to do or say. The silence was finally broken when Raiken took out a new cigarette and lighter. Don't you think smoking is a bad habit? Asked the docile and shy twin. Tried, nor do I want to quit, he answered without thinking about it, letting out a puff of smoke from his nose. Raiken was having a hard time focusing. He knew what he must do, but something was stopping him. That something was the feeling of possibly killing his childhood friend's daughter. I can't allow that to happen. Thinking about the dead Quincy and the love of his life in his youth made the Ashiba head imagine her in front of him with a betrayed, hurt and tear-ridden look as the Kurosaki clutched the dead body of her youngest. However, Ryukin also remembered the promise he made to her when she was going through her first pregnancy. If any of my kids, this one or the future ones, ever have the potential to wield our power, please teach them everything you know and teach them the secret arts of my family. He remembered the words she said as if it was yesterday. It took days for him to answer Misaki, but when he did, Ryukin remembered the smile that dawned on her face and the hug she gave him, a hug that would break his back if he was just a normal human. Looking back at the girl, the Ishida family head had to try his hardest to resist the need to say no and break Misaki's wish. What do you know about Quincy's powers, Yuzu? Ryukin watched the girl shrug at his question, giving him all the answers he needed. Nothing. She nodded, confirming his statement. Releasing a sigh, Quincy tossed his cigarette away and sat down on a rock. He then went on to explain everything Yuzu will need to understand about her powers. On how instead of sending the souls of the damned to the Soul Society, they destroy them, leaving nothing behind or a possible chance of going through the cycle again. It took a little more than half an hour to explain everything to the innocent girl, who tried her best and succeeded in understanding what he meant. However, there was something in the story that confused Yuzu. How do I awaken my powers?" she asked, and the blonde-haired girl watched as the head doctor walked away. "Mr. Ishida?" she called out, confused. "Unlike the Shinigamis, we Quincy don't have to sacrifice our spiritual power to unlock the dormant power of our powers." Yuzu watched as a small bow appeared in his hand. "All it takes is one of our arrows to pierce your body and for your determination to bring you back." Before the younger twin could say anything, she found herself in a bit of pain. Yuzu looked down and found what looked like an arrow only a few centimeters away from her heart. But that wasn't all. For the next second, Yuzu felt her whole body collapse as something entered it, and as it went on, the blonde-haired twin found herself passing out, and when she opened her eyes, she found herself standing in the middle of a body of water. Standing in front of the docile teen was a boy, about her Ichinai height, with short black hair, a roundish face that looks like he has never smiled once in his life. The boy had reddish-brown eyes that didn't hold an ounce of shine or color. The boy was wearing a black cloak, black pants, and black combat boots. Yuzu felt unnerved as she looked at the boy as if he was looking right through her, seeing her deepest secrets and desires. The blonde-haired girl hugged herself, hoping it would help, but it did nothing, and the feeling continued. However, when it did end, Yuzu heard a sound as if something was placed at her feet. Looking down, she found herself standing on top of the water, which freaked her out, but her attention went to the two things that were there. The first, and the one that got her attention first, was a sword. The sword was a chisa katana, with a white wood tsuka, white tsuka ito, and its tsuba was a hollowed out flower. The other was a silver chain that had a silver patents cross on it. "Pick them up." The silence was broken by the empty voice of the boy, making Yuzu look up to him. "They're yours. The sword is yours, Anpakudo, and the other is your Quincy cross," he said, nodding his head at the two weapons. "When you were born, your Zanpakudo spirit was weak, so weak it was embarrassing, but before it could disappear, I offered it a deal. Give me your power and I promise to teach her what she needs to know about her Zanpakudo," he said, and she watched as he brought a hand out of his cloak. Yuzu then watched as a carbon copy of the chisa katana appeared in his hand. "Your Zanpakudo's name is, and you couldn't hear its name because you need to prove you are worthy of it." Nodding slowly, the blonde girl reached down and grabbed the two items, and in a blink of her eyes, everything changed to that of a snow-topped mountain, and even if it was snowing, Yuzu didn't feel anything. When she looked towards the boy, she found him standing in front of a giant silver letter. At that moment, Yuzu felt herself being pushed away, and the once snow-capped mountain slowly moved further away, and darkness filled its place. However, during that time, in the darkness of nothingness, she heard a name. "Shifukajetsu." The voice said, echoing around her, and with that absolute darkness surrounded her. Soul Society. After 7 days of searching Karakura town and its neighboring cities and their neighboring cities, no sign of Ichigo Kurosaki, Kisu Kurihara, Yoruchi Shihoin or their group has been seen or found. The captain of the 5th Division said as he stood in front of the other captains and lieutenants of Gate 13. "It's obvious you are not looking hard enough," snarled the 2nd Division captain. "No human can just disappear out of the blue." Soifin then glared at the blonde captain. "Or you could be hiding something." Everyone looked to her, all but the accused captain and the captain commander. "He was a part of your group of traitors and had the same powers as well. Maybe you see him as family rather than doing your duty as a captain." "Captain Soifin," Yuki Take said, outraged by what his fellow captain said. The gentle captain also noticed the captains of the 3rd and 9th Division clenching their fists. "Do you not have any control?" Captains Latoribashi, Hirako, and Muguruma have all shown their loyalty to the Gate. When he finished, Jishiro suddenly found it hard to breathe. "Ishiro," Shunsui said, taking everyone's attention away from the weak-bodied captain. "I agree with you, but Soifin does have a valid point." The relaxed captain then looked to the man in the center of the room. And by how he is acting and appearance, her claims look to be accurate. Captain Hirako. The voice of the captain commander said, making everyone stand at attention. Your duty of searching for the traitors has been relieved. You can return to your duty as captain here. Shinji nodded and went back to his place in the line. He was lucky because if they weren't low on captains, he would have probably been relieved of his duty and imprisoned. So the captain counted himself lucky, but he knew if he stepped out of line once more, there wouldn't be a reason for needing a captain. Plus with how the petite assassin spoke of treachery, he was chuckling inside. Since he and his fellow wizards were framed and already sentenced to death a century ago. Why was he even here despite all that talk of not trusting the Soul Society for years, he had no idea. Captains Soifun and Kuratsuchi. Shinji left his thoughts by his commander's voice. You both will now be taking Captain Hirako's place. Both named people nodded, one with a bored and tired look and the other with determination. Yamamoto looked to all of his captains, eyes still closed, and banged his chain onto the floor. This meeting is adjourned. Return to your barracks and continue doing your duty. With that everyone but 3 left, some with a quick shunpo, and the rest left through the doors. Opening one of his eyes, the captain commander found his praised students and the woman knew a Kinpachi, still standing at their spot. Old man. Shunsui was the first to speak. Are you sure this is the right thing to do? After everything they've been through because of us. We're standing here today because of those from Karakura town. To do this to them leaves a very bitter taste in my mouth that I can't drown down in sake. My friend, I would agree with you, but you heard what the Central 46 said. The captain of the 13th Division said, with a sad look and understanding his position. They want us to bring them all in for interrogation and questioning. However, they also want us to kill the person everyone in the Soul Society sees as a hero. The two looked to the ground and thought about everything the young orange-haired teen did for them when he didn't even have to. Jashiro wasn't lying when he said that everyone saw him as a hero, already there were over a dozen fan clubs all over the place. Most of them were all devoted to the hero of the White Invasion. And from the growing reports of missing souls all over the Rukongai, we might be facing a potential threat in the near future. Jashiro said, saddened by the news. If a war does break out I don't think we will be prepared for it. Tension is already growing between the loyal captains and those that are strongly this act of Ichigo Kurosaki. If this continues, I do not see a good outcome. Shunsui looked towards his old friend with a raised brow. Are you saying that we might be facing another civil war? Nothing happened for a few seconds, but an answer did come in the form of a nod from the white-haired captain. If that does happen I do not see a possible way of recovering. We barely recovered from Aizen's betrayal and the civil war that happened then. It was all thanks to that boy who made us open our eyes. The nod came from the sickly captain, however, they were both taken away by the oldest in the room. Everyone leave. Yamamoto shouted as he went to his office and within seconds the captain's hall was empty. Entering the large office the old man didn't make his way to his desk, but toward the balcony where he looked out to the massive white halls and red roofs of the Sirte. He has watched this place fall and rise again dozens of times, and all of them had Ichigo Kurosaki to save them. Grasping his cane he clenched his hand, remembering the day he almost lost his trusted partner during the Zanpakuto rebellion. Not again. He said to himself as he opened his eyes. I will not see this place, my home and legacy fall once more. He said out loud, watching as Shinigamis went about their business. Even if it threatens my seat. I will do what I must. Banging his cane and trusted partner the floor twice, Yamamoto heard the arrival of his greatest friend and lieutenant. You called, sir? Turning around in the direction of his desk, closing his eyes, the old captain spoke. Have Orihime summoned. He ordered, getting a nod from the lieutenant of the 1st Division, who vanished after receiving his orders. Sitting down he sat in silence, allowing the sun to warm his old skin. No matter what happens. You will not die as long as I hold this seat, Ichigo Kurosaki. I owe you that much. Yamamoto said to himself as he grabbed a piece of paper. Even with those two out there looking, they will never be able to find him. For he is with them of all beings, and no one can touch him as long as she is with him. Takamagahara. Amaterasu laughed as she watched the scene in front of her as they walked the walls of her home. Ichigo, her beloved son, was getting all the attention from everyone around them, but mainly from her personal Maikos, Nozomi and Senna, who were embracing an arm each. The energetic girl had the brightest and biggest smile the god has ever seen, and the monotonous girl had a rare smile, but even then the goddess could tell she was brimming with excitement. However, as Amaterasu watched she couldn't help but feel jealousy swell inside of her. After years of only being able to watch as Ichigo continued moving forward, her dream was to be able to hold the son she was so proud of. She was proud of all her children, Aim no Ashihimimi, Aim no Hohi, Amitsuhikan, Ikitsuhikan, and Kumanakisubi. However, what Ichigo had that they didn't was that the teen in front of her was made with a small fragment of her soul, with the help of her brother Tsukiyomi. Closing her sun-colored eyes, Amaterasu stopped the thoughts from claiming her mind. Opening them, she found 2 chocolate orbs looking at her, making it hard for her to stop the fluttering in her belly. Smiling again, the goddess of the sun spoke. "You look like you have questions for me, my son." The teen nodded, confirming her sentence. "I do." She watched as he looked at a cherry blossom tree. "You keep saying that I'm your son," Ichigo said, making Amaterasu nod, already knowing where this was going. "But my human memories only have Masaki Kurosaki as my mother." "That is true," she said with a nod as she slid her hands into the sleeves of her kimono. "I will never deny that the Kurosaki heiress is your mother." He looked at her, making Amaterasu feel fuzzy once more. "Masaki Kurosaki was a perfect mother for you, one I am proud to have picked to birth my son." She finished, taking notice of both girls, who were still attached to Ichigo's arms. They both knew the story because when Amaterasu brought them back, the first few questions were about the orange-haired teen, and the kami gave them the answer and everything they would need to know. "Thank you." Took Amaterasu's attention away, bringing it back to her son. "Thank you for picking her." With a smile on her face, the goddess gave a small bow of her head. "But back to what I was saying, my human memories have Masaki Kurosaki, but my soul's memories they see you as its mother." Amaterasu then found herself staring into the chocolate orbs of her son's eyes, almost as if he was looking directly into her. "Why is that?" Ichigo watched as the beautiful raven-haired goddess nodded, walking towards him. "To explain that to you, my son. I need to send you to the past, and then you will know the answer." She stopped in front of him, taking out a hand from her sleeve and placing it onto his chest. When Amaterasu removed the hand, Ichigo looked around him, finding that he was in a completely different area than he was a minute ago. He also noticed the missing weight on his arms, meaning that Senna and Nozomi were both gone. "Probably with my actual body if that is a thing in Takamagahara," the orange-haired teen said, placing his eyes on the beauty in front of him. She just stood there looking up at him with a tiny smile. Placing his arms into the sleeves of the black and white modern haori he was wearing. Looking around he spoke. "Where are we? I can already tell that we aren't anywhere close to where we just were. We are currently in the human year of 1945. Hearing this made Ichigo look towards Amaterasu to find her walking away. "However, to us kami, we were fighting a war, the deities of China." Patching up to the goddess, Ichigo watched as she opened the door to show a field of blood and bodies of what he presumed of gods and goddesses of Chinese and Japanese origins. However, what caught his attention were the 2 people standing a few feet away from him. One he recognized as the goddess currently beside him, but the past version. The other was a man wearing the armor of jades with eyes the same color. Ichigo could only presume that the god was the Jade Emperor, the ruler and head of the Chinese gods. Amaterasu looked at the scene with sadness in her eyes, having to see this sight once more. The battle cost both sides hundreds of thousands of gods, and to her, it was the place her children died. All 6 of them, the children of Amaterasu, fell on this battlefield. Her eyes then fell upon the 6 bodies behind her old self. Silent tears descended from her eyes seeing the dead and impaled bodies of her sons, who have succeeded in things that other children of gods never have before. Made families in the human world and a royal family that ruled for millennials. Both watched as the 2 leading deities shook hands, making peace for the first time in decades. After a few minutes, the 2 broke contact and went back to their forces. As the goddess of the sun left, she stopped in front of her children. "I'm sorry for what I have done to you, my beloved children. I didn't wish this to happen to you," Amaterasu said to herself as she looked at their pale and dead faces. Silent tears fell from her eyes as she looked. "Please forgive me for what I have done to you, my beloved sons." But that the goddess left to return to her home with the other kamis, some staying back to pick up their dead kin and to bury them where they should be. As time went by and months turned to years, no one heard or saw the head or toe of their beloved leader and son. People grew worried for her as not even her brother husbands knew how she was doing. During this time, Amaterasu was mourning for her dead in her chambers, the dead that died because of her ambition. Her sons died to please their mother and fulfill their loyalty to her, and where did that lead them? To the endless darkness called death. The goddess was taken from her thoughts and mourning when she heard knocking. Amaterasu already knew who was at the door, and even so, she didn't respond or give permission to enter. For all she wanted was to be alone and allow her mind to wander, wishing for something to live for. But even so, the doors opened and the 2 that entered were her brothers, Susanoo and Tsukiyomi, entering her chambers. "Sister," the moon god said as he went to her side, leaving the storm god at the door. "You need to come out and see your people. They are worried sick for you and want to see the sunshine again." Amaterasu didn't make a move to show that she listened or cared. However, internally she knew she had to do something for her people, but she couldn't find the will or the power to do such a thing. All she wanted to do was sit and watch as the moon claimed Takamagahara. Time went by as the 3 kamis, the trinity of the Shinto, remained in silence, with the only sound being the breathing of the 3 siblings. All three of them didn't know of the presence of an orange-haired teen, and the older version of the sun god was watching them. The silence broke when Tsukiyomi spoke, asking a question she wanted answers for. "What do you want, Amaterasu?" he asked, grasping her hand, and for the first time, the goddess looked to him. "I know you lost your children, and I know they meant everything to you, but you forget that they were also mine and Susanu's kids as well." His hand squeezed hers once more. "So sister, what is it that you want? And if it's in our power we will help you, and we will not stop at whatever stands in our way." He nodded in the direction of Susanu, who nodded his head as in confirming what the moon god said. However, what followed was silence, a deathly silence that couldn't even be broken if a pin was dropped. Amaterasu didn't even know the answer to the question, nor did she know what her heart wanted. The silence continued for hours, making it uncomfortable for all three, but even so, the gods stayed with their sister, comforting her, showing that she wasn't alone, and it worked. For the first time, Amaterasu felt like she wasn't alone. The goddess's eyes widened at what came to mind. "I want another son. One who can live as a human and have powers that could surpass everyone, gods, angels, demons, dragons," she said out loud. It was so simple and it took her so long to think of it. Tsukiyomi felt a small smile grow on his as he nodded and stood to his feet. His sister's eyes followed him as he went to the door. "Then we will do everything we can to help you, sister," he said as he looked back, with Susanu moving to open the door. "No matter what happens you will have our support." He finished and left with the storm god following him not long after. Ichigo looked to the kami beside him, who was looking at her former self. His eyes went back to the scene in front of him, and when he did he found himself in a whole different room. Whereas the previous room was barren and had bright walls, this one was filled with items he didn't know the names of, and had dark walls. However, what took his attention was what was in the center of the dark room. Floating about 4 feet off the floor was a dark cloud-like ring, and when he looked into it, he saw his home, Karakura town. Besides, it was a happier and healthier looking Amaterasu. The sun kami also had something in her arms, a transparent bright circular object that felt so familiar but so different. "That is your soul." The voice beside him answered his unasked question. Looking over to Amaterasu. "It took a few years to make you, and the reason for that is because I couldn't find the right parents for you," she said looking into the cloud. "That was until now." Ichigo looked back to the scene of his home and watched as it zoomed onto a scene that amazed him and made his heart ache with want and pain. He watched as a young Isen Shiba fought a familiar-looking hollow, and how later his father was saved by someone who pained Ichigo's heart but also made a small smile onto his face. He couldn't help but allow a tear to descend from his eye at the sight of his mother. "I knew that no matter what parents I chose you would be powerful," the voice of Amaterasu said as he continued watching the scene. "But I wanted you to have the right kind of parents. Masaki Kurosaki and Isen Kurosaki were those parents at the time," she said looking at the scene, one where Isen Shiba, Ryokan Ishida and Urahara Kisuke were standing over an unconscious and in pain Masaki Kurosaki. "And when I heard the news of little Masaki's death, I wanted to go and bring you here." Ichigo listened to every word as he watched, and from the looks of it the story was done. When there was a long silence he looked up to the younger Amaterasu and watched as she nodded, and in a time span of a blink she was gone, taking his soul with her. What stopped you?" he asked looking beside him to find Amaterasu with a hurt look on her face. "My presence," she said without thinking. "For centuries the Shinto has been neutral and not stepping into the wars of the other faiths. So if my presence was felt in the human world, there was no deal, someone would have felt it and waged a war my people." With that the two were surrounded by a bright light, making Ichigo close his eyes. Ichigo opened his eyes and found that they were back to the current day Takamagahara, the weight on his arms proved it. Looking at the kami who was looking as dreamy and pained as she was in the memory. "No mother," he said trying to get used to it. Ichigo watched as Amaterasu's eyes grew and as she straightened her back. "I will be honest with you and say you will never replace my birth mother. But I will acknowledge that you made my soul," he said. The goddess nodded in understanding. Looking away, wiggling his arms, it seems the message was understood because both Senna and Nozomi released them. Placing his hands into his pocket and started walking in the direction of his room. Amaterasu watched as he slowly faded away, and she knew that he had more questions, and she would answer them all starting with their shared power, the flames of absolute darkness. A flame that killed pretty much everything that it touched. The word was pretty much, for now, there was one who survived its flames. Turning around, the goddess went, leaving her Maikos alone, heading in the direction of the throne room, getting a message from Yasaka, saying that he had finally arrived and was hoping for a meeting. As she went her outfit changed to a black kimono that had flame all over it. However, what stood out was wrapped around her neck, arms and hands was a familiar looking bandage, and most of all her once mixed orange-red eyes were now pure blood red. Apologize for the long wait, but here is another batch of chapters. But a few things before we start. About the dumbest known as the MC of the DxD universe, yes he might get a tiny group of girls being Asia, Irina and maybe another. Also don't expect me to make him a main character, I despise the Also in this story Joan of Arc isn't made into a sacred gear. Instead she is a part of Gabriel's House of Hearts. Yes I know that the brave souls were made once there was peace between the three biblical factions, but I don't really think Michael, Gabriel or God would want her to be made into a sacred gear. If you want a description of her just go with Jeanne d'Arc, but don't expect me to spell it like that. Her name is Joan of Arc and that is what she will be called. Someone bitched about me removing Orihim, and my response is that there are so many stories where she and Rukia are in his harem, and what's wrong with doing something different. Someone also mentioned that when Amaterasu donned that outfit at the end of the last chapter that it resembled Ichigo's Mugetsu, and yes that is where they share the connection. Ichigo has the power to use one of Amaterasu's strongest abilities, and when he donned Mugetsu some of it went into it. I will also be introducing other religions into the story, who they are, and what their descriptions are those I found on Google, and if they appeared in the manga or LN of the DxD series, then please let me know for when I looked it up on the wiki it had nothing. Only little things and not actual characters. Anyway I apologize for any errors and many thanks to BLUESHARD20 and Demonoprededrigan for helping with this story on some of the ideas and fixing some of the mistakes I missed. They have been one of the few who have been pushing me to continue writing this story. Akamegahara. Ichigo laid back in the bed he was given, with his head resting on his arm. He was having a hard time comprehending what he was told earlier today and how his mother was the origin of his Quincy powers. But at the forefront of it all Ichigo was thinking about the son Kami, Amaterasu the mother of his soul, and the person to pick his human parents. In all honesty he believed her when she first told him, mainly because of the feeling of familiarity he got around her, but that didn't mean Ichigo wasn't still curious. So when Amaterasu showed him those intense memories, everything became clear to him. He would never hate the goddess, for she returned something he missed since he lost it, but Ichigo also couldn't trust her so simply. His soul was screaming at him for that, but after everything he had been through and done for those he trusted. He ended up being betrayed by those trusted friends, who agreed with the Soul Society's poor choices concerning him. He couldn't openly trust anyone right now, not after what they did to him, or should he say what they didn't do. Shaking his head, Ichigo's thoughts went towards what else happened, mainly the things he learned about his birth mother. When he found out that the old man wasn't his true Zanpakuto, he always wondered what powers that mysterious spirit was for. Only during the earlier interaction did Ichigo realize what power he held, and to find that out that it was from his human mother, he tried fighting the growing smile on his face. In the end, he lost that fight. Turning onto his side, he kept looking at his new Zangetsu, which hasn't vanished since he awakened the first time. He was still waiting for his spirits to tell him it was time, but nothing happened yet. But Ichigo was feeling great to have his powers back at long last. 18 months since he lost them, and he never knew how much he missed his sadistic copycat of a hollow and the shade-wearing old man. Something else that has been on the front of his mind was the reunion between Senna and Nozomi. Ichigo never thought he'd be able to see the two again, believing that they were long gone and just a memory to the never-ending misery of his life. It was a silent moment when he saw them again, standing before him in the flesh like it never happened. Ichigo took slow steps, hoping it was really them. When he reached them couldn't help but embrace the two of them. Hell, he could admit he even let out a few tears, damn it. But that was days ago, and ever since then, they talked in private to catch up on things after their death and what's been happening in the present. While they talked, Ichigo was finally able to admire their beauty. The young teenager again blames Yuruchi and Tatsuki for his change. They were both beautiful in their own rights. Senna with her energetic personality, and Nozomi with her defensive habits. It was almost funny how alike and opposite they were. During their time together catching up, they came to know his story, and he came to know theirs. Talking to those who shared similar burdens was refreshing. The three were all used as weapons in the schemes of madmen. Also being judged by those who didn't understand them. The Soul Society not caring about how they felt and being used until they had nothing left. It was frustrating, but the three unique souls were glad they had each other through those hard times. The strong bonds made Ichigo realize how much he missed his old friends in spite of things. Yes, he will never forgive them for abandoning him when he wouldn't even do it if he was ordered to. But for the last year and a half the only people he would consider a friend back in Karakura were Tatsuki and Yuruchi, but the Weircat was more of a mentor figure for him. But Ichigo would never deny that he missed them. King. The voice of Zangetsu said, drawing the orange-haired teen's attention away from his thoughts. We're ready for you. As he appeared at the front of his mind. So whenever you're set, King, you know the pose. Ichigo got up to his feet and began stretching. During the next few days he would have to remain completely still, and when he returned, his whole body would be sore. When finished he sat down on the floor, cross-legged and nodded. "I'll be right there." With that the albino's and Bakuto spirit left. Reaching out his hand towards his trusted partner and weapon, Ichigo quickly found it in his hands. Placing the large sword onto his lap, running a hand along the side, Ichigo knew that it would take some time to get used to the new sword. He also knew that it would be true about the rest of the weapons he will need to use. Closing his eyes to concentrate and placing his hands on his sword. And without further delay, he entered his mindscape to find all three of his inner spirits in front of him. From there it didn't take long for the training to begin, starting with his sacred gear and the newfound demon powers inside of him. While he was glad he's getting stronger from this, it was still beyond hell of the training he's going to endure next. Hell. Surzich was looking at his reflection in the mirror, taking in his appearance and how he was dressed. Today was the day when the Shinto opened the doors to the other factions, and he was just one of many seeking an audience. The Egyptian, the Olympians, the Asgardians, and last but most certainly not least are the angels and the fallen angels were also going to be there. But what held the Mayu's mind was why the sudden change. The Shinto faction has always been seen as a neutral power, not wanting to make any allies and keeping to themselves, and with only fighting wars with its rivals the Chinese deities. Surzich found the change to be partially both welcoming but also terrifying. For even with its neutral tendencies the Kami's of Takamagahara had one of the strongest armies and that three of their gods were held in the top 20 strongest in their realm of existence. With their leading goddess, Amaterasu, being number 5, only being beaten by both dragon gods, himself and Indra. So the faction was one everyone at least wanted to be at peace with for the past centuries. "My lord." Immediately Surzich snapped out of his train of thought and looked back to the person who spoke. His wife and queen, standing there while she wore her usual maid uniform. "We are all ready to leave," was all she said, making the message clear to the Lucifer Mayu. Nodding his head as he grabbed the last article of his clothes, a shoulder cape that was black with gold trimming and red inner. Throwing it over his shoulders he clasped it on and made his way to leave. "Right," he said, but as he was about to head out through the doors, he was stopped by his wife. Looking over to the silver-haired beauty he was taken by surprise when he found her on his. Without a second to think he returned it, but it was broken not long after, making the man groan at the loss of a very rare occasion and show of affection with his wife and mother to his young son. He felt her hand on his cheek, making him look at her red eyes that matched his hair. "I don't understand why you are so worried, my love," she said as he felt her gaze look into his tainted soul. "But even if I don't, I can assure you that it is misplaced." Surzich knew what she said was true, but he couldn't find it in himself to actually believe it. So instead of giving her a straight answer, he instead allowed a small smile to appear on his normally stoic face and nodded. "If you say so, my beloved." He placed a kiss upon her forehead. "As you said, we are ready to leave. So let's not keep the high priestess of Takamagahara waiting for long. But I highly doubt that she will be the one waiting but ourselves," he finished as he opened the door. And as he did so he found the members of his peerage waiting for him. Takamagahara. The hall was quiet as the head of the Shinto faction sat on her throne, waiting for her guests to enter. Said room was bright with pristine white walls, with a large circular sliding door made of a beautiful dark brown wood, and in the center was a table with one chair at the head of it. The only other occupants in the room were a handful of mask-wearing Mikos, 2 of them recognizable, while the others kept their postures rigid. However, Amaterasu's mind was abuzz with more important thoughts than the posture of her Mikos. "Ra should be the first one I meet," she said to herself, watching the grand doors, waiting for them to open. The last time she saw the Egyptian god of the sun was over 2,000 years ago, and if she remembered correctly, the god was now leading the Egyptian faction after Horus and Amun left to do their own things. Amaterasu also remembered fighting the god, and honestly she was lucky she came out unharmed. Ra might not hold a seat in the top 10 strongest beings in the universe, but he was fast, cunning, and most importantly had absolute control of his powers. "My lady." The sound of the emotionless green-haired Miko at the foot of her throne said. "His greatness Lord Ra shall be arriving any minute now." "Thank you, Nozomi." Amaterasu responded as she nodded and moved around on her seat to get comfortable. And as her loyal friend soldier said, not even a minute after she was warned, the doors slid open, revealing the head of the Egyptian gods and goddesses. The man that entered looked just as he did the last time Amaterasu saw him. Ra stood at 6 feet with tanned skin and black hair. His eyes were those of a bird, golden and watching everything like the grand beast his true form was. The god was also half naked, wearing only shaggy pants and sandals. However, what stood out on him was his chest. Where there would normally be skin, muscles, bones, veins, and organs, for the Egyptian god there was nothing but darkness and a bright orange orb in the center. With him was the spear of Ra, a beautiful weapon that has always been by its owner's side. By the time Amaterasu was done looking over the god, he was already sitting down at the opposite end of the table, with his trusted lance leaning the seat he took. The two stared at each other as the guest was served some wine, and after taking a sip of the drink, Ra began what he came here for. I wish for an alliance between our two factions. His voice thick with an Egyptian accent. As you and many others know, both Horus and Amun have left, leaving me in charge of the gods of Egypt and the faction. Amaterasu nodded and asked. If it's fine for me to ask, why did they leave? She watched as the sun god looked at her, and she felt him look through her. So this is what they mean by his stare. I feel almost as if I was being judged from within. The goddess said as she stayed completely still, not showing her discomfort. I'll tell you when or if this alliance happens. Was all he said, and she nodded in understanding. Now back to the topic. Not only did we lose two of our strongest, the Egyptian and Shinto factions are known for being neutral, and with us holding seats in the strongest beings, our two religions also hold two of the strongest armies in the supernatural. He finished, taking a sip of the glass of wine he was given. Amaterasu thought over everything the sun god said. What he said about them having one of the largest armies in the supernatural was in fact true. However, that isn't the case anymore with the Shinto. Yes, they still ruled over the Shinigamis, but after millennia of inactivity, the newer and younger generations of their army were never taught about their divine beings and rightful leaders, but instead followed that dead husk of a king, the true god of death, and what was once one of the Shinto's divine beings. What angered the Shinto Kami's even more was that those that knew about them never thought that their descendants should know. The only family that remembered them were the Shibas, and they lost all their power and wealth after the demise of Cain Shiba. Then Isin Shiba left with no words of his whereabouts, leaving the Shiba clan in an even worse light. But right now she needed to focus on the here and now. So bringing her attention back to the Egyptian god, she nodded. Valid points. She said, making Ra smile. However, I must sadly say that our army isn't as grand as it once was. Amaterasu continued, watching as the smile dropped and as a brow raised. After countless centuries, going into millennia of no activity, they have been losing their connection to us. The goddess already knew what this might lead to but didn't care. Gods were beings that held honesty as their second most important thing, after their powers, so saying this out loud in front of a god that held a good reputation with other factions, shows him that what she said would be told to the others today. However, that won't be the case for long. She said, sitting up straight. This isn't known to the other pantheons, but some time ago I made another son, one that I used not only a part of my own soul to make, but also my brother, Tsukuyomi's soul, something that not many of my own people and gods know about. To a select few I intend to keep it that way. And my son will have the ability to face anything that stands him and come out on top. Amaterasu said with her voice full of pride and love. Ra listened as the high goddess of the sun spoke, and just by the way she was speaking, he knew she wasn't lying or exaggerating, and all it did was make the god more curious and interested in the son. If what you say is true, I'd like to meet this son of yours. He said, bringing his hand around his lance, the unspoken challenge left unsaid. He watched as his hostess nodded. I thought you might say that. I would love to introduce my son to you and allow a challenge. However, he's busy unlocking more of his strength and is regrettably unavailable at the moment. Ra watched as the goddess of the sun leaned forward. But, I must say that I'm interested to hear about your champion, Ra. Amaterasu said with a grin, and the named god couldn't help but smile with a nod and bow. But that can wait until later. Indeed. Ra agreed and took his hand off his trusted weapon and grabbed a glass of sweet wine he was given. With what you said about your faction's military, then I must say that I must postpone our alliance until I meet this new child of yours. And I believe you'll understand why. Amaterasu nodded. I can, and I would have questioned your leadership capabilities if you didn't say that. She watched as Ra tilted his glass of wine. Well, with that our meeting is done until further notice. If you are wishing to stay in Takamagahara, you are free to stay, just please remember whose home you are in. Finishing his glass, the Egyptian god stood, grabbing his lance. Understood. Thank you for inviting me to your lovely realm, but I must return to my own realm. Ra said, bowing his head, and in a flash of gold the god was gone. Amaterasu with a slight breath, she looked towards the masked-wearing Nozomi. Who's next? She asked, but she already knew the answer, but there was nothing wrong with making sure. Indra, my goddess. The stoic girl said from behind her mask, confirming what she already knew. After that it's Poseidon, who's standing in for Zeus, who's busy expanding his harem. Nozomi finished with a bit of venom on the last part. Nodding, the goddess took the glass of wine and took a sip. Of course. She said, and with that the doors slid open to reveal her next guest, and the most troubling one. Elsewhere. Ophis opened her eyes when she felt a surge of power, and it could only mean one thing. Someone who has control over darkness has awakened. Which could also mean, 1. This person is challenging her, or 2. She found a kindred spirit. But honestly Ophis didn't care, for all the infinite dragon wanted was its home. Going to close its current form's eyes, Ophis stopped when the power spiked again, making her open her eyes once more. Whoever this is, it said to itself as an annoyed look claimed its features, is going to wish it was dead. So finally getting up from the branch Ophis was resting on, it closed its eyes and felt for the power, and when the spike came, the Ouroboros dragon grabbed it with its power. And when Ophis did, its eyes widened when she felt it. It's equal, no, it's greater than my own. Ophis said to itself, blinking slowly. However, not only was the power greater than its own, it also felt warm and welcoming, something the infinite dragon has not felt since it lost its home. Jumping off of the branch Ophis was sitting upon, she summoned a portal to the owner of this power. Not knowing that it was walking into the home of gods or a faction that was hosting others. But little did the Kamis of the Shinto know, was that Ophis's control over her power was one of a kind, meaning none of them felt the Ouroboros dragon's entrance or its presence. However, that didn't mean no one felt it. For in a room not far from the infinite dragon, one would notice the room's current inhabitant's eyebrow twitch and how his head tilted in the direction of the Gothic Lolita. Soul Society. She has been like this for how long again? Shinji asked the red-headed lieutenant as they both looked down at the drunk raven-haired lieutenant. And why was I informed and not Captain Jashiro? Rukia has been like this since she was given the news about Ichigo. Renji repeated, scratching the back of his head. I brought the information to you. Bekase thought you might know where Ichigo is and how he's doing. The 6th Division lieutenant said in a whisper, which Shinji appreciated. Nodding his head, the blonde-haired man folded his arms. I sadly don't know our mutual friend's whereabouts, nor do I know how he's doing. No one does. Shinji confessed, closing his eyes as he played with something in his sleeve. After finding what he was looking for, he placed a few ken onto the table. I let her captain know that she will be out of commission for a bit. Just take her to her barracks or the Kichiki manor. The redhead nodded. Thank you, Captain Hirako, and I apologize for disturbing you. Renji said, bowing in the blonde's direction, his only response being a wave of his hand. The lieutenant watched as the captain left, leaving Renji and the hungover, and passed out Rukia in the emptying bar. Releasing a tired sigh, he picked up his best friend in a bridal carry and left, moving in the direction of Kichiki Manor. On the way there, he realized he had found himself visiting there a lot more recently. Especially with the news of Ichigo's mixed bloodline, and who and what he is. Renji looked down to Rukia, feeling the heart-twisting pain she's going through. Ichigo was her best friend for some time, during her days of being powerless from what she told him. He was glad to hear the stories of how she could be herself and not having to put on a mask of nobility she had to wear for years after being adopted into the Kichiki family. Ichigo was the Ravenet savior. The same one who beat the crap out of him to make him see the truth and to help save Rukia. He'd never truly understand how she was feeling, but he'd understand some of that feeling for once he lost his own best friend, and thankfully he was able to continue that friendship to this day. However, because of what they did and how they abandoned him like they did, Renji doesn't see a chance of their friendship repairing itself anytime sooner ever if he were in Ichigo's shoes. Releasing a tired sigh, Renji brought his attention back to the present, finding himself only a few feet away from the entrance to the manor belonging to the noble house of Kichiki. The red-head lieutenant nodded to the guard standing there, recognizing them and vice versa. Entering his captain's home, he found it as barren as it always is, with only a few maids keeping the place clean and guards standing at every hall. And honestly, if Renji was a first-comer, he'd find this place haunted. After countless times of doing this, Renji made his way to the hungover girl's room, which looked exactly as the manor itself, barren and empty, with the only things inside being the necessities. Placing the unconscious Rukia onto her bed, he went to leave, but as he was going to step away, something stopped him as he felt an added weight on his wrist. Looking back, the 6th Division lieutenant found the tired and spaced-out eyes of Rukia looking at him. She had a bright red blush, and even though Renji wished it was because of him being in her room, the redhead knew that the source of it was from the alcohol. But what came out when she spoke shocked the red-haired lieutenant. Place hic please sta hic stare and hic ji Rukia said, slurring her words because of the sake in her system. I don't wa hic nt to be al hic one. She finished, and Renji watched as the Ravenet fell back onto her bed, her grip on his sleeve slowly loosening, until it was gone. Repeating her words in his head, Renji felt the heat flow to his cheeks. Closing his eyes, he shook his head. Do not think of such things. She doesn't like me that way. And it would be wrong and a break of trust. I can't betray her again. He said to himself, those thoughts leaving him almost instantaneously. Opening them once more, Renji looked down to the unconscious lieutenant. Her face was a deep red from the alcohol, but past it he saw the beauty of his best friend's face. A face he thought was cute back when they were children in the lower districts years ago. Taking a few minutes to think of his next move, he released a breath and came to a choice. Climbing onto the bed, Renji moved her over a bit, making room for himself, and once there was enough room, he laid down next to her. Looking towards the ceiling with a frozen face, a blush still dawned on his cheeks and kept growing redder by the second. Out of nowhere he felt Rukia move and clung onto him like her life depended on her. Damn. I forgot Rukia moves a lot in her sleep. His mind races at that realization. Not moving a muscle, the redhead lieutenant slowly closed his eyes, wishing for sleep to claim its place. However, as he did so, he felt his uniform getting damp. Opening his brown eyes and looking down, he felt his heart drop as he found Rukia's face looking so hurt. I'm so sorry Ichigo and I'm so sorry, he heard her repeat in his sleep. Turning over onto his side, Renji placed an arm around her. I'm sorry I can't be replacement, but I'm here for you, and I always will be Rukia. He said to himself as he closed his eyes, placing his chin onto her head. Doing so he felt another arm going around him and Rukia squeezed him closed, placing her forehead onto his chest. Slowly sleep claimed the redhead and darkness surrounded him and just before it took its hold, Renji said one last thing to himself. You are going to pay Ichigo. Kyoto. Hisaka looked at the blonde man in front of her. He was wearing his usual green and white striped hat and kimono, with said hat hiding his eyes. The kitsune wasn't unfamiliar with the man, but that didn't mean she had to like him. So tilting her head a bit upwards, looking down on him, Hisaka spoke. I assume you are here because you want to know about my lady son, Ichigo Kurosaki. She asked, and the kitsune watched as the man nodded, confirming what she said. Closing her golden eyes, she gave him his answer. Ichigo Kurosaki has awakened his powers and has been training to control them. For how long? I can't say, only my lady knows, but I can make an assumption that it's been more than a week. She watched as the man's grey eyes glinted a bit and as a small smile dawned his face, which was quickly hidden by a hand fan. That's good to hear. The man said, which was followed by a long silence as the two stared at each other. However, for the first time since he arrived, Hisaka watched as he dropped the fan from his face and his emotionless facade vanished. But when you do get to see him again, let Ichigo know that he is missed. Not only his sisters and friends, but also some of those in the Sirite. The kitsune nodded. I will. She said, and got a nod from the man in thanks. This wasn't like him, and if Hisaka was to be honest, it frightened her. Never has she seen Kisu Kurahara like this. Looking at him normally, dropping her head to look at him directly. May I ask why you aren't yourself? When said man heard this, he brought his fan back up to cover the lower half of his face, hoping that he could hide it. However, Kisuke was already too late, so releasing a sigh, he closed his hand fan and placed it onto the table in front of him. I feel as if I have betrayed him. He said, simply watching as the golden-haired kitsune looked at him. He has done so much for us, for me, I could have done more, should have done more. The golden-haired priestess regarded the man for a moment, carefully weighing out how to respond. After a minute of silence, Kisuke decided it was time to leave, so he stood and bowed low to the priestess. Before he could take a single step, she spoke. I cannot help but tell you that no matter how pure your intentions, you did betray him, but that does not mean you simply give up. When you see Ichigo, apologize to him, show him the remorse that you are showing me. Then maybe there is a chance to fix that which was broken. Hisaka said while keeping the fact that Ichigo was not mad at Kisuke a secret. Kisuke looked stunned at the simple solution that Hisaka had presented to him. After a moment of thought, he resolved to himself that this was the only path forward to rebuilding the friendship he once had with the young man. He did not know if Ichigo would forgive him, but that was fine, as long as Ichigo understood that he did regret his betrayal. Thank you, princess, your wisdom has helped me greatly, Kisuke said while bowing again and using honorifics. Normally something that would make him cringe, but the priestess deserved nothing less for her help. Especially given her plain dislike of him. The corner of Hisaka's mouth twitched upwards just a tiny bit at the clearly uncomfortable formalities that Kisuke was giving her. Though she could appreciate the fact that this man is going out of his way to apologize for a non-existent slight. It showed that despite his general attitude, he had a good heart. Ichigo was lucky to have such a caring friend. Akamagahara. How many times do I have to say it? I would like to fight this child. The roar of the god of the ocean Poseidon yelled, slamming his fist the table. It's as simple as that. You will have our peace once I fight this child. As I told you, he isn't prepared and is still training. Amaterasu said, one hand clenching the armrest of her throne. It was always like this with the Greeks. Unless you want to fight an unconscious body, I suggest you drop it. There was silence in the grand hall as the two great beings stared down at each other. A fierce and undying storm clashing a beautiful and bright sun. No one dared to say a word or make a move out of fear for Poseidon's anger. Poseidon is tall and muscular, his face completely apathetic and devoid of any emotion, with golden blonde hair as well as light bluer eyes and black pupils. He wore an ornamental patterned golden choker and dark blue clothing with a golden border that covers the entire upper half of his body, revealing his abdomen and chest. Around his biceps, he wore a pair of golden rings. Covering his hands was a pair of seaweed-colored fingerless gloves with a blue band on his wrists, whilst around his waist was a white waistcoat with golden circular patterns, one which split in two at the front with a single cloth going down like a loincloth. Clasped in his hand was his trident, his trusted weapon. The silence was finally broken when a side door slid open, revealing the moon god, Tsukiyomi, who made his way to his sister. Amaterasu was watching her guest, making sure he didn't do anything that could start a war. Once Tsukiyomi stopped as he reached the throne and leaned down to whisper something to her. "We have an unexpected guest." Finally removing her eyes from the ocean god, she raised a brow to her brother wanting more information. She watched as the moon kami released a sigh. "Ophis is with Ichigo." But that all emotions left the goddess's face. Looking towards her guest, she stood up and said in a monotone voice. "Poseidon, I thank you for coming, and I promise that once Ichigo is ready and isn't busy with his duties, I'll let you know when he's ready for the fight." Before the Greek god could do anything, the sun goddess waved her hand and he was gone. Making the Camus and Maikos the only ones in the room. Without thinking or stopping, Amaterasu left the room with Tsukiyomi, Nozomi and Senna following slowly behind her. "I don't understand. Why is it here? I thought Ophis' only interest was getting its home back," she said, small flames flickering off her hair. How long? How long has Ophis been with my son?" "I don't know how long, but one of the servants found the door open and went to investigate," was all Tsukiyomi said as he followed her from the right. "My best guess is that it was here for a good few hours and worst case scenario for days." There was silence as they made for his room. "Why Ichigo? What interest does Ophis have with my son?" she said to herself as they rounded the corner and into the sleeping orange-haired teen's room. There lying on the bed was Ichigo, who had sweat dripping from his brow, a normal sight to be honest. But what caught the goddess's eyes was the figure standing beside the unconscious teen. There stood a cute black-haired and black-eyed gothic Lolita. Hearing the drawing of swords, Amaterasu held out her hand, stopping the two behind her from doing something stupid. "Ophis," she said with a cold voice. "Why are you here and only a few days after Great Red?" "I can sense his powers," the girl said in a monotone voice. "He has a familiar feeling his power does," Ophis said quickly, not taking its eyes off of the orange-haired teen. "That doesn't explain why you are here, Ophis," Amaterasu said, frowning at the humanoid dragon. When silence followed and remained for a good 3 minutes, she dropped her hand and closed her eyes. "Do you wish my son any harm? At least answer me that." Opening her eyes, she found black slitted eyes looking at her. "No," was all Ophis said and looked back at the unconscious teen. "I do not wish this child harm. His powers interest me." Releasing a sigh, Amaterasu turned around and went to leave. "Even though I do not like you, Ophis. You are welcome to stay, but please do not leave this room, and if you need any help." She gestured towards the dark-haired Shinigami that was dressed as a Maiko. "She will be stationed outside." Not waiting for a response, Amaterasu left, followed by her brother and her friend guard. Hair still flickering with flames, the Sun Kami allowed her worry to vanish from her mind, and with it went the flaming hair. "Nozomi," she called out, and without hesitation the Shinigami knelt in front of her. "While Ophis stays here, I want you to guard the room. Make sure she does nothing to Ichigo, and if she does, inform no one but myself and my brothers." "Yes, my lady," came the response from the kneeling form. "What if Ichigo wakes up?" she asked, looking up to her. Nodding, Amaterasu answered. "Do the same. Inform me or my brothers." When she saw the girl nod, she made to leave, returning to her business of trying to make peace with the other factions. Karakura town. In the basement of an abandoned apartment complex, the sounds of clashing swords and explosions could be heard. This basement obviously didn't belong there with its sky and the massive amount of space it held. In a room not far from the fighting sat two people, both enjoying tea and each other's company. One of the two was a green and white bucket hat wearing man, and the other was a dark-skinned tights wearing beauty. When there was silence in the room, Kisuke decided to ask a question he already knew the answer to. "You love him, don't you? Our beloved favorite student, that is." Irichi did a spit take at the question, getting the warm drink all over the man opposite her. For not only did it come out of nowhere, but because it was also true. Watching as her best friend and former lover wiped his face of the drink, she answered the question he asked. "Was that question really necessary when you and I both know that it's true?" Shrugging, he spoke. "Just wanted to hear it in your own words, my dear," Kisuke said, putting his signature hat back on. His eyes were then on the fighting going on outside of the room they were in. "You aren't the only one that loves him, which is obvious to both of us." Looking out the one-way window, the Flash goddess found herself watching the fight as well. Watching as the two 3-month-old Shinigami spar, Irichi couldn't be happier at the progress they have made in their training. Neither were close to Ichigo's growth speed, but both Karen and Tatsuki should be proud at how far they have gotten. Both of them have achieved their Shikai, and Karen has started to train for Bankai. Further in the distance of the massive basement, both former exiled captains saw flashes of blue, showing that the younger Kurosaki has been doing her own fair share of training as well. And if Yurichi is to believe what Ryukin has said, the young citrus fruit has achieved her own Shikai. If Ichigo was here, he'd want to kill us for involving his sisters into something they shouldn't be a part of. She said to herself, already imagining the look that will be plastered on her favorite student's face. But he'd still be proud of them. How is it? Kisuke asked, gaining her attention once more. How is training someone who loves the same person you do? Finally looking towards her, Yurichi saw a glint in his eyes, something that happens often. Don't you get annoyed or a bit jealous? And what would you do if he chose her over you? You do know I'm bi-curious, you asexual scientific maniac. Was all she said, looking towards her third student, examining her gentle curves. Also, I wouldn't mind seeing what's under all the boyish clothes she wears. Her pupils turned into slits, and she licked her and leaned her chin onto her hand. What did I do if my strawberry chose her over myself? Well, that's simple. She looked back to Kisuke and grinned. I'll just talk him into making a harem. There was silence as the dark-skinned beauty stared at the crazy scientist with a face-splitting grin. When it finally broke, it was broken because of the light laughter of the two best friends. I can't see it happening. The blonde-haired man said as the two calmed down. I honestly can't see our student with anyone. He took a sip of his tea and continued. Ichigo seems like a person who isn't interested in the opposite gender nor his same gender. I think Ichigo is asexual. Yurichi shrugged and looked out the one-way window once more. I have to disagree with you, Kisuke. Ichigo is interested. However, because of the interventions of people and things claiming his time, he has never been able to let his feelings out about certain things. Also, Aizen was a shitty father when it came to raising his son in certain aspects. Ichigo probably never had anyone to talk to about girls. She finished sipping her own tea. The two then watched and allowed the silence to claim the room. After a few minutes and having seen the two new Shinigamis take a break, Yurichi got to her feet wanting to continue her training with Tatsuki. Going to leave, she was stopped when a thought came to her. Kisuke. She called out, the only thing telling her the man was listening was the title of his hat. Any news on Ichigo and the Shinto? When he nodded and didn't answer her question verbally, Yurichi left with a little pang of hurt in her heart. Within seconds she shampooed away and found her newest student sitting down on the ground in her actual body and drinking water. With only a look, the dark-haired girl nodded and stood, following her teacher, and off they went to start the training for a move only a few people knew, Shungm. Ichigo's Mindscape. My body is going to be in so much pain when I return to it. The owner of said Mindscape said with an exhausted sigh, watching the particles of his released sacred gear disappear. Across from him was Lucifer Morningstar, the owner of the power he just used. Said spirit was lying on the ground exhausted as he breathed heavily, the complete opposite of how Ichigo was. Never let anyone tell you are slow to learn new things. Also do us a favor, go ask Cat and Clogs to teach you some Kido, he said between breaths, having had to fight the Mindscape's owner and finding him learning the moves faster than he himself did when he was younger. Minutes passed as the two relaxed and regained their bearings. When about 5 minutes went past, the two heard the sound of the other spirits arriving, and the old man spoke first. Yes. You should ask Kisuke Urahara to teach you a few of the Shinigami spells. He said, gaining a nod from the orange-haired teen. But we came here to say that your time is up. It's time for you to return to your body. Getting to his feet, Ichigo dusted himself off and spoke. Right before I go back, can I get an idea on how long I was here? He looked to all of his spirits, Lucifer having finally gotten to his feet. You've been here for a few months, King. His hollow Shinigami spirit said, grinning, and when you do go back you won't be alone. Zangetsu said, his grin growing large. There's this girl beside you, only ever looking at you, and she's cute. I'd get her number if I were you. Rolling his eyes, Ichigo nodded. Thanks, Zangetsu. He then looked to the more serious of the three spirits. Old man, should I know anything before I head back? The Quincy spirit nodded. Yes. When you return, your spiritual pressure won't be like it was before. Yes, I was uncontrollable and unending. But now it's going to be like you and Aizen. No one will be able to feel it, but when they are a certain amount of distance from you, their souls will explode and they will die. He said and looked towards the albino counterpart of his owner. Which is why this girl is interesting. She is at your side pretty much 24/7 and she hasn't been affected by it at all. Iwich looked at him again. I'd recommend making an ally or friend out of her. Ichigo nodded and went to speak, but was interrupted by the silver-haired spirit who spoke in an annoyed voice. That girl's name is Ophis, and don't let her body deceive you. She is actually a shapeshifter, and in the past she has taken many forms. The one she had when I was alive was that of an older man. He then looked Ichigo directly in the eyes, crimson red staring into chocolate brown. It is also the second strongest being in the universe. Ophis has gone by many titles throughout its lifetime, but it is more commonly known as the Ouroboros dragon. Infinite dragon god. Feeling the eyes of the spirits on him, he nodded. Yes, she's a dragon, but she lost the ability to transform into it when she gained the ability to change her appearance. Ichigo took this information to heart and nodded. Also, on a lighter note, you should know why you have that. Following where he was pointing, he found it was pointing to the giant king piece that has been bugging him for his whole time he was here. As you, I'm a founder of the house Lucifer in hell, but what you don't know is that I'm connected to the magic my descendants use. So as they use it, I'm still gaining information about what's happening in hell. The silver-haired man said. And after the war, the devils and demons took a great loss in numbers to the point where we could have gone extinct. Ichigo nodded, having been told this during his training. The person who took the place of my dear friend, Beelzebub, was a genius and made what is now called the evil pieces. The power to make people into demons. The evil pieces are built around a chessboard. He then pointed to him. You are a king, so you have the ability to make anyone you wish into a demon. Lucifer then brought his hand to the side of his head and Ichigo watched as a chess piece appeared, a queen. This is one of the pieces and all of them are special in their own way. The queen, the strongest, has the mix of the knights, bishop and rook. The knight gives the person extra speed. The bishop gives the user more magic and greater control of it. The rook allows one to have greater strength. And last but not least, the pawn, my favorite to be honest, is just as it is in the board game. Ichigo nodded his head. Thank you for letting me know, Lucifer. He said and looked towards the old man. I'll be trying to make an ally of Ophis, as you suggested, old man. The spirit nodded, and after one more look over of them all, he gave a tiny smile. Thank you for all you all have done and taught me. They all nodded and Ichigo closed his eyes, and within seconds he was gone from his mindscape. Hakamegahara. Slowly opening his eyes, Ichigo found his body sore and throat dry as if he was in the Sahara Desert. I knew it. He said to himself as his eyes adjusted to the bright light around him. When his vision was clear and his sight wasn't foggy, the orange-haired teen found dead gray eyes looking into them, making it feel as if they were looking into his soul. Girl. The person said in a dead and emotionless tone. Ichigo then watched as the door swung open and a familiar face appeared with her sword drawn. Go tell the pretty goddess that the boy has woken up. Ichigo found those familiar purplish eyes looking at him and he heard. Ichigo. She said with a bit of happiness in her normally stoic voice. Silence followed, but after a full minute Nozomi shook her head and left. Wanting to speak and ask a few questions, the hybrid stopped as his throat resisted such a thing. Looking around, he found a glass of water, but where it was in the hands of the owner of the dead eyes. This must be Ophis. Ichigo said to himself as he watched her hand it to him. Taking the glass of water, nodding his head in thanks, he took slow sips of it, allowing a slow adjustment. After finishing the glass he spoke, his throat feeling much better. Ophis, am I right? The little girl nodded. Yes. She said, and he felt her eyes roaming his form and his body. You interest me, Ophis said, look back to his eyes. Why do I feel familiarity from you? Was all Ichigo could say as they stared at each other. I don't know, he finished. Ophis went to speak but was stopped when they heard the sound of people coming towards his room. Ichigo watched as the black-haired girl snapped her fingers and a portal opened behind her. I'll be seeing you soon, Ichigo Kurosaki. But that Ophis stepped back into the portal and it closed, allowing Ichigo to see the door to his room. Standing there was Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi, and the two Mikos he knew as Nozomi and Senna. However, who came in next made the former substitute Shinigami's blood boil. He didn't know the man, but the uniform he wore and how he dressed just reminded Ichigo of the betrayal and pain they caused him, for the man was wearing the clothes of a Shinigami and a cloak that resembled a captain, but one thing stood out, and that is the diamond that held the division number was empty. Who the hell are you? He asked with poison in his voice, unknowingly releasing some of his spiritual pressure onto the target of his question. He watched as the old man's eyes widened at the density of it. I'd recommend answering, old man, because I have no patience for you or the others. The man smiled, showing all his teeth. Well, young Kurosaki, I am none other than Nichib Himsu, leader of Squad Zero and the voice of the Soul King himself. All the while he was doing this he was moving around like a fool. Now you might be wondering why I'm here. Ichigo looked at the big fool with blank and uninterested eyes. But the man continued anyway, annoying the orange-haired teen even more. Well, it's simple, young Kurosaki. I'm taking you to the Soul Sock. Before he could finish he felt and saw a black orb going straight towards him. The orb stopped at nothing as it went through walls and ceilings and finally stopped when it was about 15 miles away, and when it did, it exploded and the shockwave afterward sent all and everything flying, destroying structures within 5 miles of its stop. That. The owner of the attack said as he got to his feet, summoning his Zanpakuto. When he stopped the blade was the man's neck. I will not be going back to them. They betrayed me. I sacrificed so much for them and what did they do? Everyone watched as the ground at the teen's feet started fracturing and his cracks started growing. Those who had normal powers found it extremely hard to breathe and the two gods seeing this took them away from the room. They abandoned me and continued spying on me. Ichigo yelled, shoving Zangetsus the man's throat, finally drawing blood. No. You will not be taking me back. The only way I'll go back to them is when half the captains die or when the balance is threatened. Ichigo stared at the orange-haired teen, feeling the edge of the boy's zanpakuto leave a little cut on his meaty neck. The power flowing off of the boy was extraordinary, and he found it a bit hard to breathe, but not only that, but his soul, it felt as if a giant was threatening to crush it. On the outside and those around him he looked indifferent with black eyes that showed interest. However, on the inside he was having a small mental breakdown at what the substitute Shinigami said. He doesn't care about them. Was all the monk said to himself. The hope of the Shinigamis, the hero of the Winter War, is gone. All that remains is a betrayed boy filled with rage. After seconds went by, Ichigo stepped back, knowing what the boy was thinking of him backing down. His smile appeared and he said, alright, young Kurosaki. If that is your decision then so be it. His smile dropped as he looked into the boy's eyes. But I must tell you that because of the power you have, you may not be able to return to your home on Earth. So I'd like to extend an offer from the Soul King himself. If you ever need a home you are welcome to live in the Soul Palace. Ichigo snorted, never dropping his sword or guard. As if. He said and looked towards his soul's mother and after a quick nod the beauty left. Looking back at the man and continuing. I already have a plan to deal with that. And it doesn't involve you or the Shinigami of the Gate 13. Taking a step, Ichigo raised a hand and unclenching his fist, he held out a finger and within a blink a pure black orb appeared. So I will say this once, old man. Stay away from me and those I care about, and if you do, you better make sure it's for a good damn reason. When the hybrid finally stopped, the smell of burning clothes filled the room, for Ichigo's charged Zero was mere inches away from the leader of Squad Zero. So I suggest you leave now. The two Shinigami stared at each other, neither backing down, neither giving the other a need to attack. But going through the older of the two's mind was one thing, and that was. He's a threat and needs to be dealt with. If he isn't willing to come back peacefully then it will be by force. If that does not work then he will be put down for the good of the Gate 13. When the royal guard left, Ichigo took his time calming down, and when he did the orange-haired teen realized what he did and apologized to Amaterasu for the damage he caused her shrine and home. But that wasn't the worst of the damage. For in the aftermath of the explosion, it turned out that it had destroyed a good portion of a floating island, an island and home that belonged to Benzaten, the kami of flowing things, and most importantly love. When Ichigo found out whose island that was he went onto his hands and knees and apologized, and as is expected of a god of love, she forgave him, but only after he promised to come visit her when he was given time. And with that the affair was done. As days went on, Ichigo spent time with Senna and Nozomi, telling them both what had happened since they last saw each other, and they told him how they came back. The orange-haired teen kept his promise to Benzaten and went for a visit where they enjoyed tea and talked about certain things. There were days when Ichigo went days with his soul's mother learning more about the sun goddess. He also spent days with Tsukiyomi, and from the moon god, he not only learned that the Shinigamis were once the grand army of the Shinto, who would lay down their lives for their deities, proving that betrayal was in the blood of the race. But Ichigo also learned that he was also related to Tsukiyomi by blood, formed the Shiba blood his father gave him. Ichigo soon found his time here was coming to an end. When it did, Amaterasu and Tsukiyomi sat him down and explained that because of his power, he might cause a lot of damage to those around him, but also could cause damage to the earth itself. So for when he returns he'll be going to Ice Grand Shrine, where he will remain with Yasaka, Amaterasu's connection to the world of the living, for 6 months to allow him to get used to the air. Before he left his mother gave him a gift, a small black box, and when opened it held a small silver bracket, composed of overlapping links with a small cylindrical clasp with gold ends. She then went on to explain that this will suck in all the extra power leaking out of him, similar to Kenpachi's eye patch. Once he placed it around his wrist he felt an unknown weight lift from his body. Thanking the Sun Kami, Ichigo said his goodbyes to his friends and the other kamis, all having given him something, and after his final goodbyes, those being with Senna and Nozomi, the hybrid left the home of the Japanese gods. Now months later Ichigo found himself sitting at a table with an open letter in one hand, and in the other was the contents, a driver's license, and on the table not a feet away were car keys that belonged to a BMW Series 3. Across from him was Yasaka, someone Ichigo has found himself enjoying the company of. Yasaka was a beautiful 9-tailed kitsune with golden blonde hair, ears, and tails, and had golden yellow eyes. Her daughter, Kanu, was an exact copy. And said daughter was leaning his back, with her head leaning between his shoulders. My lady congrats you on accomplishing that, Strawberry. Yusaka said, grinning and making Ichigo groan in annoyance at her name for him. Those keys are also a gift from her. Nodding, Ichigo grabbed the keys and placed them into his pocket. Thanks. Was all he said as he placed a license into his wallet. I'll give her my thanks when she visits it in my sleep. It wasn't a lie, Ichigo found most nights in the company of the beauty known as the Shinto's leader. During that time they spent talking to each other about their days and how everything was going. Ichigo also found himself staring at her for much longer than usual. But it wasn't the first time, it started whenever he left the home of Benzaten. Whenever he was with Nozomi, Senna, Amaterasu and now Yusaka, he found himself looking at them more often. But it wasn't the only thing he noticed when he was with them, Ichigo also felt as if they were doing the same thing. Ichigo. He heard someone call him and looked up to the beautiful Kitsune. That won't be necessary because she would like to talk to you now. She said seriously and he knew what she meant. Nodding, Ichigo responded. Right. Is this about me being able to go out now? Because, no offense, I'm starting to grow tired of this place. He said, playing with his bracelet, something that is shown to be working but was also very handy. The beauty nodded. It is. She said, standing up. He followed after moving Kon into a position she'd be comfortable in. All I know is that you will be going to Kuoh Academy for you to continue your education and to do other things my lady hasn't told me. She finished as they walked out of the room. Nodding, Ichigo placed his hands into his pocket and followed Yusaka to the usual room where it would happen. But as he did, Lucifer spoke to him. Ichigo, I think she might be good for your peerage. Probably a bishop would work for her. Ichigo mentally nodded, giving the former Mayu his opinion. I agree. However, I don't think mother will approve. He said to the spirit. Yusaka works for her and is her connection to this world. He imagined the man nodding. True, but if we think about Amaterasu, then she wouldn't mind. She might actually approve this because she would want her son, Ichigo, and her connection to the plane, Yusaka, to have a greater bond. Ichigo watched Yusaka as she turned a corner, her tail swaying in the air. Lucifer wasn't lying. The Sun Kami cared about both of them and would want to see each other get along, she told him herself in the dreams. But still he was hesitant. I'll ask mother to be sure because there might be side effects. Ichigo told the spirit, whose only response was a shrug with a nod. When his attention returned to what was in front of him, Ichigo found him standing in front of a throne. Sitting on the throne was Yusaka, who had her eyes closed and mouth slightly opened. He already knew what was happening because not only has he seen it before but because of the energy circling around her. In the meantime, Ichigo found himself looking around the room once more. The room was plainly made with white walls, only a third of it from the bottom being Japanese cypress planks. The ceiling and floor of the room was made of grey and black wood tiles. However, the contents of the room, those were the interesting parts of the room. Decorating the room were stands, pedestals, and cabinets holding trinkets, jewelry, crowns, armor, and swords. Along the walls of the room, pictures were aging all the way back to when Japan wasn't Japan, but small clans fighting each other. In short, this room was about Japan's long history of conflicts and peace. Ichigo looked back to the throne and found what was once the golden eyes of Yusaka looking at him. But these eyes, they were much brighter and beautiful than the golden eyes of the Kitsune. The eyes that were looking at him were red-orange. But they weren't the only change. The once bright and beautiful golden blonde hair that belonged to Yusaka was a familiar shade of black. Smiling, the teen spoke. Mother. He said, his head nodding. Even though Amaterasu was his soul's mother, she was still the head kami of his religion. Yusaka told me you have things for me to do. The embodiment of the Sun Kami nodded. Hi, I do, my son. She said, her voice having a slight echo in it. You will indeed be going to Kuoh town where you'd be continuing your education like Yusaka said. However, I have other things I want you to do there, Ichigo. He nodded, but he wanted to get what Lucifer told him earlier out of his head first, and now was the best opportunity. Of course. But before we talk about that, may I ask you something? The possessed body nodded and waved, giving him the signal to continue. As you know, I have a peerage. Ichigo summoned a crimson red colored bishop piece. I already have Nozomi and Senna, and both of them are one of my 8 pawns. The goddess possessed Yusaka nodded. So that was what I was feeling. She said, placing her hand onto her chin. Your demonic power feels quite beautiful, to be honest. Almost as if I was watching the sun rise in Takamagahara. Ichigo said nothing as he took that in, but in his mindscape Lucifer was crying waterfalls when the goddess said that. Yes, thank you. You beautiful and majestic being. Thank you. The spirit yells into his mind. The teen shook his head and gave a small bow. Thanks, I guess. Was all he said, and the goddess nodded with a small smile. Ichigo then continued. Well, why I bring this up is because I'd like to add Yusaka into my peerage. Amaterasu looked at him and after a few seconds he continued. Over the months I've been here I've grown fond of her company and would like to have more time to talk with her when I'm gone." The goddess nodded and waved him to continue. "But that isn't all. As you know, I'm new to all this faction stuff and maybe with Yusaka I could learn more about this stuff." Amaterasu looked into her son's eyes and saw that he was being honest. She wanted to say yes and everything was telling her to do so. But if Yusaka was to be made a demon, she could lose her connection to the kitsune. Which is something she didn't want to do until Kanu was ready to take her mother's place. "If I may have a say, my lady," the voice of the owner of the possessed body said in their shared mind. "I would like to be a part of his peerage." Amaterasu mentally nodded, but it didn't seem Yusaka was done yet, for she continued. "I also see this as a way to fix the bond between the Shinigamis and the Shinto when he takes his rightful place as the Soul King, or more importantly the true Shinigami." When the nine-tailed kitsune finished, the sun goddess was surprised at what she said. She completely forgot about that. For hundreds of centuries Amaterasu thought she'd never be able to regain the grand army of the Shinto. But with what her friend and worldly connection said gave her hope that it could happen. Without much thought the possessed body nodded. "Yes. You may make Yusaka a part of your peerage." She watched as her son bowed. "Now with that over I must tell you what you will be doing in Cowtown besides continuing your education." Amaterasu then went on to explain that he'd be there to be the Shinto's representative when the time comes. But most importantly he's there to stop all those that threaten to stop the biblical factions from making peace, for if the Shinto wanted peace with them, they need to get over their own problems. Within days Ichigo was ready to head back into the real world, and when he did, he didn't know how much he missed the sound of people talking or the sounds of cars driving by. So as Ichigo drove to his soon-to-be home and his town he couldn't help but allow his smile to appear. "Why do we even allow them here?" Sona said as she walked past a trio of boys, all three of them looking at the girls in the hallway, including her with drool dripping from their. One of the most prestigious schools in all of Japan, and we have students like them. Releasing a tired and annoyed sigh, the Citri heiress made her way to the school's front gates, fighting the urge of disgust and hate entering her mind at the sight of the three. School had ended 45 minutes ago, but because of her position as student council president, she had stayed back to finish some stuff up. Behind her were her queen, Tsubaki, and the rest of her peerage having left to head home already. As the short Ravenet made her way to the gates she didn't notice the figure she was about to crash into. So when it happened she almost stumbled backwards into Tsubaki. But before she could lose her footing she felt a strong hand grab her shoulder, stopping Sona from falling into her queen. Looking up at the person she found chocolate brown eyes looking into her own, but as she stared into them she felt the power in them. It felt almost infinite and the weight it held wasn't normal. But then she caught the mop of hair he had. Bright orange, and with the sunset behind him, it made the person look as if he was shining. "Are you okay?" he asked, and Sona got the feeling she could trust this stranger. Her only response was a nod of her head, shocking herself and Tsubaki behind her. "Good." The orange-haired teen released his hold on her. "I'm sorry about that, I was daydreaming." Regaining her bearings, the heiress straightened herself and her mask returned. "Thank you for catching me. Also, I'm the one who should be apologizing." She gave a small bow. "I wasn't paying attention to my surroundings, and I never felt your press." Sona stopped mid-sentence at that. "I should have felt his presence though." Looking at the teen in front of her. He wasn't normal, not in the slightest, and he also wasn't a demon because if he was, the heiress would have met him already. So he was either a fallen or an angel, but the stranger didn't give her that feeling at all, and when he caught her just now, Sona should have felt pain, but she didn't. So just with that, she knew he was neither. Shaking her head she looked at him again, remembering something she read earlier. "Am I right to assume you are Ichigo Kurosaki? The new student joining for his last year in class 3A?" she asked, remembering the paper she was given and reading about such a thing. But he wasn't what Sona was expecting. What she was expecting was someone of the same gender as her and most of the population of the school. He nodded and answered. "Yes, I am." Ichigo looked between the two, and Sona saw a flash in his eyes. "May I ask who I have the pleasure of meeting?" he asked, with what she could tell was a bit of interest. Getting the wrong idea immediately, Sona stepped back and spoke to herself, but also to Tsubaki, who has been watching Ichigo the whole time. "Please say he's not like those three and the other males of the academy." "I don't think he is," came to a response from her queen over the connection. "Ever since you bumped into him his eyes never left your face, and when he was looking at me," Ichigo gave a small nod, "and even then his eyes were firmly on my eyes." Tsubaki finished. After hearing this, Sona relaxed and returned to how she was before. She bowed her head and finally answered his question. "That's right, I never introduced myself. My name is Sauna Shitori, and I'm the student council president. To my right is Tsubaki Shinra, the vice president." She looked back up and watched as he bowed to the both of them. "It's nice meeting you too," he said with a small smile. Sona then watched as he looked to the academy behind them. I know the day is over, but could I get more information on the academy I'm joining? All I know is that it was once an all-girls school and that it is a prestigious school too. He asked Sona with interested eyes. Not stopping the small smile that appeared on her face, the short ravinette said to herself. Perhaps I was being too quick to judge him. He's nothing like the other males in this place. But still a bit too soon to fully say. It's a good start. Sona nodded and turned around. Of course. She then looked to her queen. Tsubaki, you may head home. I'll be taking Mr. Kurosaki on a tour to inform him about the academy. The long-haired beauty bowed and said. Of course. I'll be at the mansion when you return. Tsubaki stood up to her full height and continued. If you ever need me, I'll be on standby. Sona nodded in thanks, and with that, her queen was off. She watched as the tall ravinette entered the limo that was there to take them both home, but was now only taking one. Watching as the limo left, she then went on to give Ichigo a tour of the place and tell him more about Kuoh Academy. Then throughout the hour or two of the whole thing, she never felt his eyes move anywhere from her face or the places she showed him. Elsewhere, a crimson-haired teenager groaned into her hands. I truly despise them all. She said into her hands as she felt the hot water of the shower flow over her. Why do they only ever look at me as if I'm a porno? Why can't I be treated as if I'm a normal human person? I despise them all strongly. All the male population of this academy should drown in a lake. Removing her hands from her face, Rias took a deep breath to vent out her frustration and turned around to face the shower rod. Allowing the water to wash over her face, but also washing away her tears. I'm cursed to live a life of unending misery with a man I hate, and I will probably be paraded around as if I'm a gift to all the old demons to ogling over me. She thought to herself. Rias hated her life and how things have led up to now. Being forced into a marriage her will. Having to go to a school that was full of people who drooled over her or glared at her because of their jealousy of her beauty and curves. The only people who cared about her were her peerage, as well as Sona and her peerage. The beauty also knew that Surziches cared about her, but as time led up to the marriage, Rias slowly stopped believing that he did. Now the only hope she has left is to welcome the Welsh Dragon's user into her party. But even if Rias did, the pervert would probably try to get into her skirt or even her bra. And what could she do about it? Nothing, because Issei Hayadu was her last hope and only chance of breaking the contract between her and Riser's betrothal, and obviously he'd want a big reward for that, and what else than seeing her or having her would satisfy one of the 3 legendary perverts of the academy. In fact, excluding Kiba, most of the other boys in the school were just as bad as the perverts, just not as daring. Hell, even devils have standards on that sort of behavior, damn it. Rias was taken from her self-pity when her enhanced hearing allowed her to hear the sound of someone talking and making its way to her office. Knowing who the voice belonged to, the Gremory heir turned off the water and got out, grabbing only a small yellow towel to dry her hair. Exiting the washroom, she watched as the doors opened to show her best friend and childhood rival, Sona Citri. But what she didn't expect was for the demoness to be joined by an orange-haired chocolate brown-eyed boy. Being too shocked to cover herself, Rias didn't watch as the teen turned around, having only taken a single look at her. And once again one of the devil princesses of hell was shocked at what happened. He's not like the others. That was all she said as she stared at the back of the stranger's head. Shaking her head, a frown appeared on her face. No. He's probably faking it. I've got to keep my guard up. But what happened next just placed her back into a state of shock. Sorry about that. The teen said with an honest voice, but Rias also noticed a bit of familiarity in it as well, as he moved towards the doors. If you'll excuse me, I'll leave to give you some time to dress. Rias then watched as the orange-haired boy looked at her best friend. I'll be outside. Was all he said as he closed the doors, never looking back. Sona couldn't help but allow the smug fly across her face as she looked at her birthday suit-clad friend. It will no doubt take time, but she'll get used to him. She said to herself. Rias shook her head and went back to the washroom and grabbed her clothes, taking them back to the main room. She slowly got dressed, but she couldn't help but say. Sorry about that. Rias didn't hear a response, but something told her it was fine. I wasn't expecting Sona to bring someone with her. Don't worry about it. A response came from outside the door. I should have knocked before I opened it up. Nobody said anything about a shower in a club room. The teen finished. Rias looked to Sona, who was looking at her. She asked the unspoken question, and the answer came when her rival spoke. The blame is mine, Ichigo. It was my fault for not warning you. The Gremory heiress then watched as a teasing smile appeared on the Citri heiress's face. You see, Rias tends to walk around naked when she's here or at her home. The crimson-haired girl gave a glare at Sona for telling him that as she felt a blush dawning on her face. Wait, I'm blushing. She said to herself, surprised. Rias hasn't blushed since she can't even remember the last time she blushed. But then she remembered something about earlier. Your name was Ichigo, am I right? The only response was a nod from Sona and the hum from the other side of the door. You didn't sound so surprised when you saw me. What is that? Rias then watched as a serious look came across Sona's stone face, as if she also wanted the answer. It didn't take long for the orange-haired teen to answer. My sensei she always appeared out of nowhere wearing nothing at all. She heard the honesty in his voice and the affection it held as well. Over time, I guess I got used to it. But I don't want to sound like some pervert, so don't get the wrong idea, alright? He says, and Rias could hear the scowl he finished the sentence with. She was speechless, never once has she seen someone do such a thing with her, or her queen for that fact. Rias was so shocked and speechless that she actually forgot that she was supposed to be getting dressed. The only articles of clothes on her were her matching black panties and bra. Shaking her head she sent out a message for Akeno and finished getting dressed. After seeing the bright glow of a magic circle from the kitchen, Rias finally spoke. You may enter, but you must know that there's another person here as well. I sent them a message and they came through the emergency exit. She explained as the doors opened. When Ichigo finally stepped into the light, Rias finally got a better chance to take in his appearance, and all she could think was that he was breathtakingly handsome. Not only is he different, but he's bloodying hot. She said to herself, unknowingly saying it between Akeno's and her connection. She learned this when she heard a surprised gasp, then the crashing of plates and cups hitting the floor. Sorry. Rias apologized for the mental connection. After a few minutes, Akeno entered the room, carrying a tray of tea for her king and the guests, her eyes instantly falling upon the sole male in the room, who was sitting beside Sona and across from her king. And when she looked at him her thoughts matched Rias. He is hot. The Ravenet then watched as the orange-haired teen stood. May I help you with that? He offered as he held out a hand. Akeno unconsciously nodded, giving him the tray. She then watched as he offered a cup to all of them, leaving himself for last, and went to pour in the tea. If there was one thing Akeno was right now it was beyond speechless. He's the complete opposite of the rest of the male body of the academy. Immediately she noticed that his eyes never left the faces of the females around him, and when he wasn't, his eyes never lingered on their chests. He's certainly a nice young man. A hot face and cool-headed attitude. He's making my heart pound just looking at him. Akeno said to herself as her cheeks were turning a bit pink. The beauty was so in thought that she never noticed that he was done. The teen never sat back down, but remained standing, which turned into a small bow. Sorry for not introducing myself. But my name is Ichigo Kurosaki, and I'll be joining you both in Rias starting tomorrow. The now named Ichigo said as he stood up straight. Rias raised to her feet and gave a tiny bow. It's nice to meet you, Ichigo. I know Sona already told you my name, but I feel it is right that I properly introduce myself as well. She then held out a hand, and Akeno watched as her king hesitated a bit. My name is Rias Gremory, and I'm the president of the Occult Research Club. Akeno then watched as Ichigo took her king's hand into his. She already had sent magic into her hands if he tried to do anything stupid to Rias. But nothing of the sort happened, which made the sadist let out a relieved sigh to herself. Looking at Rias was what shocked her, for plastered on the Gremory heiress's face was a true smile that was followed by a shocked look. The connection broke and Akeno regained her bearings and bowed. Akeno Himejima, vice president of the Occult Club. It's nice seeing a difference around here. She introduced herself and accepted the handshake, and now she knew why Rias had a smile and a shocked look. He for sure isn't normal. Breaking the contact, all three sat down. Ichigo, trying to make a good impression, allowed them to sit first. From there Sona finished what she was explaining. What I was saying, Ichigo. Is that for you to graduate, you'll need to be a part of a club. He nodded, and throughout the whole time, Akeno and Rias watched as he paid attention, never taking his attention away. I would normally happily accept you into the student council, but to be a part of it, you need to be one of these things. She brought up a pointer finger. The first is to be a part of the school for at least a year beforehand, and because this is your first time here, that option is out. The last reason is you have to be at least nominated by the principal of our academy or at least 5 or more teachers. Ichigo nodded again as he then looked toward the research club president. So you want me to be in the occult research club? He asked, looking back at her. Sona nodded and watched as he thought about it, and after a few seconds, he nodded. If it's okay with her, then I'm okay with it. Sona looked at the named girl, and it didn't even take a second for her to think about it. I would appreciate it if you joined. I don't know why, but when you are here I feel safer. That's a new feeling to me that I find comforting. She said the first part out loud with a smile, but the second part, Rias said to herself. Rias watched as the orange-haired teen nodded and said. Then I'd be welcome to join your research of the supernatural. He finished sipping his tea. Rias couldn't help but let the smile grow a bit more at that. But that smile faded when she felt it. A pull. It seems as if the time has come. She said to herself. Standing up she allowed a small fake smile to appear. Well, it was nice meeting you, Ichigo. But I just remembered I need to be somewhere. He joined her, getting to his feet. How about we continue this tomorrow evening after school? Rias watched as he nodded. That would be nice. That was all Ichigo said as he looked over to Sona. Thank you for giving me the tour, Sona. He gave a small bow, she nodded her head. Well, I also got to head out too. I just moved here and my apartment isn't going to pack itself. Sona looked at him with a raised brow. You live on your own? She asked and he nodded his head in affirmative. Do you need a ride? I can have my driver drop you off, all I'm going to need is the address. He shakes his head and pulls a pair of keys out of his pocket. Thanks for the offer, but I have my own ride. She gave a small nod, surprised to see him having a car, but also said the car was a BMW, a brand that is proven to be a middle or high-class vehicle. If that is all, I'll be going. The three demons watched as he went to leave, all of them thinking something different than the other, but all were along the lines of, he's so not normal. As they watched him leave, one by one they left the clubhouse to do their own thing, Rias going to her soon-to-be pawn, Sona, leaving to tell Tsubaki all about the new student, and Akeno leaving to her shrine needing to think about a few things, and most importantly what she could do about her new interest. Ichigo's apartment. When Ichigo entered his 3LDK apartment, he immediately went to his room and got into a shower, a cold and long shower. Ever since the visit with the kami of love and flowing things, Ichigo found himself not acting like himself. Before meeting Benzaiten, Ichigo would acknowledge the female body, but never to the extent he was now. Standing under the sprinkling water, the orange-haired teen thought over everything that happened. He knew that the three he met were demons, because not only did he read the reports about both pure blood demons and their peerages, but also by the power flowing off of them, well, one of them had something else. Ichigo could also say that they were all beautiful in their ways. Sona oddly reminded him a lot of Rukia, his first love. But of course, the love he had for the Kichiki was long gone, bitterly crushed to pieces. The Citri heiress was strict, but he could tell that she cared. Her violet eyes told him everything, which was why he could say Sona Citri was someone he could trust. Akeno, from what he could tell of their first meeting, was someone he could find a kin spirit in. She's a beauty that hides her true feelings behind a reinforced steel wall. If what the report said were true, the Himejima was the daughter of a high-ranking fallen, and she blames her holy power for her mother's death. Ichigo could truly find a kin spirit in the hybrid, and now that it's confirmed, the orange-haired teen has now made it his mission to fix the problem within her. If they were similar, then he can at least try with some more interactions. Ichigo then remembered something Amaterasu told him while reading Akeno Himejima's report. When they find out about your allegiance to us, I want you to tell Akeno Himejima that her faith and services to the cow shrine have not gone unnoticed, and that when the time comes, it will be repaid in full. She told him and he nodded, continuing reading the reports. When thinking about this, his thoughts went to what happened when he opened the door to Occult Research Club. When he opened the door, everything seemed to slow down, movement, sounds, and time itself. The only thing that didn't was standing to the side of the room, wearing nothing but a birthday suit. She was beautiful, and the only people who Ichigo could say rivaled her were Yoruichi and Nell in her adult form. She had bright crimson hair that had a cute curl at the top, which was standing straight up. Her eyes are a magnificent color of blue, but Ichigo saw something hiding deep inside of them. There was a bit of pain, a pain he knew a bit about. But he could also see so much more in those eyes. His eyes then fell onto the beauty's figure, and the only thing they did was amplify her beauty. A voluptuous body, pale, and D-cup-s. He blames Yoruichi for teaching him to tell the size of bosoms. From there everything sped back up and Ichigo did the right thing and turned around and left. Thanking whatever deity that he had allowed him to move faster before the girls noticed anything. Kiego once told him it was normal for a guy to admire a girl's beauty and figure. But the last thing he needed was for the girls who were welcoming him to suddenly think he was perving on them. The teen shook his head, sending water everywhere. What's happening to me? He asked himself as he turned off the water and exited the stand-in shower. Drying himself off, he got dressed in some decent clothes. For he has a meeting with a dragon and he'd rather not make an enemy of him. While Ichigo was about to leave, he stopped when he remembered something. Holding his hand out in front of him, he summoned his queen piece. Closing his eyes and imagining the man he wanted as his peerage queen. While they were closed, the said piece started changing colors, flickering between magenta purple and golden yellow. Opening his eyes, Ichigo then watched the piece vanish, leaving nothing but thin air in the palms of his hand. With that, Ichigo left his apartment and summoned a Garganta. Haidu residence. When the healing was all but done, the hole in his chest was filled and blood replenished enough so that it could do itself and not have the help of the king. Rias got up and quickly put on her blouse and panties. No need to spend here longer than needed, she said to herself. Rias found herself disliking her soul pawn more and more by the hour. During the healing, the pervert had a heart on and groaned out her name, which made her shiver in disturbance and her face turned green. The Crimson Beauty wanted to vomit at the idea of her being the center of his dreams. But she fought it, just allowing her magic to flow into the pond faster, hoping that this would be over sooner, and it did, which was why she was leaving now without waiting another second. Jumping out the window and flying in the direction of her home, a 2-story European-style mansion that housed her peerage. While she was flying, Rias felt her thoughts going to the scowling, yet charming orange-haired teen she met today. Ichigo Kurosaki. She said as she remembered his reaction to seeing her naked. He's not like the others, he's also not normal either. Rias remembered the feeling she got when they shook hands. His hand was unnaturally warm and held the feeling that he had a godly amount of power that could hardly be measured. I don't know what faction he's a part of, but what I do know is that he's not an enemy. But as she finished, something grew in her stomach and she continued. Or he could be hiding it and is just waiting for a moment where I'm alone. I need to be more careful around him since he's an unknown with so much energy. She said as she set her mind straight, allowing that feeling to take its hold. In the back of her mind, something was screaming for her to continue thinking about the newcomer. The beauty regained control of her thoughts as she flew into her bedroom, the door already having been opened by Koneko, who she saw leave the room. Quickly removing the 2 articles of clothes she had on, Rias got into a warm shower to wash away the muck and sweat she gained while healing the pervert. For the love of Satan, please let that be the last time healing the new red dragon bear. She shudders at the thought of being in that position again. After about 15 minutes, Rias was finished, having already thrown her laundry in the hamper and was wearing a comfortable pair of pajamas. She exited her room and went to the dining room where she found her rook and knight, but her queen was nowhere to be found. Assuming Akeno was at the shrine, Rias spoke as she sat down at the head of the table and immediately food appeared. The boosted gear has been acquired and he is healing at his home. She said and watched as the two nodded, both of them having a pained look. Knowing the reason, Rias released a sigh. I know what you are feeling, but the sacred gear he carries is powerful and we might need him. They nodded, both having started eating, and the beauty followed. Rias. The Nekomata said quietly but loud enough for the two of them to hear. Are you sure it was the right decision to recruit him as a devil? He's a pervert and with the power he has, there's no telling what he could do. Both females' faces turned blue, shivering at that. Rias hesitantly nodded and spoke. I wish it wasn't. But if he can learn to harness the power and control it correctly, Haidu could become someone that not even Riser can fight. And if I have to go to a school where I'm constantly stared at like a porno and have to marry a man who will only use me and not love me, which I know with no question, then I'd rather only have one of them and I'd rather be stared at. She finished and again her peerage members nodded. When she returned to eating, something in her mind said. But he won't be needed. You already met your new key to freedom. You only need to accept and persuade him. When it finished, he saw images of Ichigo Kurosaki. Shaking her head, she said to herself. No. He might be hiding his true intentions. I can't drop my guard just because he's good looking. He's a complete unknown and might be an enemy and will want to harm me and my loved ones when the time is right. Unknown to the king, the two peerage members saw this and worry filled them. Heaven. They're interested and are willing to help us make peace with the devils and fallen, Gabriel said as she looked at her brother Michael. To her right was her joker, Joan of Arc, and to Michael's right was his joker, Dulio Gesualdo. The two were enjoying a quiet meal with each other when the leader of their faction asked about the Shinto. They've also said that they have sent someone to Kuoh Town to take care of any threats and those that fight our peace. Gabriel watched as God's chosen nodded with a small smile. That is good to hear. That was all he said in a quiet voice. She knew that Michael was suffering from his duty as the leader of the angel faction. Nights and days go by with nothing but work to do and keeping their people calm, and leading it all was the man sitting opposite her, and through everything he has done, Michael always held a smile. Father, why did you put all your faith in Michael? Did you not see how much he's suffering because of it? Why didn't you name us co-heads of our people? Gabriel said to herself as her heart pains for her brother. The king of the House of Hearts found herself back in the current time when her leader asked a question she feared he might ask. Gabriel. I feel as if you aren't telling me everything. What else happened when you were there? What did you find that makes you fear telling me? Was the question he asked, a smile ever present on his handsome face. Besides the female seraph, the joker of the House of Hearts, side-eyed her lady. Remembering what happened when they first entered the home of the Shinto. She saw it all flash in front of her. When the light left and the view of the floating islands and the kitsunes entered their view. But what stood out was Gabriel's reaction. The seraph went stock still, and a shocked and scared look claimed her normally passive look. Joan was taken when her lady spoke, and what she said made their leader lose all positivity. I felt him, I felt the betrayer's power, the coldness it gave off at my presence. Gabriel said, sweat forming on her brows. Everyone heard the cracking of wood as the table started breaking by the pressure being put on it by Michael. There was a reason why Michael was both feared and loved. And right now it was proven why he was feared when he set foot on the battlefield during the Great War. Are you sure it was his power? The faction's leader asked, making everyone in the room shiver at his tone. Slowly her lady nodded. Was it him? And no, it wasn't him, Gabriel answered, stuttering. It was his power I felt, not him specifically. After this, it seemed as if Michael had calmed down, but the damage was already done. The walls and floors had cracks lining everywhere, and the table they were sitting, it was all but destroyed. I would like to say that there is a chance that he might have been turned into a sacred gear. Michael nodded, his fists still clenched tightly. If that is so, then it's better than him being alive. That was all he said, as he slowly stood up, Dulio pulling the chair out from under him. Make sure that information never leaves this room, and those that went with you, he stared at the holy woman behind his sister, don't speak of it to anyone. We cannot let the others know about this. Of course, brother. That was all Gabriel said as he turned to leave, Dulio following behind him. When the doors closed, the two women in the room heard a loud crack, making both of them flinch. Neither moved from their spot. We cannot let this information reach Uriel, his wings are already growing darker, and if he learns of this, we will be losing another, and Michael won't be able to take another sibling's betrayal or death. Joan nodded. Yes, my lady. That was all she said as the two remained for another few minutes before leaving. Both headed in different directions. I gotta tell Griselda to keep her mouth shut. That was all the Joker said as she raced to the chapel. Elsewhere. Ophis stared at those below her. The Cows Brigade is what they are calling themselves now. Such simpletons. Was all she said as they slowly left the room. The Infinite Dragon found that starting this whole thing was a waste of time, it didn't need them. What Ophis needed was him, the orange-haired teen, the being that felt familiar to it. Ever since the Infinite Dragon left him, its thoughts always found them going back to him. Always the memories of him claimed it, the feeling of his presence around Ophis. It was almost intoxicating to the dragon. It was also finding what was happening annoying the hell out of itself. Feelings Ophis knows not, claims the darkness known as its heart, filling the dragon with emotions that it couldn't understand. It made Ophis want him, need him and require him. With the orange-haired teen, the Infinite Dragon could finally reclaim her home. With the Shinto's god of death, Ophis could do anything she wanted. Ophis finally returned to the real world when she heard someone speak, the person obviously not knowing she was there. So he has finally awakened, Albion. The owner of the Divine Dividing said, it was followed by silence, but then chuckling. Why should I be worried? He's an absolute no one, there's nothing special about him. Again silence followed, and Ophis notices an annoyed look on Volley's face. Well, whatever. He's no threat to me, and as you saw in the past, he's probably going to use it for perversion. He started walking away, but he continued speaking. If you are that worried about him, then I'll take care of him before he becomes a threat. After that, Ophis couldn't hear what the user said. Closing its dead and emotionless eyes, Ophis summoned a portal. He's annoying. That was all she said as it stepped into the portal in the human world, more specifically in front of a store that sells sweets. I want one of those. Ophis said, looking at a big slice of cake, dreaming of the flavor it could have. Muken. In the deep darkness of Soul Society's prison, a bound and blinded man sat in a cursed chair, where he would have remained for the rest of his immortal life. This man was Sasuke Aizen, the traitorous captain and the second greatest threat to Sirte since its founding. He didn't know how long he was in here for, but he could take a random guess and say a year or so. In that year or so, Aizen has been mentally tortured by his Zanpakuto, who'd belittle him, call him names that would make him a pang. But through it all, he took it without fighting. Aizen also spent time thinking about what he did, and he'd do it all over again if he could and will do it. But he'd change a few things about how he did it. One, he'd show the boy who defeated why he's doing it. Tell Ichigo Kurosaki that the Soul Society never cared about him, and that when they are tired of him, they'd imprison him and or kill him. The second thing he'd change would be to never let Kyoka Sugetsu go. During the heat of the moment when Aizen found himself standing over the downed boy, he never knew how much he had up by letting the only thing that'd never leave him, never betray him, leave him. Release a sigh behind the bindings covering his face. Aizen closed his sealed eyes and did something that he hasn't done in his whole life. I am sorry, Kyoka Sugetsu. He said as he opened his eyes and found himself standing in the open sky of his mindscape. But what held his attention was the woman standing in front of him. The woman was of average height, had long flowing black hair, shineless amethyst eyes, and was wearing a flowery and moon-covering kimono. This was Kyoka Sugetsu, the strongest illusion-based Zanpakuto. The two stared at each other, never moving a muscle, not a twitch of any finger. The first sign of movement was from the spirit, who snorted and turned away. Like that means anything when I do not exist anymore thanks to you, she said with a snarl, her voice dripping with destiny and hate. Aizen said nothing, only staring at the only visible part of his Zanpakuto's face. Doing so, he watched as a shy tear fell from the spirit's cheek. Going to speak, Aizen was stopped when he felt a pull at his chest, sending him straight back into his prison. But what he found wasn't darkness or the feeling of bindings. What was in front of him was the darkness of the Muken, with its pale sands for the floor and an unending vastness of darkness. Looking down at himself, Aizen found himself wearing the clothes that were under all the bounds. What happened? He asked out loud. His answer came with a flash of yellow and purple in front of him. Not looking away or flinching at the bright light, Aizen found a magenta and gold-colored floating queen chess piece. Reaching out, the man grabbed it, but what happened wasn't what he was expecting. Once he held it, Aizen watched as he absorbed it, and that was when the pain hit him. Falling over, he felt excruciating burning pain around the orb in his chest. The pain then came to a sudden and quick stop. Breathing heavily, he grabbed to see if the Mjyoku was still there, and it was. But he was stopped when he watched as his trusted friend and Zanpakuto slowly grew from thin air. When everything calmed down, Aizen closed his eyes and felt in himself, and in doing so he felt the familiar power of the boy who defeated him. So Ichigo Kurosaki, what is it that you have done? He asked himself, opening his eyes. He reached out and grabbed the hilt of his Kyoka Sujetsu, and doing so filled the treacherous captain with a warmth he has missed. Ichigo released a sigh after he finished writing his name down on the board. Turning around, he spoke, introducing himself. My name is Ichigo Kurosaki, and my hair isn't dyed. Please take care of me. He finished with a slight bow. Immediately whispers filled the room, and eyes were all on him. It wasn't the same feeling as Karakura High, those stares were of fear or distrust. No, these gazes were more of interest and lust. Still, it made Ichigo uncomfortable, especially with the latter. Thank you for the introduction, Mr. Kurosaki. The teacher said, trying to get everyone's attention and failing. You may take a seat at any of the empty seats. Ichigo nodded, making his way up to one of the empty seats, the one closest to the window. Behind him, he heard the teacher trying to make everyone return to their schoolwork. Once sitting, Ichigo took out his textbook and opened it to the page he heard the English teacher say. Once everything calmed down, class went on as it normally did, with only a few looking at him and a few whispered conversations breaking the normality. Releasing a sigh, Ichigo looked out the window, enjoying the blue skies and the sight of the town in the distance. While doing so, he caught sight of a few junior highs walking to their schools. Watching them brought a thought to his mind. I should see how Yuzu and Karen are doing. The last Ichigo heard about his little sisters was Amaterasu telling him that they are training to join him. When he heard this, the only things Ichigo felt were anger, worry and fear. But after a few minutes, he couldn't help the happiness fill him at the thought of his sisters getting to know their powers. Especially when one has such strong potential to use their mother's powers, the powers of a Quincy, and interestingly enough a noble Quincy's powers. I wonder how their training is going. Ichigo asked himself, remembering the times he trained with Hat and Clogs, Tessai, and Yuruchi. Remembering these memories brought his mind back to those that betrayed him. He trained so hard for those that wronged him. I will not let their training go unpaid. I swear this. Returning to the current time, Ichigo focused on his schoolwork, ignoring the looks he was getting. Finally, Ichigo said as he stood up from his chair after the hour or so of writing he had to do. Looking around, he found that he wasn't the only one standing or planning to leave. Might as well head up to the roof. He said to himself, grabbing his phone and earpods and leaving once he had both. Reaching the roof, Ichigo enjoyed the cool breeze that came with the door opening. Closing his eyes, the hybrid took a deep breath in and out. Opening them again, Ichigo found golden yellow eyes looking at him. The owner of said eyes was a short white-haired girl. Koneko Taoju. He said to himself, remembering the document he was given. Abandoned by her only living sibling. Nekomata and Devil Hybrid. Rook of Rias Gremory's peerage. Ichigo finished as he continued to the railings, eyes following him. Leaning onto the railing, Ichigo looked around, enjoying the view. He also knew that those golden eyes hadn't left his person at all, but were now looking at his uniform instead of his face. Looking over, Ichigo watched as Koneko quickly looked away, but as he thought she couldn't resist and started side-eyeing him. Releasing a sigh, Ichigo reached into the pocket she was staring into and took out a chocolate bar, something he grabbed before coming up here. Holding it out towards the Nekomata, he said. You can have it. He watched as she stared at it, not moving an inch. Well, not really, for Ichigo watched as her nose twitched now and then. After a few seconds, Koneko finally gave a small nod and took the milk chocolate. Thank you. She said quietly and took a small bite out of the bar. Nodding, Ichigo looked away and returned to looking at the side in front of him. Doing so, he felt the Nekomata's eyes return to him. What are you? Looking back over, he gave her a small smile. How about we introduce each other? Ichigo said, holding out his hand, and continued. Ichigo Kurosaki, 3rd year, class 3A. She stared at his hand, and when she looked back up she pointed to something. Are you like them? Are you a pervert? Koneko asked, and Ichigo followed her finger to find 3 boys fighting over what he would presume was a peephole into what he could also guess was either the females' change room or washroom. Normally unlike him, Ichigo snorted and shook his head. No. No, I'm not like them, and if I'm honest I'm surprised they haven't been expelled. He finished looking back towards the white-haired girl. Are all of the boys like them? She shook her head and finally took his hand into her and spoke. Koneko Taoju. The now-named girl said, breaking the connection. Not all of them. Most just stare. They are the worst. Koneko finished and looked up at him. What are you? Ichigo let out a small laugh, and hearing a commotion going on below them, they both looked towards it, and not to their surprise the 3 perverts were being yelled at and beaten with shinace by the female kendo members. Rolling his eyes, Ichigo looked back to the white-haired girl and found her snarling at the scene as she tossed the wrapping paper from the chocolate bar away. I am someone who's trying to keep the peace in a world full of things that would drive an everyday person insane. He finally answered as he walked away, feeling her eyes on him. Waving back he spoke. Well, I'll see you later, Koneko. Akeno smiled as she watched Ichigo interact with her peerage soul rook. He was exactly what she imagined him to be to the Koneko, and by the looks the Yamamoto was giving him as he left, the Gremory Queen believes that Ichigo Kurosaki made quite the impact on the normally stoic rook. I'm telling you, Rias. The conversation going on besides the hybrid brought her focus back. The 2 conversions were Rias and Sona, the former still having mixed feelings about the orange-haired enigma, and the latter trying to convince their best friend Ichigo is different. Ichigo isn't going to rape you or anyone for that matter. If someone were to ask Akeno her opinion on what her king and best friend were doing, she would have said it was fair. Reason does she have to explain after the decades of being a walking porno for the male students and those outside? But now Akeno thinks Rias is being overly paranoid and stupid. I don't know, Sona. Rias finally spoke, eyes on her white-haired rook who was making her way to her homeroom. We don't know who he is, or his powers, or who his alliance is towards. For all we know, he could be putting up an act. Akeno watched as Sona released a frustrated and annoyed sigh. Fine. If that is what you believe, then so be it. But you and I both know that is a lie. With that, the short black-haired girl left, returning to class like everyone else was. But Sona stopped and looked back at the 2. Just give him a chance. If he is still interested in joining your club, let him. He's not like everyone else. With that, the student council president was gone, turning around a corner that led to the trio's homeroom. Akeno looked to Rias and saw a confused but also knowing look on her king. Moving to head to class, Akeno placed a hand on the crimson-haired beauty's shoulder. As much as I want to agree with you, Rias, I agree with Sona. Even though we've known him for only 2 days, he hasn't made a move or to harm us. Violet looked into blue and saw conflicting emotions. I might not have had as long a life as you, and I probably haven't been stared at as long as you, but I know how you feel, and Ichigo Kurosaki isn't one of those that give off those vibes. The hybrid watched as her best friend nodded slowly, still having inner conflict with herself. Maybe it's time to put the plan into play. Akeno said to herself, and after a simple nod and a smile, she spoke. How about this Saturday, we go to the mall and relieve yourself of the stress? For the first time in a while, Rias gave a small smile and nodded. That would be nice. She said as the 2 best friends made their way to their class. I need more underwear anyway, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to pick up some books and sweets for Koneko. What do you think Kiba likes? From there, Akeno's smile never left her face as the king and queen made their way to their already late class. Now just to invite the strawberry, was all she said as she chuckled as Rias started to get worked up for the shopping trip. And hopefully, he will say yes, because we're going to need help with carrying all of the stuff. Ichigo released a sigh as he tossed his book bag on the passenger seat. Today wasn't as bad as one would have expected, classes were as usual, and a little greeting with Koneko Taoju wasn't bad at all. But got him was sitting across 2 amazingly beautiful girls, trying to keep his blood from flowing south. Especially with what happened yesterday, also happened today with the vice president of the club this time. Curves that kick Rias out of the park, and honestly the only one who rivaled Akeno would have been the lieutenant of the 10th division, Renjiku. But what at his attention at that moment was a scar, a pale scar the size of a baseball right under her ribcage, but it didn't make Ichigo think less of the beauty, it only clarified something in the documents he was given, and it honestly amplified the beauty the black-haired hybrid had. Shaking his head, he cleared his mind of such thoughts. Damn Benzaten. He said to himself as he took off the academy's uniform blazer, ribbon, button shirt to reveal a black t-shirt, and finally the shoes. Untucking the t-shirt, Ichigo grabbed his running shoes from the backseat. Once he had everything on, he closed the door and locked it behind him, hearing the beeping for confirmation. As he left the parking lot, Ichigo went in one direction and continued, always keeping his sixth sense on alert. But the first day wasn't all bad timing or normalcy. The good news is that he wasn't only in one club, but two, the occult research club and the kendo club. Ichigo knew that joining the latter isn't the greatest option, but for the last 2 years he honestly misses the feeling of the adrenaline flowing through his veins as he fights his opponent. So maybe by joining the kendo club, he could finally release the pumped-up need to fight a good fight. Ichigo was snapped from his thoughts when he felt someone coming to him, which was followed by a familiar voice calling out from behind him. The voice also brought a small pinking to his cheeks. Ichigo. The voice repeated itself, and turning around to face the owner, he found 2 violet eyes that belonged to a certain shapely hybrid. The kendo looked no worse than when he last saw her, only 15 minutes ago, but this time she was wearing more casual clothes. Oh, thank goodness. I thought you might have left already. He watched as she stood straighter, which just made her already struggling shirt struggle even more to keep her double D bosom from popping out into the open publicity of the WORLD again, blaming a certain feline for how he could tell the sizes of boobs. If Ichigo was anyone else, he would have hoped to see them again, but thankfully the Camus, all but the kami of flowing things and love, he wasn't like that. Finding himself looking away, he fought the racing blood and the blush that wanted to claim his face. He discreetly pointed to her shirt, hoping that she understood what he meant. After a few seconds of fighting not on the 2 that were mentioned earlier, but also both Zangetsu and Lucifer, he brought his chocolate eyes back to Akeno's face, and he watched as her smile grew a bit more for what reason Ichigo didn't know. Finally getting the clog out of his throat, he asked after finally turning to her completely. Did you need me for something? She shook her head and brought her hands to the front of her, in them was her school bag. Nope. But why I wanted to ask you is if you are free Saturday morning, afternoon, and or night. Akeno asked him, her smile not faltering in the slightest. Ichigo raised a brow, hoping for more information, and thankfully the hybrid understood and continued, and what she said was surprisingly blunt and to the point. You see, Rias doesn't exactly trust you. For you came out of nowhere, have an extremely powerful presence around you, and we know nothing about you, only that you are of the supernatural, and that you are probably one of the strongest people we've met. But for Rias you are the first to treat her differently from the others who have only lusted for her. Ichigo nodded, understanding all of the reasons. They were all valid in their own rights, and even though they knew that he was of the supernatural, he wasn't going to just tell them who his loyalty is towards. Turning around he held out an arm, having been taught these lessons by not only his mother, but also the other female Camus, and Yusaka herself. Valid points, but that doesn't answer my question as to why you need me for Saturday. He didn't even need to offer to continue this conversation as they walked, for her left arm was locked with his. After a second of hesitation, they made their way to where this road led to. After about a few minutes of comfortable silence, the beauty finally spoke. I'm asking this because unlike my best friend, you don't give me the vibes of wishing harm upon us, nor have you ever looked at us like those 3 or the other male student body of the academy, and it only strengthened and proven by what you did earlier. Akeno said this as she pushed his arm further into the side of her bosom, which just brought a blush to his face. Her smile only grew at his reaction. But back to your question. I've made plans with Rias to go mall shopping that day, and I was hoping that if you could join us in such an endeavor, she might finally open up to you. Akeno watched as the taller boy nodded slowly as he led them to wherever they were going, and from the surrounding buildings, the hybrid could take a guess that they were getting closer to the restaurant area of the town. The well-endowed beauty knew that with the most popular boy and girl at their academy, there will be rumors going around that could make things difficult for both or one of them. But that wasn't where her current attention was on. What held it was what Ichigo might say. If she wants everything to go as planned, then the enigma needs to accept, and if he doesn't, well, she'll just have to think about something else. But all her cards and hands are on this succeeding. So as they continued making their way to the restaurant district, Akeno watched where they were going along, watching and waiting for his reaction. Outwardly she was calm and still had a pleasant and happy smile as she hugged Ichigo's arm, feeling the muscles under. However, inwardly she was praying to whoever will answer a demon's prayer. Smelling the aroma of delicious food, the 2 hybrids stepped into a ramen shop called Ramen Ichiraku, where they ordered seafood ramen and fried chicken ramen. The 2 were later served, and both of them had different things on their minds. Ichigo was having an inner conversation with Yusaka, who was relaying his messages to their goddess. Akeno on the other hand was once again admiring the orange-haired teen. How he has remained a virgin for so long is a mystery to her. Just as they finished, the gentleman of the 2 paying for the 2, Ichigo also finished getting the confirmation from Amaterasu. The 2 left with filled bellies, and once outside the taller of the 2 went to answer. But before a word could leave, the 2 supernatural beings felt a sadistic and evil power. Ichigo looked towards the feeling's location. There you are, you evil sack of shit. He said to himself, glaring in the direction. Ichigo dropped the glare and looked back to the beauty who was hugging his arm once again. Yes. I am available Saturday, message me the time and I'll be at the mall, but right now I need to deal with that shithead, he said, as he unhooked their arms, and in a flash, he was gone. Akeno blinked once, twice, thrice and lastly thrice. He's fast. She to herself as she looked towards the direction the malice was coming from. She wanted to follow, but the hybrid also knew that Rias and fellow peerage members might need her. So running back into the ramen shop she left a few seconds ago, Akeno went into the women's washroom and summoned a circle below her that will take her to the clubhouse. But as the red light blinded her, the demoness couldn't help but smile that Ichigo accepted the invite. Ukongai. If anyone were to tell Kukaku that she would ever see her uncle again, the current Shiba head would laugh in your face. But right now, standing only a few feet away from her chair, was the former Shiba head and former captain, Aizen Shiba. Kukaku wasn't the only one who was surprised by his sudden appearance. The whole damn household, even if it is small, was surprised. Her brother stood beside her, and Kaganehiko and Shiraganehiko stood behind the returned head of the clan. Kukaku, I can explain. Aizen said, breaking the silence of the room. But when she heard him speak, Kukaku felt a wave of boiling anger fill her. Unknown to her, her bright orange spirit pressure pulsed, sending Ganju and the two friendly giants to the ground. Cousin, please. Getting up from her sitting position, the one-armed woman summoned something that Kukaku never imagined she would again, and after so many centuries. Coming to her one hand was an unsheathed katana, blade pitch black, Suka a bright orange with black leather wrapped around it, and last but not least the Tsuba being a reversed swastika. Kukaku watched as Aizen unsheathed his Zanpakuto, deflecting the attack, but the shockwave shook the room. Cracks appear along the ground and walls around them, showing that she wasn't holding back, and it was proven when her uncle took a step back. Gritting her teeth, the current head placed more pressure on the attack. But the only sign that he was affected was what happened earlier. You have gotten better, cousin. He said, and Kukaku felt him pushing back. Captain level and you have the rare kind of shikai. The man gave a small smile, and finally, the current Shiba head backed off. I can finally see where my son got his unique shikai form. Kukaku felt anger fill her at the mention of her cousin's name. If the one-armed woman believed what she was told by Yuruchi, then the man had no right to call Ichigo or Yuzu and Karen his children. But what happened next stopped the woman from feeling such anger. Aizen shook his head from his thoughts and brought his sword arm to his side and looked at the family he abandoned 2 decades or so ago. I want to help Ichigo. The former head said, as he lowered in Gutsu. I have no right to call Ichigo my son after the last 18 months, and it's worse for my daughters. Having all but abandoned them. A small sad smile dawned on his face at a memory. I honestly believe Ichigo, their older brother, is more of a father to them now. The former captain and head of the Shiba family tightened his grip on his handle, remembering the feeling he got months ago. Both of them, Karen and Yuzu, unlocked their power without him, their father, to help them to reach their potential. However, that didn't mean Aizen wasn't proud of his daughters. He was incredibly proud of Karen and Yuzu for finally unlocking what both he and Masaki gave them respectively. But then that horrid memory came to mind, and Aizen shivered at the feeling he got. It was the final straw for him, having to watch as Karen, the outspoken daughter she was, had bloodied her hands with the death of Shukuro Tsukishima and later that same day had to puke her guts out. Aizen should have been there for her, but all he would have gotten was shoved away, and rightfully so after everything he did. Thankfully and not thankfully, most of the Fullbringers were brought to the Ruken district where they were taken by the Shinigamis and hopefully tortured. The only ones that remained were a magenta-haired girl who allied herself with Kisuke and his group and was the one who told them where her former group was, and the other was the dead body of the man Karen killed. Snapping out of the memory, Aizen looked at his cousin with determination. However, even though I haven't been the best of fathers for them, that doesn't mean I can't be one now. His brown eyes shined as he spoke. Help me put the Shiba clan back into the power our clan once held, and damn those who deny us, for we are the children of Tsukiyomi. Kukaku lowered her Zanpakuto as she heard the ending. Unlike the rest of the noble families, the Shibas never forgot their connection to their creators. However, as time went on and as those forgot about their connection to the gods, the Shiba clan was forced to relinquish by the order of the false king and his puppet of a council. But they never forgot, that information was instead passed down from head to heir, and the only reason Kukaku learned of this was because of the letter the man in front of her left her after his disappearance. So there was only one thought going through her mind as her brother looked confused at the mention of the moon kami. So it's true, the gods no kamis are real and are our creators. Kukaku said to herself as she looked to the ground. Seconds went by as the former and current heads stood in front of each other. Breaking the silence and her trance of staring at the floor, the one-armed beauty looked to her uncle. We can never forgive you for abandoning us, but most importantly for abandoning your children. It's the Shiba clan saying, and you broke it twice. Kukaku watched as a pained look flew across Aizen's face, but he nodded in understanding. But if I go along with you, what is your plan to bring our family back to power and hurt those that harmed our family? When the current head of the Shiba clan got her answer, it was not what she was expecting. Out of everything that went through her mind, what Isin said wasn't one of them, and it wasn't even a thought. Isin grinned and answered. It's simple. We'll bring the gods here, and they will pass judgment on those that wronged and betrayed them. The gale that old man has to suddenly demand an audience from us. A voice spat out behind a barrier, one that hid the man's upper face, but allowed those to see his mouth. We are the king's voice and his council, and to think he has the right to summon us. A few of those in the grand hall of the central 46 main compound nodded in agreement behind their own barriers. But the others who disagreed already knew what might come with this meeting. One of those was none other than the former head of the Kichiki clan, Ginrei Kichiki, who on some peaceful days would sit with his son, who would tell him that putting the bounty on Ichigo Kurosaki was a mistake. The old man also agreed with Byakuya, what they did was stupid, all the substitute Shinigami did was help them even when he didn't have to. Ginrei. The voice to his left spoke up, drawing the former clan head's attention. What do you think this will be about? The voice belonged to the elder of the Uruchi clan, his skin bronze and hair purple, the singular look of the clan. I am getting a bad feeling about this, and any time this has happened was with a substitute Shinigami. Ginrei went to speak but was stopped when laughter filled the hall. Are you seriously worried about that brat, Yasunari? You are a fool to believe he is dangerous to us. The voice from earlier spoke. The brat is done for, with that Soifan girl and the 12th division captain looking for him, he will be dead by the next moon. The doors to the grand hall opened, and when everyone looked to find the old man there, they gasped out in fear as a shiver went down their spine. For coming towards them wasn't the old man that led the current Gate 13, but standing in his place was the man in his prime who led the early Gate. His absurdly long white beard is gone, and in its place is a well-groomed black mustache, with black hair where there was once only a bald head with scars. The captain commander wasn't hunched over leaning onto a walking stick, the once walking stick was now at his side in its based form Zanpakuto. Seeing this made everyone who was there remember the days of old, but they weren't the only ones it seems. Behind the Youthinist Jinrikisai Shijikuni Yamamoto were 3 other captains, 2 looked surprised, one was hiding it after years of hiding her true self and identity, and the other had his eyes wide open. And the last hid his eyes behind his straw hat, but everyone saw the look of utter terror. Ginrei was the first in the hall to break his stare and spoke. Captain Commander. His voice brought those closest to him back to reality. Those red eyes flew to his section, and he audibly gulped. Why you wanted a meeting with us? The young founder gave a sharp nod. Speak and tell us what it is that you want. What came shocked all in the room, and all the members of Central 46 shot to their feet. Drop the charges at Ichigo Kurosaki and all those who worked to help him. His red eyes opened and everyone felt the room heat up. Or meet your end by my sword and flames. He said as he unsheathed the legendary Zanpakuto of his, flickers of fire coming off the blade. Town. Are you sure this is where it came from? Rias asked her queen as they appeared in front of a house the peerage room recognized. This is where that sinister energy came from. Her best friend nodded. It is Rias, I'm sure of it, Akeno said, having only told Rias half the truth, not mentioning that she was with the orange-haired teen. She also knew that Rias knew she wasn't telling her the full truth about what happened. The crimson-haired king nodded as she looked at the plain home, feeling nothing coming from it, nor the energy they all felt a few minutes ago. So why are we here? The sole pawn of the Gremory peerage asked, looking bored. Those that knew inwardly gagged as they all knew that if the pervert wasn't with them, he'd be with his friends perving on some girl somewhere else. Rolling her eyes with disgust, Rias ignored the question. Everyone keep their guard up and watch each other's backs. And no matter what, don't leave the group. Those smart enough nodded and prepared themselves. Rias a lip and a small smile and nodded. Opening the door, the Gremory peerage felt the contents of their stomach rise as the second their king opened the door, the smell of iron and blood filled all of their nostrils, making the brown-haired pawn retch, and his lunch found itself on the ground outside the door. Bringing a hand up to her nose, Rias and Akeno continued, and what they found horrified them. Everywhere on every surface, walls, ceilings, stairs, everywhere was blood and body parts. Hearing a groan from the living, the 2 she-devils went in, their power flowing into their palms, and what they found made both of them stop their flow of magic. Standing in the center of the room was none other than Ichigo Kurosaki, a sword in hand holding it at the neck of a blonde-haired girl who was dressed as a nun. And impaled on the wall was a silver-haired man who had a black arrow, which looked as if it was made with energy neither have seen before, which was keeping him up on the wall. Looking at him, Rias and Akeno found the man's hand was crimson from the blood, claiming him as the one who did this. Looking at the person in the center of the room, Rias went to speak, but the pawn spoke first as he charged at the armed man. Get the hell away from her, you bastard. He yelled, shocking those in the room. But what happened next shocked both king and queen. In a flash of yellow, Ichigo was gone, making Issei stumble over and land in a pool of blood. Wow. He was cut off when he felt something on his back. "I suggest you don't do that again," he said, placing the edge of his sword the pervert's neck, and Akeno felt her core warm at the tone he was using. It was demanding and cold. Rias released a sigh and stepped toward the two. "From the looks of it, you weren't the one who did this." She gestured to the room around them, the blood and body parts. The crimson-haired beauty was expecting many things, but when those honey-brown eyes landed on her, Rias wasn't prepared for the flutter of butterflies in her belly, nor the warming of her cheeks. "Why am I acting like this?" Rias screamed to herself and looked away and back to her surroundings. "I only got here like a few minutes before you and your group did." His voice snapped her back to looking at him, her emotions a bit back under her control. Rias watched as Ichigo lowered his blade from Issei's throat, who went to check on the blonde nun and asked if she was okay, which shocked those that knew him. "When I arrived, I found that bastard hatching away on the daughter upstairs." Everyone watched as his eyes flashed yellow, with a familiar colored aura that flared around him, which surprisingly warmed both king and queen to the core. Koneko, who was making her way upstairs to check, also stopped when she felt the warm and welcoming feeling. It reminded the white-haired Nekomata of when her sister was still with her, the cuddles that kept them warm after they were tortured. "Sorry about that," Ichigo spoke, bringing all three of the she-devils back to reality. "After finding him, I tossed him down the stairs and questioned him." The orange-haired hybrid watched as his fellow kendo member went to the dead silver-haired man. When he refused to answer them, he brought his hand up, the one that held the sword that wasn't there anymore. "I killed him." Rias nodded, looking towards Kiba, who had checked the impaled man to see if Ichigo was telling the truth. "Nothing wrong with being sure," she said to herself. Getting a nod from her soul knight, the Gremory heiress looked to the orange-haired teen. "Thank you for avenging them." She didn't have to explain who she was talking about, but as Rias bowed, it was returned with a bow of his head. "Just doing my job," Ichigo said as he placed his hands into his pockets. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have a date." "You have a date to prepare for in a few days," he said as he went to leave, but as he made his way he thought back to what he said and his eyes widened and his face turned into his namesake's meaning. Akeno giggled at his reaction, but inwardly she was excited at what she heard. "Oh, he's so cute." Feeling the need to tease the orange-haired teen, the raven-haired queen hid her mouth behind her hand. "Ara, what do we have here?" she said, watching as the target of his tease looked at her with a raised brow. "Our strawberry has a date after a few days of being in this town. How lucky. Ichigo blushed at her comment and raised a brow, wondering what she was talking about, since the date was with both herself and the crimson-haired beauty beside her. Looking into her eyes, the hybrid got his answer. She wants to keep it a secret from Rias. Feeling a grin grow on his face and a bit of mischievous flow through him, the orange-haired teen looked at her and said, "Well, maybe next time you might be the lucky lady to have a date with yours truly." He finished with a wink, and within seconds he was gone. In the blood-covered house, the members of the Gremory peerage, with an unknown +1, slowly recovered from the instant disappearance of the orange-haired teen and looked to their black-haired she-devil, who has remained completely still after his words. Rias walked towards her queen and waved a hand in front of her eyes. "Akeno." Earth to Akeno. No response, and after a few minutes of nothing, Akeno finally moved in the form of a blink and a magic circle appearing below her, and in a matter of seconds, she was gone. After that, the group slowly returned home. Asia Argento, the nun who they learned the name of from the pawn, returned to the church, and little did the group know that they would be at that church in a few days' time. Days later, a distance away from the destroyed church, a seething and enraged form of a one-armed fallen angel was leaning a tree and cursing her vocal cords out, cursing those that fought her and wronged her. The only reason she survived that disgusting freak was because of sheer dumbing luck and knowing ancient magic that sacrificed a body part to see oneself. But unknown to Rainer was that only a few feet away from her was someone else. Stepping out of the shadow of the trees, Ichigo stepped into the fallen's eyesight. "Who the are you?" she yelled as she clutched the stump of her arm, blood slowly stopping as the healing took in and started falling as she leaned into the tree. "Who I am doesn't matter to you," he said as he stepped closer to the slowly collapsing woman, his eyes solely on her maddening and crazy violet eyes. Looking down on the sitting fallen, he dropped to be eye to eye with her. "But who I am a part of? That is something you should know." Holding out his hand, he sent some of his powers into it. A green glow enveloped his hand and his target. Seeing the glow, Rainer felt her body lightening, and seeing an opening, she went to summon a holy spear. But that quickly turned out to be pointless for the instant. The bright flash of her summoning her species' signature weapon, she stopped, for out of the orange-haired teen's back were 16 leathery demonic wings, but what stopped her was the black of all darkness, flames flowing off of them. Ichigo nodded as her eyes widened at the sight of his wings, but even though she tried to kill him, he didn't stop the healing. Now that I have your attention and that I don't see any reason for you to try and attack me, I'll continue. He dropped the kaido when he didn't see the stop growing into an arm, but just closing the opening. Dropping his arm and continued. I won't tell you who I work for, but what I will tell you is that we care about the three biblical factions finally making peace. Rainer returned to the current world and glared at him. You might be asking why don't I just kill you then? Well, it's simple. He leaned in until he was beside her ear and whispered. We still have use for you. Hearing this, the one-armed fallen angel felt a burning rage fill her. I am no one's play she yelled out, but was stopped when a hand covered her eyes, and in a matter of seconds Rainer fell unconscious and mumbled the last of it. THNG. When everything went loose and relaxed, Ichigo removed his hand to find the violet eyes hidden behind closed eyelids. Ichigo removed his jacket and put it around the fast asleep fallen, and once zipped up, and she was fully covered, well minus the leggings and thigh, hybrid lifted Rainer into a bridal carry. Flicking his wrist, the sound of ripping sounded area they are, and after a few seconds the two that were once there were gone, and in their place were trees and bloodstains. Akeno, Rias called out as they stood outside of the mall. What is it that you are waiting for, and why are we waiting? She finished as she looked at her best friend, who was beside her with her purse. The crimson-haired king took another second to take in what Akeno was wearing, and the only thing going through Ria's mind was. She looks as if she's going on a date. Indeed, Akeno looked as if she was going on a date, wearing a black long-sleeved shirt, one that had an open in the middle, which revealed a bit of cleavage and a bit of a crimson-red bra. The hybrid was also wearing tight blue jeans and black Chelsea boots. Finishing her look was a necklace, earrings and hair in a ponytail. But Rias wasn't one to talk about what she was wearing. A long-sleeved semi-transparent blouse that gave the slight show of her black bra. She was wearing black pants that flared at the bottom, and with them were a pair of ankle boots. He should be here any minute now. Rias were what brought the named woman back to reality, and the crimson beauty nodded. But after a few seconds of analyzing what Akeno said, Ria's eyes widened. And here he comes now. Looking towards the direction her queen's eyes were facing, she spotted the signature bright orange hair of a certain someone. As Rias watched, she couldn't help but allow a small blush to come to her cheeks or the fluttering of butterflies in her belly. Ichigo Kurosaki was making his way towards them, with his hair held back in a half bun. He was wearing a plain black t-shirt, which showed he was wearing a necklace that consisted of a rope and a long ruby. Think of Naruto's necklace, before it got destroyed by six-tailed Naruto during the pain fight. Over the shirt was a white short kimono jacket with grey lining along the edges, and for pants, the orange-haired teen had relaxed fit trousers. To finish the look off were brown chukkas. Akeno held back a chuckle when she spotted the reddish outline of a punch on his right cheek. I wonder how he got that. She asked herself as the target of her thoughts stopped in front of her and Rias. Rias. He bowed his head in greeting and then looked to her, and Akeno saw only a slight look at her cleavage, and instead of mistrust filling her, the queen smiled inwardly and outwardly. He's not gay. Thank the almighty masses. She said, doing a jumping fist pump in her mind. He's available for the taking for Rias and all of us. Akeno's smile faltered when his handsome face grew a grin. Well, it seems like our date came sooner than you expected, Akeno. She felt her core warm at what he said, but then her smile returned when a blush grew on Ichigo's face. It seems it did. Was all the raven-haired girl said. That was when she felt the stare from her best friend. Looking over to Rias, Akeno grinned when she saw the blush. Oh Rias, I should have told you that I also invited our strawberry to help us. As the two had an inner conversation, Ichigo watched with a slight smile that gave him a small flinch. Remembering the pain, the orange-haired teen remembered the cause of it and what he will be returning to his apartment to. Ichigo released a sigh as he got out of the stand-up shower. Drying himself off, the hybrid exited the washroom, leaving his towel to dry out on a rack, his thoughts on what he was just told, something to do with his father returning to the Soul Society and summoning the gods. But the reason his mind was there was to keep himself away from thinking about what was coming. A date, something he keeps telling himself that wasn't just that, with two very new women in his life. With him so in thought, Ichigo didn't hear or feel the uninvited guests entering his room. Those guests were Yoruichi Shihoin, who had a grin at seeing his dong, Tatsuki Arizawa, who stopped herself from saying anything, and Yuzu and Karen Kurosaki, the latter's face exploded into red, and the former looking at his dong with a questioning look. Yoruichi, noticing and knowing the other's reaction, spoke, drawing the orange-haired teen's attention, whose eyes immediately went to them. Oh it seems our strawberry has more than we thought. The dark-skinned beauty then placed her arm around her third student's shoulder and leaned down and whispered. Imagine how it could feel inside you. I can, and it's min breaking. Tatsuki's face blew up, steam coming out of her ears, and her face went so red that it almost shone so bright that the surroundings started to reflect the light. But under her clothes her core started warming up, her nipples started getting hard, and small moisture started appearing on her panties. Ichigo sounded out, breaking the silence and making the twins return to reality as Karen's face turned red and Yuzu covered hers. Both then turned to leave as their older brother stared at the two women. I can explain. Tatsuki in the meantime was able to calm down and regain control of herself, minus her core blush. As the black-haired tomboy stared at her best friend, an annoyed vein popped on her forehead. Ichigo, she stopped and looked up at him, her face filled with embarrassment and anger. You idiot. Within a span of a few seconds, the tomboy threw a right hook that collided with his cheek, but because of the little control of her emotions, the punch was enhanced by her power, which ended up breaking Ichigo's cheekbone and sending him unconscious. That was a few minutes ago, and when Ichigo left, the apartment was empty. Not a sign that his best friend, teacher or siblings were anywhere. But also remembering that also brought a smile to the orange-haired teen's face. He was finally able to see them all, something he had planned on doing eventually. Ichigo. He snapped back when he heard his name being called. Looking towards the owner, he found Rias, surprisingly, to be honest, looking at him. What were you just thinking and what happened to your face? Suspicion was the major feeling he got from her question, but behind it was also worry and curiosity. Smiling, he answered as he pulled out his phone. I had unexpected visitors this morning in the form of my sisters, sensei, and best friend. He showed them his home screen, which showed all of them. And when I say unexpected, I meant it, for they came into my room when I was naked, which led to this. Akeno chuckled at what he told them. Well, hopefully, they forgive you. She said and watched as he nodded. The black-haired girl looked back to his phone, her eyes being drawn to it so she could get to know him more. Your sisters look adorable, I must say. The beauty looked back to the soul male and saw a smile that warmed her to the core. They are, aren't they? He finished as he turned the phone off and placed it into his pocket. Well, what's the plan? Rias nodded, agreeing with him as she also looked at the black-haired girl. Akeno smiled and answered. Well, first we have to find something to eat. The two nodded in agreement and off they went to a brunch restaurant. As they went about their date, the hours went by, and Akeno noticed after eating lunch and having a conversation with Ichigo, Rias started relaxing around him, smiling more and opening up to their orange-haired date. The two she-devils also learned that, even though he didn't show it that much, Ichigo Kurosaki didn't have a peaceful life full of happiness, but a life that had its downs. After lunch, the three went to the bookstore in the mall, where Ichigo learned that Rias was an otaku like none other. Having spent most of her time there in the manga and light novel section, while Akeno and himself found peace in other things, the latter finding himself trying to find more Shakespeare books and the former spending her time in the smutty states romance section. When they were done, they all had a small bag that held one or two of their chosen books manga. From there they talked and walked, Ichigo getting a lot of the questions, and thankfully he answered most of them, only leaving out the ones about what he is and who his alliance was to. When they stopped, the trio found themselves standing in front of a bubble tea store. Rias and Akeno wanted something to drink, and Ichigo was willing to sacrifice some of his money. The three went in and made their order. When they were done ordering, the crimson-haired beauty excused herself to the washroom. While Akeno and Ichigo waited, the two couldn't help but smile, the former because this was the first time in a long time she saw Rias having this much fun, and the latter because he was happy to be doing something good. Once their order was finished, the she-devil grabbed her drink and was about to grab her best friend's drink, but was beaten by Ichigo, who was carrying his own and Rias. They quickly found a spot to sit and wait for their crimson-haired date, neither starting their drink. As they waited, Ichigo found this the best time to ask some questions about the absent beauty. So Rias is a full-blown otaku. Akeno chuckled with a nod. How am I not surprised? He smiled as he remembered the few times the three went by a heavily Japanese store. If I remember correctly, Rias originally lived in Europe, am I right? The orange-haired watched as the beauty nodded. All the pureblood demons came from Britain, France, or Germany. She answered with her smile, having left during her explanation. You should also know that they also age remarkably slower than normal humans or peerage-made devils. So Rias might look like she's 18, but her actual age is something not even I know. Ichigo nodded, already having expected such a thing. Thank you for informing me, he said with a light nod of his head. The smile returned to the beauty, and she said, don't mention it. Her smile turned into a mischievous one. Now back to the topic of Rias and being an otaku. As Ichigo learned and Akeno enjoyed embarrassing her king, Rias was finished. Flushing the toilet and moving to wash her hands, she took a bit of time to examine herself in the mirror. She was smiling. Rias hasn't stopped smiling since this all started, and the muscles that kept her smiling were hurting. Looking down at her wet hands, the beauty's smile grew. So this is how it feels to have fun, she said to herself as she then thought about the orange-haired enigma. Maybe I was wrong about him, maybe he is different, and that Akeno and Sona were right. Rias jumped a little when a knock came on the door. Anyone in there? An unfamiliar voice spoke out. Shaking her head, Rias dried her hands and unlocked and left the washroom. Sorry. She said as she looked at the person who spoke. The woman looked familiar, but the beauty couldn't remember where. She was about a foot taller than her, with dark brown skin and long purple hair which was held back in a ponytail. But most of all her eyes were feline in a way, being a beautiful yellowy bronze. The person was also wearing revealing clothes, and from how the shirt had two protrusions, she wasn't wearing a bra. Rias looked back to the unknown woman's face and saw her grinning. Don't worry about it. But when you are thinking about a boy it's better to do it at home. She winked and patted the crimson-haired beauty on the shoulder. Watching the woman enter the washroom, Rias thought she heard laughter from inside, but the she-devil wasn't focused on that. Her face blew up, almost matching the color of her crimson hair. No. Gremory, get it together. She said to herself as Rias shook her head. That was not what I was doing. Her blush slowly vanished, and only a light pink remained. But deeper in the back of her mind she was planning on doing that later. Making her way back to the bubble tea store, the beauty quickly found her friend sitting at a table waiting for her, neither having touched their drinks. When she got closer Rias heard what Akeno was saying. You should see her room. The sadist said, noticing her king making her way toward them. She has posters of Mount Fuji, every shrine and whole loads of mangas and an anime. Her grin grew as she got to the best part. But the best part is, she has a Nico-made outfit. When Akeno finished Rias was at the table with a blush and opposite her, Ichigo had a minor blush. Looking over to her king the Gremory queen acted like she just noticed the crimson-haired beauty. Ah. Rias you're back. Akeno said with full surprise as she stood up. We were just talking about you. Her best friend nodded slowly looking over to the sole male of the three. Ria's blue eyes watched his honey brown filled with realization. It was nothing too personal just about your hobbies and your likes. His eyes then flew to the black-haired beauty. I honestly don't even know where that came from. Akeno stuck out her tongue and winked. Anyway, let's get back to our date. She said loudly, making those around them look at the trio. The males were filled with jealousy, and the females were just surprised. Ichigo released a tired sigh as he flopped down onto a couch outside of the store, he and the two she-devils exited. Please no more. He said to himself as he relaxed into the welcoming and comfortable chair. The orange-haired teen never expected himself to hate and enjoy shopping all at once, but somehow he did. After buying boba tea the three supernatural beings went from shop to shop, buying and looking at things that caught their attention, and most of all they talked. Learning more about each other, well mainly for Rias and Akeno to learn more about him, but that didn't mean Ichigo didn't learn anything new about the two beauties. Like how Rias loved squishmallows and had a bit of a collection back at home, along with what Akeno said when they were at the boba shop while waiting for Rias to come. Ichigo didn't only see Rias looking at anime and mangas alike, but also saw the crimson beauty looking at a few maid outfits when she believed him not looking and was busy with Akeno. But Ichigo also learned that she misses her home in Germany, having seen her staring at calendars that had pictures of the country, but also that she brought a few things from her homeland. Ichigo blushed at what he learned about the Gremory queen. The beauty had hobbies and among them, Ichigo learned that Akeno was like her king, but instead of squishmallows, Akeno collected perfume and jewelry. However, the information that made him blush was that the sadist was experimental, and a total switch Ichigo once again curses a smug feline for teaching him this stuff. After going from store to store for hours, they took a break, which is where they were now. Akeno and Rias giggled as they talked to each other about what they bought, and Ichigo collapsed into a couch after placing all the bags onto an opposite couch. Opening his eyes, the orange-haired teen looked at his watch to read the time. 4 hours. I don't think I can keep this up. He said to himself as he closed his eyes once more. After a few minutes he sat up and looked at the two beautiful women. He said. So where to now? Ichigo asked them with a hint of hoping this would be over. However, when he watched as Akeno's happy and joy-filled smile changed to that of a lustrous and mischievous smile, he shivered at what she might have planned. What have I done? Oh, we have one more shop to go to if you don't mind. The raven-haired beauty said as she stood up, bringing Rias with her. Releasing a sigh once more, Ichigo got to his feet and grabbed the bags, and with them in hand, he followed Akeno to the final store of the day. When they reached the store Rias had a blush that matched her hair, while Ichigo looked shocked with a bite of embarrassment in his look, and lastly, Akeno was grinning from ear to ear as she looked at the on-display underwear and toys. Turning to them, the sadist looked at them with a raised brow. Well, aren't you coming? It was Ria's idea to come here, she needed new underwear, and after looking around I did as well. Hooking her arm with Ichigo's and showing an unknown amount of strength, began pulling him along. I need your help with picking out a few. Rias watched as the two entered, and she couldn't help but curse and thank her best friend for this. Thankful that she took the soul male with her and cursed her for bringing them here. But once both were out of sight the Gremory king entered the lingerie store and spent a few minutes looking for underwear she would enjoy. With more than a handful of sets of underwear, she entered the changing room and began testing them out. Looking into the mirror she did a bit of posing and smiling. I wonder if he'd enjoy seeing me in these. Rias asked herself out of nowhere. However, unknown to the crimson-haired beauty was that not only was Akeno on the other side of the door with Ichigo, but she also said it through the peerage link. So when her queen's voice came in the form of a response, Rias jumped. Oh, I know he will. Within a span of a few seconds, Rias turned around towards the door, where instead of a door she found a smiling Akeno and pushed a wide-eyed Ichigo Kurosaki into the changing room. Which led the orange-haired enigma to crash into Rias and send them the gourd. With the two of them in there, Akeno giggled and closed the door. Pools of sapphire blue looked into pools of honey brown as the two allowed the silence to consume them. But as Rias looked into those handsome eyes, she felt herself being pulled into them, and what she felt and saw amazed her. She could explain what she saw, but what she felt was a comfortable warmth, as if she was being hugged by her parents when she was younger. Rias blinked, and that was when reality came back to her, and from the looks she was getting from the person above her, it also came back for him. Looking down, Rias with her blushing face found that Ichigo was groping her and had a leg between her thighs. The crimson beauty's blush exploded after seeing this. He is touching her, but not once did she feel anger or betrayed. Ichigo followed her eyes and looked down and saw the sight the person below him did, and just like herself, his blush grew at the sight. Rias was wearing lacy crimson-red lingerie, however, even with the fabric in his way, Ichigo could feel her heart beating. Realizing that he was staring and was doing something, he removed his hand from then got to his feet and looked away. I'm sorry and I swear to you that I didn't know this was going to happen. He said with his hand outstretched, offering to help the downed she-devil, who after a few short seconds took it. Once Rias was on her feet, Ichigo looked back at her and asked. Did I hurt you by any chance, and are you hurt anywhere? Rias shook her head in response, and he looked away and went to leave, but as he did a knocking came followed by a voice. Dear, are you okay? We heard a commotion. Ichigo looked over to the half-naked beauty and watched as she looked at him, blue and brown connecting. I'm alright thank you, I just tripped. Was all the person needed to hear, and both of them heard as she left. Rias watched as the enigma nodded in thanks for not ratting him out, and as he went to leave, leaving the crimson beauty to continue where she left off. However, before he could, Rias without thinking reached out and grabbed the cuff of his shirt, stopping him in his tracks. Never once did she expect to say the words that came out of her mouth as he looked back at her with a questioning look. Please stay here with me, Rias said as their eyes once again connected, and after a minute that felt like hours, Ichigo nodded and took a seat on the bench, and like the gentleman he was, his brown eyes looked away from her, allowing her privacy. The crimson beauty didn't know why she had asked him to stay, but what Rias did know was that she wanted him here. So looking away she looked at herself in the mirror and began to take the underwear off. As she went to unclasp the bra, Rias felt a biting pain and hissed, gaining the other occupant of the room. From the look on his face from the reflection in the mirror, Rias could only assume that something did happen when they fell. But if that were the case, then why haven't her demonic powers healed it yet? Before Rias could go further into questioning it, she watched as Ichigo got to his feet and stood behind him. Without much thinking she sent some of her power into her hands, ready to use it if needed. But what followed made all of the tension in Rias' body leave, as a comforting and positive warmth went through her body. Looking back she found the orange-haired teen's hand glowing a mint green. Looking towards the mirror, Rias was shocked to find a smile on her face, along with a light pinking of her cheeks. She was enjoying his company. Yes, they'd barely spoken, but his presence made Rias realize that she was an idiot in not believing Akeno or Sona. Ichigo Kurosaki was completely different from the other males at her school and in her life. Placing a hand over her left, she felt her heart racing, which made her smile grow bigger, just a bit, but it was there. After a few minutes the pleasant feeling of Ichigo's magic or whatever it is left her body, making her release and groan at the loss of the moment. Looking at him through the reflection, Rias watched as he turned to take a seat, but just before he could she spoke. Thank you, I don't know what you did, but thank you. She said with a voice so unlike her, and Rias watched as he nodded and went to continue, but she stopped him as she took a hold of her hair, revealing her back. Can you help with unclasping this? Ichigo looked at the mirror and her face in the reflection and noticed for the first time since he met the Princess of Destruction that she held a real smile on her face. One that didn't feel fake or forced, nor was it that sad smile Ichigo often saw her wear. Nodding, he went to stand behind her and unclasped the bra, his fingers running along her smooth milky skin, and his appendages ran along Ria's back. The girl shivered at the feeling. Ichigo then took a step back, but just as many other times, he was stopped by a small and soft hand grabbing his own. "And can't I be open with you?" was all Rias said as she pulled him closer. Looking into the mirror, Ichigo found her eyes looking at him, and he nodded. "You make me feel weird," she said as her hold on his hand tightened slightly. You came out of nowhere too damn perfect and you treated me like no other man has ever done, minus my brother, father, and Kiba. Ichigo nodded in understanding but didn't speak knowing that she had more, but what came next was shocking. With a final gentle pull from the Crimson Beauty, Ichigo found himself standing directly behind her. But the shocking thing was where she placed his hand. Yes, it was hesitant and her hands were shaking the whole time, but when Rias placed his hand on her waist, Ichigo saw the smile she wore when she did it. Removing the arm that was blocking his view of her nipples, Rias grabbed his free hand and continued, his eyes looking into her eyes as she spoke. I don't know why or how, but I enjoy your touch. Her smile then faltered as her hand squeezed his, and a determined look entered her eyes. I am betrothed, and the man I'm betrothed to is another asshole who treats women like playthings. A scowl appeared on Ichigo's face at that news, and from this reaction, he watched as a smile dawned on Ria's beautiful face. The reason I'm telling you this is that you are the complete opposite and because I want your help to hopefully cancel this scam of a betrothal. After saying those words, Ria's eyes widened. Why did I say that? She asked herself as she looked at Ichigo through the mirror and saw a confused look. Turning around, the Crimson Beauty looked up, not caring that her bosoms were bare to his eyes and not through the reflection of the mirror. Aye. She stopped when Ichigo gave her a small smile and said, I don't know how much I can do, but I will talk to my superiors if we could help you. Rias slowly nodded, surprised that he responded to it. However, when the enigma backed up, removing his hand from hers, she felt an emptiness when their connection broke. Now if you'll excuse me, I believe you need to get dressed. He said as he opened the door and left, leaving the Crimson Beauty to her lonesome. Once the door was closed, Rias leaned onto the mirror and breathed, not noticing that she wasn't breathing since he let go of her hand. Closing her eyes, Rias allowed a smile to appear and through their peerage link, she spoke to her queen. Thank you, Akeno. Unknown to the Gremory King was that her queen was in the booth beside her, having listened into the whole thing. Akeno was smiling after hearing everything. She did the right thing, and she also knew that sooner or later she will have to pay for what she did, but for now, she was overjoyed that Rias has allowed this change to happen. Ichigo's apartment. Days have gone by since the day at the mall, and honestly what came out of it was for the best. Immediately following, everyone could see the change Rias had towards Ichigo. Where there were once cold shoulders and suspicion, there were now laughter and openness. There were also times when the two could be seen talking and enjoying each other's company when they were alone. However, that wasn't all that happened since then. On this fine Wednesday afternoon, the orange-haired hybrid found 4 more occupants in his apartment. Those occupants were his sisters, best friend and teacher. After the last time they met, a memory that made Ichigo shiver, still remembering the feeling of Tatsuki's fist colliding with his cheek. But that wasn't what they were here for. After being told about what has happened and what will happen, Ichigo nodded and accepted the change that would come. Yuzu, Karen. He said as his eyes landed on his little sisters. You'll both be staying here with me. Both twins nodded with a smile. I have a room prepared for you both, but if you want your own rooms, I can also do with that. Karen and Yuzu shook their heads at that, but the former was the one to take the initiative and spoke first. We don't mind, Ichigo. We've shared a room for most of our lives, why not another year or so? Yuzu nodded in agreement with her sister. After hearing this, Ichigo nodded and continued. For education, you will both be going to Kuoh Academy. But for their benefit, you'll both wait until the next semester to begin. He looked at the calendar and continued. Which should be in 3 or 4 weeks. In the meantime, you can explore and get to know the town a bit more, and you both have my number, so if you want to pick up, I'm a call away. Seeing the smiles on their faces, the hybrid looked at the last 2 occupants and groaned at the grin. Yurichi war. I suggest you two buy an apartment and move into it. Don't worry about the renter shit, I'll just put it onto mine. Both nodded, but when Yurichi went to speak, probably something that will piss him off, Ichigo cut her off. Also, if I see your pearly ass around my apartment in human or cat form without permission, I'll throw you out the window. At that, he pointed to the floor to ceiling opening window, and to his delight, the matcha-skinned beauty shivered and lost her grin. Everyone else laughed at the reaction, and Ichigo couldn't help but smile, missing the sounds of his sister's laughter and the joy on his best friend's face. Ichigo watched with a smile at what was happening before him, and as he did so, the spirit of his demonic powers spoke. Ichigo, they are all fitting for peerage members. That was all the spirit said and left, allowing Ichigo to think about what he said. After a few minutes, the orange-haired teen nodded and leaned forward, gaining everyone's attention once more. You should all know that there is a reason as to why I am here, and the reason I have that reason is for you all to learn about later. They looked confused at his words, but nodded, allowing him to continue. But what I will tell you is that I have another power. Finishing, Ichigo summoned his wings, making all of those in the room look at them with wide and flabbergasted expressions. Retracting them, Ichigo watched as his sensei blinked a few times as realization began to appear in her golden yellow eyes. This power is the power of demons and devils, Ichigo said as he continued bringing 3 of the 4 occupants back to reality. It also gives me the ability to make those willing to hold the same power as them. With this Ichigo summoned 4 of his chess pieces, a knight, a rook and 2 pawns. The catch is that I'm your king and we will have a connection through it, so no matter where you are, I will know where that place is, and we can have conversations through said connection. Getting to his feet, Ichigo grabbed the chess pieces and walked towards them, placing the knight before his sensei, a rook before Tatsuki, and when it came to the pawns, he got to his knees and brought his sisters into a hug. I am so proud of both of you. He said with a smile, feeling them relaxing and placing their arms around him as well. When I first heard about you both unlocking your powers, I was worried shitless, imagining what could happen to you. But after a few days, I am so proud to hear that you both became what you were meant to be. Pushing away, he looked into their dark gray and soft brown eyes and smiled. I also promise you that I will help and train you in any way I can. Both twins nodded, their eyes never leaving him as he went back to his feet and went to leave. Once he had his shoes on, he looked back at them and said, "If you are willing to join my peerage, just place your hand over the pieces." He said this, grabbed his school bag and left. Without hesitation, all 4 occupants went to grab the offered pieces, and they all watched as their bodies absorbed them. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow the KurosakiLucifer for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.